Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the chosen one, golden boy, slayer of Voldemort, boy who wouldn't die, and 100 other names the media had given him, sat at the bar of a nondescript Muggle pub outside of London. Kinda, really, outside of London. He nursed a scotch as he stared blankly at the wall behind the bar, completely ambivalent to the people around him. He was here to avoid other wizards and witches, to lose himself in the drink and his depressing thoughts. Unwelcome thoughts, usually the prominent one being how alone he'd been for the last 7 years. He shuddered, and his eyes teared up as he remembered stumbling into the castle's great hall after Voldemort disintegrated on the morning wind, and seeing the Weasley clan gathered around 2 bodies. Molly Weasley, matriarch and mother of 7 flame-haired children, laying in repose next to the youngest of those children, and Harry's girlfriend, Ginny. They stood outside the pub and looked in the window. They were all pretty sure the dark-haired figure at the bar was who they were looking for, and the tallest of the 3 started for the door. "Stop," one of the others said. "Do you want him to run again? Let me go in." The other 2 exchanged glances and then looked back at her, nodding reluctantly. Harry had completely broken down when the reality set in. He'd seen her moments before the confrontation with Voldemort, and she was fine. What he was told later hurt his heart more than anything he'd gone through. Molly had pulled Ginny out of the way of a killing curse fired by Bellatrix Lestrange, only to be hit by it herself. Attempting to avenge her mother, Ginny had killed Lestrange, but was caught by a killing curse from 2 other Death Eaters. She sauntered into the bar, checked her coat at the door, and took a moment to look at herself in the entryway's mirror. The silver and black dress had just a hint of sparkles and hugged her shapely curves well, ending just at mid-thigh. Dark hose followed her legs down to silver and black high heels. She tucked her clutch purse under her arm and weaved her way through the patrons to the bar, giving icy glares to any man that turned to ogle her. The seat next to him was empty. She just needed to wait for the right moment. Harry grabbed a bar napkin and mopped at the tear tracks on his face, forcing himself to stop crying. 7 years, and nobody he'd found could take her place. The pain and the memories were still just as fresh. Oh, he'd tried. Merlin knows he'd tried. He'd dated several other girls, including Hermione at one point during a spat she was having with Ron, but although they enjoyed each other's company, when they kissed there was no passion. Harry had resolved that he'd be alone until he died. Perhaps that was best, he'd thought. In fact, even better to remove himself from that world entirely. He'd quit his job as Auror and disappeared after Ron and Hermione's wedding. As he lifted his glass to take another sip, someone grabbed his shoulder to balance themselves as they sat on the empty stool next to him, causing his arm to move and spill his drink. "Oh, so sorry there. Let me get you another one, and thanks for the leg up," a warm, decidedly female voice said. He turned his head to decline and looked into a set of deep brown eyes set in a porcelain-skinned face framed by obsidian black hair. A familiar face with that slightly upturned nose and calculating cast to her eyebrows. "Parkinson," he said, surprised. "Perfect timing as always," she thought to herself. "Potter, fuck, if I'd known it was you, I wouldn't have sat here, much less offered to fix the drink," Pansy Parkinson said spitefully. "It's okay," Harry replied. "I can get my own." "No need to be charitable." She rolled her eyes. "For Merlin's sake, it was my fault. I'll get you another one." He concedes and grabs some napkins to wipe off where the liquor spilled on his arm. She rolls her eyes again and surreptitiously casts a drying charm. "You do still know how to do magic, Potter," she says derisively. "We're in a Muggle pub, Parkinson," he whispers harshly. "I'm trying to be discreet." "Oh," she responds, taken aback a little. "You're right, that's why I'm in here. Wait." "Why are you in here?" she demands, arching one perfectly formed eyebrow at him. He sighed. "Same thing," and drained what was left of his drink. He tried to ignore her presence while the bartender brought another scotch for him and the vodka martini she had requested, but it was difficult. He could ignore the Muggles, he'd had lots of practice at that. But someone he once knew, the very girl who'd tried to turn him over to Voldemort during the battle. At that thought, Ginny's lifeless body laying there intruded on his memory. He shook his head hard to get the thought out. She saw the emotions play out over his face and knew he was thinking of the Weasley girl. Was that the reason he left? Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it for the moment. She needed to get him to verbalize. They sat in silence for a moment, then she nudged him with an elbow. "Come on, Potter, catch me up on your sordid secrets, your impassioned affairs, your deep, dark, and dirties." She looked at him from the corner of her eye as she sipped her martini. "Let's grab a table and talk." He blinked in surprise, but then shrugged. Sure, I guess, if there's anything to talk about. Although I guess you'd be just a ligh dead to hear about me being miserable. Harry looked at the bartender and nodded his head at an empty corner table. The bartender looked, nodded in response, and pointed at a short blonde waitress. Harry nodded in reply and led Pansy over to the table. He looked around carefully and pulled his wand from his sleeve, murmuring muffliato. There, nobody can hear us here so we can talk freely. What do you want, Parkinson? Pansy chuckled. Same as you, I expect. Trying to hide away from the wizards and witches. She sneered a little at him. Trying to hide from your fame, I expect. She waited till his glass was at his lips. Or are you trying to spread the greatness that is Harry the Chosen One Potter to the Muggle women? She dove to the side to avoid the spray of scotch that spewed from his mouth as he reacted. She laughed at being able to predict his reaction so. As he grabbed a napkin and wiped off his mouth, she chuckled and leaned back in her chair. With his attention focused on cleaning up, she slipped her cell phone out of her purse and shot off a quick text message. He caught her, though, putting the phone back in her purse. What was that? He asked, frowning. He's here. Give me a few to find out why. We'll reply soon, Pansy sent to Hermione. Pansy raised one elegant eyebrow and chuckled. Just checking my email, Potter. We may be wizards, but this is the modern age and I have a business to run, making sure my fabric order will be here on time. She unlocked the screen to read the reply, swiped it to oblivion as well as her initial message, and then locked the screen again. Now, you didn't answer my question, she trails off, lifting one eyebrow elegantly. He's there. Great. Let us know when we can come in, the response said. Harry frowned, not completely convinced that was business-related, but shrugged in response to her. Avoiding everyone, mainly, have been for a while now. He took a sip of his drink, now that his nose had cleared enough to do so. Quit my job as an Auror a couple years back and moved out here. Tired of the fame and fortune, as you put it, since I couldn't take 2 steps or have a meal without someone interrupting me. We need this, we need that. Can we have an autograph? My sister is just lovely and you should come over for dinner. Oh, look, it's the name of the week. He spat the last sentences out with disgust. Her eyebrow dropped a little. This was not exactly the Harry she expected to find. She'd always thought he was an arrogant son of a bitch, and as he first started talking, that didn't change. But as he spoke, she realized it wasn't that at all. He really, truly didn't want the attention. This was a wrinkle in the plan. Laughing under his breath, he took another swig of the scotch, emptying the glass. He waved at the little blonde waitress and mouthed the word bottle. She nodded and immediately brought over a full bottle of scotch and a clean glass. Here you go, sir, she said brightly and turned to Pansy. Can I get you anything, miss? Pansy blinked. She'd never seen a common barmaid this efficient, but replied, another vodka martini, please. Harry spoke up, Snow Queen, please, and the girl nodded and dashed off, returning a moment later with Pansy's drink and an insulated tumbler full as well. Harry thanked her and she left the area for other tables. He looked over at Pansy and saw her left eyebrow declaring war on her hairline. What? It's the top shelf here. I do know this about you, Parkinson. You don't accept less than the best. Go ahead, try it. He's ordering 25-year-old scotch, and one of the 5 best vodkas in the world that I would not have thought they'd have in a place like this, and that girl sure is hopping to it for him. This gets curiouser and curiouser, she thought to herself. Need to make them wait longer. There's something going on here that she needed to figure out before Smarty Pants and her idiot husband burst in here and spooked them. I know what Snow Queen vodka is, Potter. I assume you're picking up the tab then. She took a sip and closed her eyes as the liquor spilled back over her tongue and down her throat, cooling and then warming as it went. My, that is excellent, she admitted. Pulling out a cigar cutter, Harry expertly sliced the foil off his bottle of scotch and pried the cork out. She watched quietly as this seemed very ritualistic. Harry sniffed the end of the cork deeply and closed his eyes. Perfect, he breathed out. He set the cork down on the table and took the bottle by the neck. Swirling it around, he the deep amber liquor into his glass. His movements were slow, fluid, and purposeful, and she watched in amazement as the liquid flowed into the glass in a circular wave. Harry tilted the bottle up and set it on the table. As the scotch came to a standstill in the glass, she could see it was a perfect 2 fingers deep. Impressive, Potter, she said as quietly as she could. He lifted the glass up and inhaled deeply, then took a sip. He opened his eyes and smiled at her. Thanks, and she realized he had not opened his eyes since he sniffed the cork. She found herself well and truly impressed. She cleared her throat and took a sip of her own drink. So you've abandoned the wizarding world and run away to live the life of a drunk amongst the Muggles, she asked. He shook his head. Yes and no. I didn't turn my back on them. If I'm needed, I'll be back. I keep my ear to the ground, and I'm no drunk. I just have time now to appreciate the craft that goes into these bottles. She snorted and looked away. Her phone buzzed and she picked it up, read the message, and rolled her eyes. She replied quickly and then deleted both again, tossing the phone in her purse. Well, I'm sure as the heir of 2 houses you can afford to get your Hunter S. Thompson on. He blinked at her. Frowning, she said, American author. You really should have read more than spell books, Potter. Can we come in now? We need to see him. The text from Hermione read. Pansy sent back, go back to the hotel, much more going on than we know, we'll update you later, promise. She picked up the food menu from the table. How's the food in this shithole? She asked. She did not notice the crease in his forehead or the intake of breath at her words. She widened her eyes a little at the menu list. There are no prices on a bar menu, that's highly irregular, Harry smirked. If you want dinner, we should go upstairs. Is he coming on to me? I'd never have thought THAT would happen. Pansy blinked. Upstairs, is there a restaurant up there? Something like that, Harry replied with a sly smile. I'll show you. She knew she shouldn't, but something pulled her. There was more to this story. He stood up and picked up their glasses, the bottle of scotch and tumbler of martini. He deftly put them on the serving tray that the blonde waitress handed him without his asking and balanced them on one hand. Shall we? He indicated a hallway leading to a heavy wood door. Pansy nodded. Sure, why not live a little? She stood and tugged down on her dress where it had ridden up while sitting, smoothing any wrinkles out of the soft fabric. She picked up her purse and tucked it under her arm and started walking. Unconsciously, her gait became a slow strut as she walked ahead of him to the door. When they reached it, she looked demurely over her shoulder at him. He reached over with his wand and waved the door open, then held it for her. Behind the door was a small office and a spiral metal staircase. Up the stairs. I promise I won't sneak a look up your dress, he chuckled. As if you could stop yourself, Potter. I have fantastic legs. She started up the staircase, her contrariness causing her to climb quickly. She stepped off the top step to another door, which opened in response to a word from below her. She stepped through the door and stopped. The entire upper floor of the building stretched out in front of her, an austere but tastefully decorated open-plan flat. A kitchen made up the area to her left. In front of her was a small dining table with chairs, and beyond that was a couple of chairs and a sofa, all distressed leather. A translucent glass wall framed one corner, the only wall she could see inside the apartment. Everything was done in dark wood colors with occasional bright splotches of color. A vase here, a painting on the wall here, silver trim glinting in the soft light. I am carrying our drinks, you know, Harry spoke from behind her, snapping her out of the spell she'd found herself in. She quickly stepped away from the door and he walked through and set the tray on the bar by the kitchen. My humble abode, he said, bowing and sweeping an arm around. He blushed slightly. Sorry for any mess, I haven't really had much time to clean lately. He flicked his wand at a dark area off to the right and she caught a glimpse of a sock as it disappeared into a closet. You live here, she said, incredulous. I guess you didn't go off to live the life of the lush after all. Nice place. Bit sparse, but that actually suits you, I think. She almost, but not quite, stumbled over the words. Thanks, he said as he walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. He started pulling out various ingredients, laying them out in a row on the counter. He reached into a cabinet and pulled out a stack of small bowls, laying them out in a row also. What are you doing? She asked. Cooking, he responded. Do you like Asian food? She nodded mutely. Harry Potter, the golden boy, was cooking. And not with magic, she realized, as he finished washing off vegetables and pulled out a very sharp-looking chef's knife. She watched, fascinated, as he quickly and efficiently chopped and diced things, sliding the chopped pieces off the knife blade into the small bowls. She blinked, shook herself out of the daze again. What on earth was getting to her like this? She grabbed her glass and took a deep pull from it, then refilled it from the tumbler and sat down on a stool to watch Harry cook. Cook this dish often, do you? She asked, since he had no recipe book open. Nope, first time. He said as he deftly peeled some prawns and flicked the tails into a trash bin with the tip of his knife. He stopped and looked up. Are you allergic to anything? Shellfish, peanuts? She shook her head again, not sure she could find the voice to talk right now. She had come here with a purpose, but now she was confused. She pulled her purse up to the counter by her and pulled her phone out. She sent another text, getting an almost immediate response. She sent her own reply, hitting the buttons on the screen a little forcefully, then caught Harry looking at her. She felt a flush creep up her neck and turned the phone off and tossed it in her bag. There. No more interruptions, promise, but why are you doing this, and why do you live over a crappy Muggle bar? He lives upstairs over the bar, nice flat, we're talking. I'll update you when I can. She sent. The response came back and she knew Ron had sent it, not Hermione. Oi you slutthrin, you better not be shagging him. We're coming in. She responded quickly. No, 1, I am not. 2, I told you something is not right here. Let me find out what's going on, turning phone off. Stay in the hotel. Harry shrugged as he went back to preparing the ingredients. I like to cook. It focuses me and it's nice to create something instead of destroying it. And I actually enjoy cooking by hand much more than by magic. It helps settle me. I do as little magic as possible nowadays. As for this crappy Muggle bar, I'm sure you can find better ways to insult me. I worked hard on that place. He turned away from her and grabbed a pan. Setting it on the stove and flicking the knob to light the gas, he missed her mouth dropping open. She quickly closed it, as looking like a fish was not becoming. Wait, you own the bar, Harry nodded. Entire building, actually. He added some oil to the pan and swirled it around. Bar downstairs on this side, other side is a small hotel. The bar's kitchen serves food for both the bar and the hotel's room service. He looked over at her astounded face and grinned. It was the first full smile she had seen on her face since she'd found him at the bar. It was honest and open. No, Pansy, she thought to herself. You are not going to fall for Harry freakin' Potter, no matter how cute that smile is. Or that he can cook, or that he owns a building and serves top-shelf liquor. No. Harry began tossing ingredients into the pan. The sizzling sounds jerked her out of her thoughts, only for her to lose herself in his motions. First into the pan went the onions and carrots, and he expertly flipped them up and around in the pan. The motion of the pan never stopped as he continued to add different things over the next few minutes. Amazing aromas started tickling at her nose, ginger and onion, and something spicy she couldn't quite identify. The aromas began to fuse together into something she knew, before even trying it, was going to be the best meal she'd ever tasted. And she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Parkinson, grab some plates from the cabinet over there, Harry asked. Parkinson? This is not the Harry I came here to find. He's supposed to be possessed or imperiused or a captive somewhere, not living a happy bachelor life over a bar in a building he owns. What in Merlin's name is going on here? So lost in her thought and watching him cook, she didn't hear him call her name several times. Pansy! The shout of her name brought her back out of her mental tangent again. That was more times in the last hour than she'd gotten lost in thought over the last year. But Harry was looking at her concernedly. Where'd you go? Geez, Pansy, if you don't want to get some plates, that's fine, but this is going to burn. She blushed again. Sorry, I was lost in thought. Wait, had he called her Pansy? He never called her Pansy. Where are the plates? Harry pointed, and she walked over and pulled 2 from the cabinet, setting them down on bar. Silverware, she asked. Top drawer just to your right there, he indicated with a hip as he turned from the stove with the pan full of their dinner and dished it out on the plates, then set the pan back on an unused burner. Carefully checking that the stove was off, he turned and picked up the plates, carrying them over to the dining table. Pansy followed with silverware and napkins she'd found on the counter, and Harry brought their drinks over. Sit, enjoy, he said, as he followed his own advice. Pansy looked down at the plate of colorful food. It smelled incredible, and she just knew it was going to taste even better. She almost didn't want to eat it in case she was wrong, or more so in case she was right. She looked at him carefully and then took a careful bite. She held it in her mouth for a minute as she chewed and then swallowed. Merlin's left nut, Harry, this is amazing. He blushed and grinned, and she realized she'd just called him Harry, not Potter. This was so not going how she intended it, but all the same, she was starting to feel okay about that. She made short work of the food, and as she scraped up the last bits of sauce with the last piece of prawn, she stopped and looked at him. Wait, when did you make a sauce? He just grinned back at her. Harry stood, picked up their plates and carried them into the kitchen, placing them in the sink. He refilled their glasses and walked over to the couch. He took his wand out and waved it at the fireplace, and sat down as the flames rose up and crackled. She stood from her chair and looked around the apartment again. Everything was still the same, but the more she looked, the more insight she had into the man that Harry Potter had become. She had to admit to herself, this is not what she had expected to find. She realized he had taken her glass to the couch with him, so she tugged her dress down again and walked over. She stumbled a bit as she stepped onto the thick rug that formed the sitting area, so she leaned on the end of the couch, lifting first one foot, then the other, slipping off the high heels and set them down on the floor along with her purse. She walked over and stood in front of the fireplace to let the warmth sink into her skin, and her attention was caught by something on the mantelpiece. Robbed of the height advantage the heels gave her, she stood on her tiptoes to see what it was. This rug has to be worth £1,000, she thought. The furniture is high quality too, but he doesn't have much expensive art and he's certainly not wearing expensive clothes. For all that I know he's rich, he's obviously careful about what he spends the money on. It's a piece of the basilisk's jaw from the Chamber of Secrets at Hogwarts, Harry said, as he appraised her slender form outlined by the firelight. He didn't know why, but his former enemy had intrigued him tonight. She had been alternately dismissive and engaging, and he wasn't sure what she was up to. About 5.5 feet, the smartest part of his brain said. He smiled. He wasn't as tall as most wizards were, so he did tend to gravitate for the shorter girls lately. "Stop staring at my ass, Potter," she said, feeling his gaze on her. "I mean, I don't blame you. I have a spectacular ass." She spun on her tiptoes and then sank down gracefully onto her heels. "I have a spectacular everything, but now that you're caught, you can stop looking." She wanted him to look at her, she realized. He smirked at her and took a sip of his scotch. He let his gaze fall on the fire and lost himself in thought. "Potter," she asked, and he looked up at her and shook his head. "Thoughts," he responded. "Just thoughts. You showing up tonight brought some things out I'd been hiding." She strolled over to the sofa languidly, and pulling one leg up underneath her, dropped onto the cushion next to him. Her glass in one hand, she shifted so she was facing him and pulled her other hand up to support her head as she looked at him in the firelight. "Do tell, I love a good dirty secret." He snorted a laugh. How did that awkward, scruffy-haired teenage boy turn out so bloody handsome and thoughtful? "No dirty secrets, just," he sighed and turned to look at her. "Why are you here, Pansy? You clearly knew I was here. Why were you, of all people, looking for me?" "Who says I was looking for you, Potter? I came into the bar tonight to drink copious amounts of liquor and have my way with some fit dunderhead that I could throw out later. Doesn't that make more sense?" she said, noticing the twitch when she said his last name. His eyes caught hers, and in the firelight they seemed to dance. "Then why are you up here with me?" "Because I'm not a dunderhead, and you're clearly not having your way with me." Pansy blushed. Harry blinked. She actually blushed. Up her neck and full onto her cheeks, her alabaster skin turning a shade of red that could not be blamed on the fire. "No, you are not a dunderhead, Potter. Annoying, arrogant, but not a dunderhead." "Blushing? I'm actually blushing for Harry Potter. Great. I'm done for now." Admitting it to herself didn't make it any easier. She took a sip of her drink and tossed her hair to the side. Full of himself, thinking he can bring the nice lady up to his pad over the bar, get her drunk and have his way with her, Sorry, Potter. Totally going to let you. Totally not going to happen. Harry looked at her in the firelight, really just looked at her for the first time. In school she had been cute, but she had really grown up to become a beautiful woman. What was once called a pug nose had grown out, or she'd had work done. Either way, it had become just slightly turned up at the end, and he found it adorable. Her long raven black hair glinted in the warm light and contrasted perfectly with her smooth alabaster skin. She was still short, but she had a slender and graceful neck, and he could see just a hint of her collarbones inside the collar of her dress. And that dress, it left little to the imagination. What was hidden, though, was intriguing. He missed Ginny horribly, but he was still alive. The girl, no, the woman, on his sofa was a stunning beauty, and he was pretty sure she was flirting with him. His gaze landed on the line of her thigh and the curve of her calf where it was tucked against it. Her dress had ridden high when she sat down, and he had to admit to himself she was right. She had a spectacular everything. "Come on, Potter," she thought, watching him appraise her from head to toe while outwardly smirking at him. "Make your move. You know you want to." Harry let his gaze travel back up to her face and saw her smirk, but her eyes told a different story, and he decided that two could play at this game. He pushed up from the couch and walked over to the kitchen, refilling his glass. "So, what business are you in, Parkinson? I gather it's something to do with clothing. Are you a designer?" Her jaw dropped as he walked away from her and stared. She heard his question and gathered her wits about her to answer. "Yes, I have a boutique in London. I always did enjoy designing clothing. This dress is one of my line. Do you like it?" Did I completely misread him? No, I never misread a man. Wait. He's playing the game. Harry Potter is playing the game. My, he really has grown up, and with a quickness. Harry turned and walked back over to the sitting area and leaned against the fireplace mantel. It's a beautiful dress, Parkinson. He had to try very hard not to smile. Fits you quite well, but your business. It's getting rather late now, you should probably head home. I imagine if you're looking for some Muggle stallion, you can find one downstairs if you must. She blinked at him and almost stammered her response, but controlled herself in time and said, I suppose you're right, Potter. She slid to her feet in a smooth motion and walked over towards him, her hand reaching up towards his cheek, to place the empty martini glass on the mantel behind him. She let her pinky finger brush his shoulder as she pulled her hand back. It was good to see you again, Potter. I might have to come back sometime, now that I know this place is here and it's not exactly what it appears to be. Oh, he's gotten good at this. And he hasn't mentioned Hermione or Ron once, except in passing. That bothered her. Those three were inseparable. There was much more going on here than any of them thought, and the others were not going to be happy when she showed up without Harry with her. She stretched languidly, then tugged her dress down again, making the motion slow and deliberate, and turned to stride over to her shoes. She slipped them on and then knelt to pick up her purse. Here's my card, she said, pulling out one that actually said she was a clothing designer. Look me up if you're ever in West London. She dropped the card on the end table and went back downstairs. Harry's eyes followed her every move. He didn't move from where he was standing because walking would have been, well, a bit difficult at the moment. Good night, Parkinson, he said, his voice a bit husky. She walked from the stairs to the coat room and retrieved hers. She checked to make sure he wasn't behind her before she walked out the door and then struck off into the night. She made several turns, stopped, listened, and watched the snow for footprints. He may have an invisibility cloak, but that doesn't hide where he's been, only where he is. After she was certain he was not following her, she sat down on a snow-covered bench in the park and thought. She analyzed every moment, movement, word and phrase spoken. After a long time, she thought she knew what happened. Rising from the bench and ignoring her wet dress, Pansy made her way to the hotel Hermione and Ron were in. She walked up 2 flights of stairs and knocked on the door. Hermione opened the door and grabbed her wrist, pulling her inside quickly and slammed the door behind her. Where is he, Pansy? You were supposed to bring him back with you, Hermione said urgently. Pansy held up a hand. If you'll give me a damn minute, I'll explain to you. I think this is a delicate situation and you can't just waltz in there, give him a hug and a smile, and bring him back into the world he left, Granger. Or you, Weasley. She kicked her shoes off and walked into the adjoining room, coming back wearing fleece sleeping pants and an old sweatshirt. Stop standing and staring at me. We know where he is. He's not going to disappear between now and tomorrow, geez. Sit down. I will tell you what happened. Pansy recounted the events, and what Harry had said. Well, most of it almost word for word. By the time she had gotten to Harry taking her up to his flat for dinner, Hermione had gotten very quiet, and by the time she recounted leaving Harry's flat, even Ron had caught on to the seriousness. When she finished recounting the story, she said, That's not the Harry who disappeared almost 3 years ago. She held up her hand. No, Ron, he is not under anyone's control and he's not possessed. I can promise you that. He has simply changed. He's grown up without you, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Taking a deep breath, knowing she was about to tread on a bad subject, Harry has known someone who died, or almost died, almost every year since he entered our world. In several cases, he was the one who killed them. Some of the people he was closest to. Sirius, Ginny, your mother, Ron, you know he saw her as his adopted mum. Those deaths hit him deep, deep inside. She closed her eyes. He thinks Ginny was what pushed him over the edge. I think it was that little girl he found on his last Auror case. Hermione's hand flew up to her mouth as she realized what Pansy meant. Ron stared at them both, completely oblivious. What girl? Hermione looked at Pansy and nodded, turning to Ron to tell him the story. She sat next to him on the end of the bed and took his hands in hers. Trying hard to avoid her lecture voice, she spoke softly. Ron, Harry's last case as an Auror before he left without a trace was about a missing 8-year-old girl. A half-blood, already showing signs of magic. She was taken from her home late one night, and the parents were beside themselves. Harry found her after only a few days of searching. Hermione closed her eyes as the memory took her and the tears started. She'd been taken by a werewolf, and there was not much left. The other Aurors he called in for backup arrived, and found a vaguely man-shaped impact hole, covered in blood, in a nearby wall, and Harry holding the torn remains of that little girl in his lap, crying. Opening her eyes, she looked at him. Love, the little girl was the spitting image of Ginny at that age. Ron Weasley wasn't always the quickest to grasp the meaning of something, but this time he figured it out pretty quickly. And having finally gotten over Ginny dying years before, I see. He relapsed, or I guess broke. Is Harry broken? He looked at Hermione with concern. That's what I have to find out, Pansy said softly. I don't think he is. He's still got that fire in him he did back at school, but I don't know how much of our world he can handle right now. He uses magic minimally, and he only briefly mentioned school when we were talking. It's like he's left that part of his life behind and filled it with the business. He uses magic for little things, and he has a few mementos in his flat, but nothing major, nothing big. I need to sleep and think on how to proceed. Remember why you hired me, Granger Weasley. You need someone who can get to him that won't send him running again. Do not try to approach him until I give you the okay. She stood up and headed for her room. Ron bristled. We may have left most of our hate behind us, Parkinson, but I won't forget you're a Slytherin to the core. How do we know you won't corrupt him? Ron, Hermione gasped. Shut up. Listen to your wife, Weasley. I'm going to sleep. Good night. Pansy walked into the adjoining room and shut the door behind her. Hermione glared at Ron, her arms crossed on her chest. You know she's the best choice for this, Ronald. We wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for her. If she had ulterior motives, she didn't have to bring us along. Neither of us expected her to find him this fast. She's really good at what she does, and if she went behind our backs, her reputation would be ruined. Ronald sighed and rubbed the back of his neck with his hand. I guess you're right, Myone, but something about her rubs me the wrong way, and I'm worried about Harry. I'm really happy to find out he's not dead. He's even in the same building as us right now. I just want to run over there and drag him back to our world. He frowned. But then, that's everything Dumbledore would have done, innit? Have a secret plan, drag Harry along without giving him any explanation or chance to choose, and that's why Harry turned away from him in the end and went his own way. No, we can't do that. That would make things even worse. Hermione smiled brightly and pulled Ron's face down to hers for a kiss. And that, Ronald Weasley, is one of the reasons I love you. Eventually, you see through to the truth of things. Now, here's what I think. We need to let Pansy handle this. She found him. He's obviously set down roots here, so he's not going to disappear on a whim. But if we poke at him, he may go to ground somewhere else. We should back off and let her bring him to us, like we originally agreed. But, Ron began before she laid a finger on his lips to hush him. No buts, Ron. Tomorrow we go home to the kids. I'm sure Tonks and Remus would like a break from all of them for a while. Pansy will stay or go as Pansy does, and it may take time, but she'll figure out a solution. If she can't do it in, say, a month, then we swoop in like knights on shining broomsticks. Okay. Nodding, Ron agreed. Tomorrow, you say. He looked around at the well-appointed hotel room. Well, as long as we're here and have the bed to ourselves. He turned a wicked grin on his beautiful wife and leaned down to kiss her. Oi, muffle that. Will you? I'm trying to sleep here, sounded from the next room, and Ron and Hermione laughed against each other's lips. Hermione cast Muffliato at the shared door and took her husband to bed. Harry stood by the fire a few minutes longer, until his glass was empty. He walked over to the tray he'd brought up and drained the martini mixings as well. He took everything downstairs to the bar and put the bottle of scotch in its appropriate spot. He realized the pub was more than half empty and looked at the clock. It was barely midnight. What happened? He asked the bartender. Anthony grinned. You took that hot little number upstairs with you earlier, and half the women in this place started swearing. Some of them grabbed other guys and left, some just left. When she came back down half an hour ago and left, that look on her face, half the guys hanging around almost cried and left shortly after. Who was that? Harry shrugged. An old friend from school. Anthony laughed. Well, you and your old friend, I think, are going to be directly responsible for a rash of births come October. Harry rolled his eyes. If you say so. Well, go ahead and shut it down for the night, Anthony. And let the kitchen know we won't be opening for lunch tomorrow, but I want something very special for dinner tomorrow night. His eyes fell on a small blonde-haired woman sitting at the end of the bar, and how she leaned away from the person sitting next to her. Anthony turned and walked over, said something to the guy who paid his tab and left. The girl looked up from her book at Anthony, and her eyes shone brightly at him. Harry murmured to his manager, let the girl stay after if she wants. Help her. He paused. Give her room 8. I think it's unoccupied, and it's a corner room in the back by an exit. Anthony nodded. Already planned on it, boss. Harry nodded and clapped the man on the shoulder. heading back upstairs. Hearing the empathic wizard as his bar manager was one of the primary reasons the pub was so profitable. Not only an empath, but a skilled bartender with skills of flair, and he didn't even use magic most of the time and mixology. Anthony handled bar patrons in a way no other bartender in the country could. "Last call, everybody." Harry heard from behind him, and then a soft, "No, you stay as long as you need to, love." Pansy walked into her room, shut the door, and sighed heavily. This job was going to be a lot more difficult than she had thought. Sure, just find Potter, grab him up and drop him off at the burrow and be done with it. Easy enough. But no, Potter had to go and get interesting and mysterious. She walked over to the bed and slid under the covers. Through the thin wall, she heard Ron and Hermione working their way through the logic, and then Ron's not-too-veiled suggestion. She yelled for them to muffle it, and heard the blessed silence of the charm hit the wall. She snuggled down into the warm, comfortable bed and decided she would work out a new plan in the morning. For now, she wanted sleep. She slept fitfully that night, tossing and turning. Her dreams were filled with firelight dancing in green eyes, mussed-up brown hair, the hint of chest hair at a collar. She dreamed of muscles and flying and the tip of a tattoo, and being kissed in front of a roaring fire. She woke finally in the morning, her heart racing and her skin flushed. She pushed up out of the tangle of covers and turned, sitting on the edge of the bed. The morning sun shone in through the crack of a curtain, and she lifted her face to its warmth. She didn't know how she was going to handle Harry Potter, but she knew she was going to try. Harry slept uneasily that night as well, his dreams punctuated by pale skin, curves of black and silver, languid chocolate eyes and ruby lips. He woke, finding himself twisted in the blankets and sheets of his bed, and worked on extricating himself. Getting up, he stretched and padded into the bathroom to take a long, cold shower. Later, as he sat in a robe and shorts at the kitchen bar, eating breakfast and reading the morning Times, he read the same paragraph 4 times over as he thought about Pansy. Sure, she might show back up in his bar, but he knew how the game was played. The next move was his. He looked over and saw her card and pulled it over to him. Parkinson Boutique and Design was printed in elegant type across the top of the card. Her name, proprietor, below it with an address and phone number. The beginnings of an idea blossomed in his mind. He would make the next move, all right, and she wouldn't see it coming. Pansy showered, dressed in designer jeans, knee-high black boots, and another oversized sweater. She had ordered breakfast from room service, and it arrived right as she was putting the finishing touches on her makeup. She opened the door for the waiter to bring in her tray, and he efficiently divvied the plates out onto the small tabletop and poured coffee and juice for her. "Is there anything else I can get you, miss?" he said politely, and she shook her head. "This is perfect, thank you." She handed him a tip and closed the door behind him. As she sat down to eat, she started going through various scenarios in her head and talking out loud. "Potter won't make the next move. He's trying to play the game, but I bet he'll be one of the wait-and-see players. He'll wait for me to come back to his bar because coming to me would be too forward." She munched on toast and bacon and said aloud, "He was right about one thing for sure. This food is phenomenal." When she was done, she looked at her notebook where she'd made 4 columns of notes. Each column was a cause and effect list that she predicted would happen based on what the next move was and who made it, ranked from most likely to least likely. She nodded, satisfied she'd determined the possible outcomes. "I'll start with the most likely, of course, and go back tonight for dinner. Tell him that I had a consult in the area, and since he was such a gentleman, I decided to impose upon him for dinner again. Perfect." She smiled then, a sly smile that quickly turned into a thoughtful frown. "I should probably wait until tomorrow night. I can't let this attraction get in the way of the plan." The phone rang, and she absent-mindedly picked up and answered without looking at the caller ID. "Parkinson," she said. "Miss Parkinson, I know you said not to call you B, but there's a gentleman here at the shop." Pansy recognized the voice of the girl who ran the boutique front she used from time to time. "He's asking for you, says he has a custom job. Doubly what should I tell him?" "Calm down, Audra, it's okay. Did he give a name?" Pansy said soothingly. "P.P. Potter," he said. Audra stammered harder. "The P.P. Potter is in my store." Pansy really hoped he couldn't hear her where she was calling and swore under her breath. "I'll be right there, make sure the back door is unlocked." She ended the call and stood quickly. She grabbed at her suitcase and pulled out some jewelry. A heavy pendant on a long cord went around her neck, and silver spirals now hung from her ears. She slipped on a bangle and a couple of bracelets and checked her look in the mirror. Spectacular, she thought, exactly what he'd be expected. Although, she may have to redefine expectations. This was not on her list of possibilities. She made sure nothing magical was visible in the room, dumped her notebook and profit in her suitcase and locked it. She walked out the door, turning the tag to "Please clean," and then strode down the stairs. She walked outside into the wintry mid-morning and turned a corner. A snap bang later and she was gone. The crack of her apparition echoed through the alley behind the store as she appeared, displacing snow and cold air. She composed herself, said, "You can do this," and opened the back door. She strode through the back rooms of the store, consciously letting her walk become sultry and slower as she walked through the door to the main part of the shop. "Why, Mr. Potter, I did not expect to hear from you so soon. My assistant said you had a job for us," she said, her voice inviting and soft. Harry turned as she spoke and took a moment to let his eyes take her in. She had her hair pulled up in a most interesting high ponytail, with tendrils dropping to frame her face. The dark gray sweater fell just past her waist, and her skin-tight jeans disappeared into leather knee-high boots. The girl definitely knew fashion, that was for sure. "Yes, Miss Parkinson, I need new uniforms for my staff at the pub and hotel. I thought that, since I have the need, you have the ability to fulfill it, that we could come to an arrangement." Her heart skipped a beat at the subtle innuendo, or not so subtle if Audra's intake of breath was anything to go by, and smiled brightly at him. "Why, of course, Mr. Potter. We can handle that for you." "Did you have some guidelines or requirements for the uniforms?" Harry pursed his lips and stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Well, I'd like the base color to be a dark gray. I want them to be notifiable as staff but not stand out. No stark white uniforms. Trim colors can be bright or dark, but no green, gold, yellow, orange, white." He looks over at her. "Nothing too form-fitting or flashy. I won't have my girls ogled and manhandled by the patrons." "For the hotel staff, something less subdued but the same color restrictions, please. Something a little more formal between open collar shirt and black tie. They should be comfortable but not upscale." Pansy had been taking notes as he talked, and now she moved to a large flipboard and picked up a charcoal pencil. She started making rough strokes as he finished talking, nodding at him to continue. When he was done, she kept drawing. Occasionally, she'd buff out a line she drew or a curve here or there, but became more focused in her drawing. Audra stood back with her hands over her mouth to muffle her breathing, and Harry stopped talking as he saw Pansy lost in her creation. She's just amazing. She's not only absolutely gorgeous and quick-witted, but she clearly has a talent for this job. Just those few instructions and she's already working on a design. And not just a rough draft, Harry thought. He was definitely impressed. Pansy made one last change and stepped back from the board, nodding. "Something like this." She turned the pedestal it rested on so Harry could see the design. She had sketched out a base shirt and pant design that could be multifunctional depending on the accessories. All business, she started explaining. "The shirt will be a stone gray color, much like this." She pointed at a swatch to the side. "The design is inspired by Mandarin shirts and dresses, the no-fold Mandarin collar and open neck. The squared-off shoulders on men's shirts and closer, shorter sleeves for the ladies. The shirt buttons down a few inches off-center in the same design concept, but without the heavy braiding and embroidery." She reaches blindly for a magazine and flips to a page, pointing. "This is the traditional Mandarin design. We'll leave out all this detail work but preserve the cut and the lines of the style." She handed the magazine back to Audra and then pointed at the pants. "Basic black slack, straight cut and tailored for the individual. Costs a little more to tailor each uniform, but you will notice the difference in how your staff looks. No baggy pants on guys with wide hips and narrow legs, no overly tight blouses on slender women with curves. The ladies can opt for pants or a more feminine skirt." And here she quickly sketched out what she was thinking. "If we make the skirt the same color as the shirt, when the girls wear it, it will appear to be a dress, but they'll have the comfort and movement of separate pieces. The fabric is soft and feels like satin, but it's moisture-wicking and waterproof." She stopped and looked up at Harry. She blushed a little at the wonder in his eyes. "These are just the drafts, so you can kind of see the direction I'm thinking. They'll need a lot of refinement, trim, adjustments for different jobs and the hierarchy." Harry nodded. "Very impressive, Miss Parkinson. Perhaps you can bring the finished designs by the pub later this evening, perhaps, if you're done with them." Pansy looked at Audra, who nodded enthusiastically and squeaked. She shook her head, laughing, and then turned to Harry. I think that can be arranged. Thank you, Mr. Potter, for the opportunity. I can assume we'll talk cost and quantity over dinner. Harry nodded. Excellent. I'll see you around 7 then. Thank you, Miss Parkinson, Miss Slate. He bowed slightly and turned, striding out of the shop and down the sidewalk. Pansy sagged back against the wall in relief and smirked. Dinner, indeed. Harry got off the train at the last stop in the little town he now called home and walked to his building. Unlocking the door to the pub, he entered and greeted Anthony. Afternoon, Anthony. How's prep going for tonight? The bar manager looked up from his paperwork and replied. Chef Hastings yelled for a good 30 minutes about what something very special for dinner meant, then chopped a lot of things, dented another stock pot, and by the way, the workers' comp claim for the dishwasher is on your desk, ready to sign, and then yelled some more. I finally took a guess, based on your mood last night, and told him something romantic. He seemed okay with that and is working on a multiple-course menu of, and I quote, tasty, delectable morsels designed to awaken the senses and set the soul impassioned. Anthony quirked a smile and looked at Harry. Set the soul impassioned? Really? Harry was trying not to laugh loud enough that the chef could hear him, but he was grinning at Anthony's reenactment. That's perfect. Put an update on the website that tonight is couples night. Reconfigure to all 2 tops. But leave room to make 4 tops just in case. Harry thought for a moment. Use the black linens and, he grinned mischievously. Call the florist and have them bring over short table bouquets featuring viola tricolor, please. Anthony knew that look. He took down the notes and chuckled. Thy will be done, Mr. Potter. Everything will be ready. Open at 6. Nodding as he headed towards his office, Harry said, perfect. Oh, and reserve me the corner table. As he passed by the kitchen, he yelled, stop hitting the staff in the head with pots, Chris. A string of invective came from the kitchen in reply, and Harry grinned. He went into his office and started on the paperwork. Audra looked at Pansy with her mouth agape. Miss Parkinson, I know you opened this shop, but I didn't know you actually could design. She clapped her hand over her mouth and blushed furiously. I mean, not that I didn't think you couldn't, but I didn't know you did, and I'm sorry. It's just you have me do all the design work and I do so enjoy it, but... Stop babbling, Audra. I know what you meant, Pansy replied absently. She was making small corrections to the sketch and taking down notes. Of course I can design clothes. Where do you think all the ones we started out with came from? I just don't do it often anymore, with my other business keeping me busy all the time. She sat back and frowned. And I don't know why exactly I'm putting so much thought into this one, but I'm actually quite enamored of this look. What do you think? Audra took a deep breath in and then out. I think it's gorgeous. The blending of the styles you drew out can't be anything less than stunning, but you've done what Mr. P.P. Potter asked and made it subtle all the same. Pansy smiled encouragingly at the young girl. Thank you, Audra. Do we have the fabric we need to put together a proof of concept by dinner tonight? She slid from her stool and went over to the fabric samples, searching for the right material in the right color. We might have to dye this a little for the final run, but this is what I'm thinking of. And we'll trim with this silver and blue here for the bar staff, and the hotel staff will trim with red and black. There, that'll do. She turned and handed a pile of fabric to the girl. Let's get to work. Her thoughts to herself were less clothing-oriented. Sorting Potter out is going to take a lot longer than I thought. He completely surprised me this morning, she thought out loud. She found she actually liked that. Pansy apparated into her hotel room carrying a portfolio folder and a garment bag. She hung up the bag on the back of the door and set the folder on the table. She stripped down and took a shower and began getting ready for dinner. Potter clearly wants to mix business and pleasure, so I will do exactly that, she informed the mirror as she carefully applied her makeup and styled her hair. Now to decide what to wear. She looked over the choices she had brought with her originally, as well as what she brought from the shop. It would serve him right if I showed up in the uniform, but that would not accomplish anything. As she flipped through the clothes, one dress caught her eye. She pulled it out and looked at it. It was a vibrant red full-length evening gown with a corset top and a matching short jacket. She touched the crystals sewn into the seams of the corset and turned it around to look at the back. Wide satin ribbons wound their way down the back of the dress in an intricate braiding, tied in a bow at the waist. The intricate beadwork and stitching wrapped around the hips of the dress and swept down and to one side, continuing all the way to the hem at the left leg. The right side of the dress was slit up to mid-thigh in such a way that it would rest closed when sitting, but flare open just slightly when she walked. She ran her fingers over the silky, soft charmeuse of the dress and smiled wickedly. This, black hose, some strappy silver stilettos, and silver jewelry would be perfect. She pulled her jewelry box out and expanded it with a spell, searching for what she thought she remembered putting in there. Finding the set, she pulled the tray out. The waterfall earrings were speckled with tiny diamonds, and the matching necklace was all but an arrow pointing to her cleavage. A thin diamond tennis bracelet and matching ring completed the combination. She looked at the clock and smiled. She had just enough time to get ready. Harry finished shaving and dabbed some aftershave on. He washed his hands carefully and then fumbled his contacts into his eyes. He hated wearing them, but he couldn't wait to see the surprise on Pansy's face when she saw him without his ever-present glasses. He walked over to the closet and got dressed. He slid on his boxers and a tight black t-shirt, then pulled out a dark crimson button-down shirt and slipped into it. As he worked the buttons, he looked at his trousers and found a pair of black slacks that were just dressy enough for the theme he'd chosen for the night, but still fell shy of tuxedo pants. He added a thin black leather belt, put on black socks and patent leather one-piece Oxford shoes. He pulled on a dark gray blazer and then turned to look at himself in the mirror. No. That's just off. He put the blazer back in his closet and pondered. Ah! He reached in and pulled out a gray vest and pulled it over his shoulders, buttoning it up. That's better. He pulled out a silver tie and quickly knotted it around his neck and snugged it under his collar and down inside the vest. Harry, you handsome devil, you, he told the mirror. He ran his fingers through his hair to achieve his customary mussed-up spiky look and went downstairs to the pub. He checked the time. It was 6:40. He figured Pansy would be exactly on time or a little late, so he had a few minutes. He went over to the hostess stand and spoke to Holly, the young girl working there tonight. I want a minimal wait for tables, and there is no seating at the bar. Couples only, and reservations get seated as soon as they arrive or shortly thereafter. There will be enough tables for everyone, I promise. I'm not concerned about turnover tonight. We should get exactly as many people as we have chairs. Now, remember the woman I went upstairs with last night? Holly blushed a little and nodded. Yes, sir. She was stunning. She'll be coming here for dinner tonight and will likely have a large folder or something with her. Get Anthony to carry her things for her and show her immediately to my table. Oh, and if everything goes as I've asked tonight, everyone will get a bonus. Thanks, Holly, he said and left. He checked the flowers, the lighting, made sure all the candles were lit and the menus laid out. He spoke to the few guests who had already arrived, welcoming them and wishing them a lovely dinner. Then he went behind the bar, took a fortifying shot of scotch, and made his way to his table to sit down and wait for her. At 10 till 7, Pansy walked down the sidewalk towards the pub, frowning as she noticed the darkened windows. He didn't close the whole pub down to have dinner with me, did he? She thought to herself. Then she noticed the sign out front indicating couples' night. Oh, you cheeky bastard, she muttered under her breath but went up to the front door anyway. It was opened for her by the young man who had been the bartender the night before. Welcome, miss. I hope you have a splendid evening. The hostess greeted her as she walked in, the young man closing the door behind her. Miss Parkinson, how nice to see you again. Your table is ready and Mr. Potter is waiting for you. If you'll allow Anthony to carry your things, I'll lead you to your table. Pansy was impressed with the treatment. Harry had turned the entire bar into an intimate couples restaurant in a single day and had the staff ready to greet her specifically. She suddenly was glad she had worn this dress. She was aiming to dress more elegantly than he'd be expecting, but instead, she fit right in. Well, not right in. Pansy Parkinson only fits in when she wants to. Harry stood up as she approached his table, and he stood up to greet her. But as he opened his mouth, she came into full view and he froze. She was a vision in red, the candlelight glinting off the beadwork on her dress and her jewelry. Her hair was elegantly coiffed and her lips quirked in a smile as she gave him the once-over. Well, Mr. Potter, you certainly clean up rather dashing. Who could have known? She said. And going without your glasses, how modern of you. Her words broke the spell and he hastily walked around the table to pull her chair out for her. Not quite as much as you, Miss Parkinson. I have to say, you look simply amazing tonight, he replied. Finding his own seat, he looked up at Anthony. Put Miss Parkinson's things in the office. We'll go over her designs after dinner. Be sure to hang the garment bag up, please. He turned back to Pansy. By the presence of the bag, I'm assuming you either brought a change of clothes or you managed to put together a sample uniform. Maybe I decided I wanted to play dress-up with you, Potter. I could have my naughty maid costume and her dominant master's outfit in there. She raised an eyebrow and reached for the wine glass that had just been filled. She took a sip and let out an appreciative sigh. That's an excellent wine choice, Potter. You do know if you like my designs, you're still going to pay a premium for them, no matter how much you butter me up. The look she gave him was part smile, part haughty aloofness. Harry wasn't quite sure how she pulled it off, and yet she did. Business later, dinner first, he said, wagging a finger at her. She smirked at him and looked down for the menu that wasn't there. When she looked back up at Harry and opened her mouth to ask, she saw the flowers on the table and laughed aloud. Cheeky bastard, Potter. He grinned at this. A waiter appeared with 2 small bowls, arranged them on the table, and said, "The first course tonight, tiger prawns and a French consomme with chive and black pepper." She looked down at the elegantly presented dish and then back up at Harry. "Tasting menu," she guessed. When he nodded, she said, "How many courses?" 7, I believe the chef has put together, although he may do something different for our table. It will be an adventure, shall we? He raised his wine glass towards her. To something new. She clinked her glass against his and took another sip of the white wine. She couldn't quite identify it. Taking a bite of the food immediately after the wine, she realized that the wine was paired to the food. She had not thought Harry's pub, or rather, restaurant containing a bar area, capable of that. She closed her eyes as she chewed and washed it down with a sip of wine. "That's simply delectable," she breathed. "Chef Hastings does pride himself on exquisite food. I'm so happy I lured him here," stated Harry simply. He also took a bite, chewed, and sipped on his wine. "So, how exactly did you end up a fashion designer, Pansy?" Her first name sounded so different when he said it, lighter and flowing, and distracted her from the question slightly. "I guess I've always liked clothes and putting together outfits. My mother suggested one time that I should try designing, so I started making sketches. They turned out to be good. They turned out to be really good. I showed some of them to a dressmaker friend of Mum's, and the next thing I knew, I was an intern." One waiter swept by and replaced their wine glasses with a different wine and removed their plates. The original waiter set down new plates. "Slow-cooked duck egg with Iberico ham, white truffle shavings. Oh, you are just evil. I love white truffles." She took a bite and let the flavors blossom in her mouth. Harry smiled as he watched her lips purse in pleasure. She swallowed almost reluctantly and took a sip of the wine. She didn't say another word for the rest of that course, and Harry chuckled at her as he finished his own. "That was perfect. Anyway, I advanced very quickly with the dressmaker and eventually opened my own shop. My parents invested in it and it's turned a profit for the last 2 years now. Here we are now. He's got my story. It's time to ask him how he ended up here. But this is rocky ground, Pans. You have to be careful but not obvious." "What about you, Potter? Last I heard you were working with the ministry," she said, then swallowed the last of the wine. The waiters did their bit again, and the new dish was placed on the table. Seared bluefin tuna, chorizo, and shaved watermelon with a lime ponzu glaze. Harry shrugged and took a bite of the tuna. After washing it down with the sparkling sake, he looked at her, his voice a little somber. "I needed to get away from that world. Too many memories. Out here it's easier, and I'm good at this. I never thought I'd be happy, much less successful, running a business." His back got straighter as he admitted that out loud. "And I'm happy." She pondered her next statement as she ate the tuna, and then completely forgot she'd been talking as she took a sip of the sake and unconsciously moaned out loud. Harry grinned at her and finished his off. "Good, I think my mouth just had an orgasm. I would never have thought to put these things together," she admitted. "Saffron risotto, carabonero's prawns, and edible gold leaf," the waiter informed them as the next plates came in. "Oh, I was hoping Chef would make this. It's one of my favorite things he makes for these events," Harry said, and eagerly ate. Pansy took a spoonful of the creamy risotto, and as she had quickly learned tonight, made sure she had all the ingredients and seasoning together in the bite, and put it in her mouth. She could easily see why Harry liked this. The briny prawns mixed well with the fragrant and thick risotto. She took a sip of the wine that brought out the subtle flavors of food and drink, and sighed. "We're not going to get much talking done during this meal, are we?" she said to him, blushing slightly. Harry smiled warmly at her. "Probably not, and here they are again. Wagyu beef, served with fermented celeriac, pan-fried shaved ginger, and edible silver leaf edges." Pansy sucked a breath through her teeth. "I love Wagyu beef. This is the make-or-break dish for this dinner, Potter," she said, grinning. "By all means, try yours first then, Pansy," he he said, dropping all pretense. He watched her face as she took her first bite, memorizing the slant of her jaw, the curve of her lips, the way one tendril of hair fell across her perfect pale cheek. She took care in gathering up the various parts of the dish, layering them perfectly, and sliding the edge of her fork through the sauce. She took a tiny sip of the wine, holding it in her mouth for a moment, and Harry's eyes tracked the small drop that escaped the corner of her mouth as she lifted the fork to her lips. They parted, and she slipped the fork in her mouth and closed her lips around it. She slid the fork out, her pink tongue darting out to capture a drop of the sauce. Her eyes closed as she chewed, slowly, and he could see them rolling back and forth behind her eyelids. She made little appreciative noises in her throat before swallowing, and she sat there, not moving or speaking for a long moment. Harry began to wonder if she was okay when she slowly opened her eyes and looked at him through lowered lashes. "Passable," she managed to say, as she gathered up the last bite on the plate and put it in her mouth with another sip of the wine. Grinning at her, and feeling his cheeks warm at the almost sexual enjoyment of food he'd just witnessed, Harry barely tasted his serving. He was too enthralled with seeing her enjoyment playing over her face. Pansy had completely forgotten why she was there, outside of the food and the extremely attractive wizard sitting across from her. She looked at Harry intently, wondering if he'd set all this up just to get her back upstairs with him, and she found she really didn't care. As he sipped his wine, she looked at his lips and chiseled jaw. He had most definitely grown up. "I think I'm ready for dessert," she began, when the waiters came over and replaced their plates and glasses. "For the lady, a Belgian dark chocolate tart with French milk chocolate glaze, black truffle ribbons, and smoked vanilla gelato. For the lord, a salted caramel iced brownie with toasted sesame oil and strawberry gelato." Pansy's eyes took in the chocolate tart sculpted into a pansy flower with the leaves formed of the truffle ribbons perched atop the gelato. She looked up at Harry and gave him a look. "I had nothing to do with that, Pansy, I promise." She stared pointedly at the flowers on the table. "Okay, those, I did that." She stared ferociously at him, but wasn't able to maintain it long and giggled. "They're beautiful," she said, and then took a bite of her tart. "Not nearly as much as you," Harry retorted, then blushed, surprised at how forward he was just then. Pansy rolled her eyes but blushed regardless and busied herself with eating her dessert. "Your gelato is melting," she pointed out. Harry looked down and chuckled and ate. The both finished their Riesling at the same time and reveled in the flavors filling their mouths. Harry looked at her and reached across the table with his hand. She looked down at it as the waiters cleared their table and then disappeared. She reached her own hand over and placed it in his. As their hands touched, Harry felt an electric thrill go down his spine. His eyes met hers, and they both smiled. Together, they stood from the table and their fingers interlaced. Harry tilted his head at the door to his flat, and she nodded slyly. Together, they walked over to the door and up the stairs. Harry regretted letting go of her hand, but the narrow staircase wouldn't allow for that contact to remain, so he snagged her portfolio and bag as he passed by them, and followed her up the stairs. Tantalizing glances of leg peeked out at him from the slit in her dress, and the glittering beads shifted as her curves shifted with each step up. As they both stepped off the staircase, he opened the door for her and followed her into his dark flat. He shut the door behind him, hung the garment bag on a coat hook and set the portfolio down on the floor. He turned and reached for his wand to light candles, as Pansy stepped up against him and pressed him against the door. "You play the game well, Potter," she said, and leaned up to kiss him. Harry froze, then melted as her lips hit his. His arms went around her waist almost involuntarily, pulling her against him. Her mouth pressed against his, demanding, her tongue pushing at his lips. He let his lips part and her tongue darted in to slide along his, and he opened his mouth further, tasting the chocolate and wine on her breath. He lowered his head to make the kiss easier, and her hands slid up his arms to wrap around his neck. He had known how long they stood there, leaning against the door, kissing deeply, nor did he care. He pulled free of her mouth to catch a breath and went right back in. After who knows how long, she let go of his neck and stepped away, pulling free from his arms. She was smiling broadly, although he couldn't see it. Harry stayed leaning against the door for a long moment, catching his breath. "Pansy," he breathed out. "Merlin. It's a bit dark in here, Potter, don't you think?" she said as she made her way over to where she suspected the bedroom was. Harry muttered and raised his wand, lighting several candles. He looked around for her, finding her standing by his bed. He followed her and lit the candles in there as well. She looked over her shoulder at him and slid the short jacket off, exposing her creamy shoulders. She tossed the jacket over onto a chair and stood there. Harry walked over and stood behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. He lowered his head and kissed the side of her neck, her shoulder, the hollow of her collarbone. He looked up and started to speak, but was stopped by her finger on his lips. She turned in his arms to face him and put her lips on his again, murmuring, "Shut up, Harry," and kissed him hard. As they kissed, Pansy slowly backed up until her legs touched the bed. She turned them about again and pushed Harry down, climbing on top of him, grinning wickedly. "There, now I have you, almost, where I want you." Her voice turned husky and she looked at him intensely. "And I do want you." She kissed him again, pressing her body against him. His arms went around her again, one hand sliding up to her neck, the other down to her waist. He moaned into her mouth and she pulled back a bit. "I want you too, Pansy Parkinson," he corrected with a smile. She looked into his eyes and smiled. "Harry, then." She rolled so they lay next to each other, kissing and touching. After a while, she pulled away. As he protested, she turned so she was sitting on the edge of the bed and reached behind to her waist. She pulled carefully on the ends of the ribbon, pulling the bow loose and letting the satin lacing come loose. She stood, and the dress slid slowly down her body. She wiggled a bit as it caught on her hips and then stepped out of it. Clad now in a strapless black bra, lace panties, a garter belt, and hose, she looked over her shoulder again at Harry. "And," she said without turning around. "Oh, right," Harry said and rolled off the bed on the other side. As she watched him, he slipped off the tie and vest. He slowly unbuttoned the shirt and pulled the tails from his slacks. He kicked off his shoes and slid from his socks, and then pulled off the shirt. Letting it drop the floor behind him, he unbuckled his belt and unbuttoned his slacks. He let them fall to the floor and then walked around the bed to face her, wearing his boxers and close-fitting T-shirt. Pansy turned to him then, the candlelight illuminating her smooth skin. She put her hands on his chest and curled her fingers into the shirt. Harry looked at her and his eyes traveled down her slender neck to her breasts, her cleavage enhanced only minimally by the bra. He followed her body down to her flat stomach, the garter belt riding high on her shapely hips and the stockings hitting at mid-thigh. You are indeed spectacular, Pansy." Her heart fluttered as he said her name again, and she smiled at him. "You're not looking so bad yourself, Poe, Harry." She ran her hands down his stomach, feeling his muscles, and then lifted his shirt off over his head. She ran her fingers through his chest hair and traced the muscles on his abdomen. She raised her hands up to slip them around his neck and leaned up for another kiss. Harry slid his arms around her and reached up for the clasp of her bra. He fumbled with it a bit but soon had it free and pulled it from between them and dropped it to the floor. Her bare breasts pressed against his chest, her nipples tight and hard against his skin. He deepened their kiss as his fingers stroked her bare back. She gasped as they touched and what felt like a spark passed between them. She sucked his tongue into her mouth and bit it lightly while twirling her own around it. They fell into the bed again, entwined, touching and tasting each other. They started slowly, but their explorations of each other increased as their desire heightened. Harry's mouth found her throat and laid little kisses and licks down it to her chest. His hands reached for her breasts, stroking and gently squeezing them. His fingers teased her nipples as he kissed his way across her chest to them. She pushed each one into his mouth as it arrived, anxious to feel his tongue on her nipples. Her hand slid down his stomach to his boxers, feeling for his length through the silk. She felt him and wrapped her fingers around him, feeling his erection form beneath her hand. She curled her fingers inside the waistband of his boxers. As he moved his mouth to her other breast, she pushed her hand down inside his shorts to reach for him. He looked up at her and moaned as she took his length in her fingers. He responded by sliding his hand down her side to her thigh, stroking up and down and around until his hand touched her hip and pulled her against him. "Pansy," he breathed. "Harry," she moaned, surprised at what her hand had found. She tugged upwards at his shoulders with her free hand and kissed him hard, rolling him over on his back. She tugged at the waist of his shorts and demanded, "Off!" Harry chuckled and reached down, raising his hips and slipping the silk over his hips. She growled low and pulled them down, and he kicked them off his feet. She then kissed her way down his abdomen to take him in her mouth. He groaned and looked down. She pulled the clasp from her hair, letting it cascade down across his hips and hiding her ministrations from his view. He threw his head back and sank into the mattress as she sucked and licked him, his hands grasping at the sheets and fingers curling into fists. For her part, Pansy could not believe they'd gone so far so fast, and yet it seemed right. She'd set out to seduce him, and he'd seduced her right along. Besides, she actually found herself enamored of the man he'd become. She increased her movements on him until she couldn't take it anymore. She released him from her lips and slid up his body, her panties sliding off as she moved like a snake up to kiss him again. She lowered herself down onto him with a gasp, slowly adjusting to him. As he sank into her to the hilt, she began to slide up and down. Harry reached for her, wrapping his arms around her as she pulled him inside her. He kissed her lips, her cheeks, her jaw, her throat, and as she raised up to push down on him, caught her left nipple in his mouth. His tongue swirled around it and over it, and his hands slid down to her thighs to encourage her motions. Pansy gasped and moaned out loud. She had not felt this good in a very long time. She was close, quicker than had ever happened before. "Harry," she whispered as his hands pulled her down on him. She lowered her head and her hair fell down around his face. He reached up to brush it behind her ear. That was what did her in. All the flirting, the food, the wine, the kisses, the touches, their naked bodies locked together, and it was that simple act that broke her barriers down. She cried out as her release hit her and his shortly behind it. She collapsed on top of him in his arms and sighed happily. Harry kissed the top of her head and hugged her tight to him. "Pansy," he whispered. "That was incredible." Pansy lifted her head up and looked at him. "Did I not tell you I have a spectacular everything? You should listen more." She lifted up off of him and laid down next to him on the bed, nestling her head on his chest and wrapping an arm around his waist. "But yes, it was," she admitted quietly. "I can't believe I did that," Pansy thought to herself. "I just had sex with Harry Potter instead of finding out why he disappeared. Good job, Pans. You're really living up to your reputation." "I guess now is as good a time as any to ask him." She tilted her head so she could look into his eyes. "Harry," she began softly. He raised a finger to her lips. "SHH, Pansy, not yet, just B," he whispered and kissed her forehead. He stroked her cheek and then relaxed back on the mattress and pillow. She nodded against his chest. "Okay," she replied. Within moments, they were both sound asleep. Pansy woke slowly, stretching languidly. She froze for a moment as she realized there was someone in the bed, then relaxed as she remembered who. She looked up and saw he was still asleep, so she carefully slipped out from under his arm and off the bed and padded naked to the bathroom. She heard a soft whistle and turned to look. Harry had one eye open and a smile on his face. "That's a wonderful sight to wake up to," he said, and turned over. Pansy rolled her eyes and went into the bathroom. She took care of the necessary business and then walked out. Spying his shirt on the floor, she picked it up and slid it on and then sat on the edge of the bed. "Your turn," she said, slapping his back lightly. Harry grunted but got up and went in the bathroom. A few minutes later, she heard the shower running. "Coming," Harry's voice echoed, and she grinned, standing up and dropping the shirt on the bed. She walked in there and joined him. The shower was very spacious, with more than enough room for them both. That didn't stop her from pressing up against him under the water and biting his shoulder lightly. She put her arms around her waist and leaned her face against his shoulder blade, closing her eyes as the hot water cascaded over them. She felt him start to move and pinched at his stomach. "Don't, just be," she said, repeating his words from the night before. After a few minutes, she loosened her arms and he turned around to face her. He put a finger under her chin and tilted her head up, leaning in for a kiss. She happily received and returned it. She pulled away for a moment. "We shouldn't waste the hot water. Soap," Harry chuckled and pointed. She turned and found a bottle of bath gel and a loofah. Once again, his retreat into the Muggle world proved apparent. She paused for a moment, remembering why she had come here. "But do I really want to bring him back? This is not the Harry I once knew. He's happy here and successful, but would they be content to know that?" Her thoughts were not helping matters. She squirted the soap on the loofah and turned back around. She wet it and worked it into a lather, and then started bathing. After she got her neck and shoulders and was starting on her arms, Harry took the loofah from her and carefully soaped up the rest of her body. She tried, at first, to take it away, but he smacked her hands. "Let me," he said. He slowly washed her, carefully making sure not to miss anything. And suddenly, she realized he was definitely making sure of that. She took a step back to support herself against the tile wall, moaning as he carefully attended to her. She didn't know when the loofah was replaced with his fingers, and she didn't care. She didn't notice when he moved the shower head to rinse her off, but she definitely noticed when his fingers were replaced by his mouth. She bit her lip and squirmed. "Oh, Harry," she moaned. She put one hand on the back of his head and grabbed his hair tightly. Her breath shortened and she shuddered. It was becoming difficult to stand upright. even with the support of the wall. She lifted one leg and put it over his shoulder. He put his arm around her thigh and pulled her against him. Harry started to hum, and Pansy went over the edge. She experienced one of the best orgasms she had ever had after oral sex, and she almost fell over. Only the wall and Harry's grip kept her upright as her body shook and her nerve endings sparked. Harry's mouth didn't stop, but it did slow down as she rode the high and settled back down. He gently let her sink to the floor and stroked her cheek with the back of a hand as he smiled at her. Through hooded eyes, she saw the smile in his green eyes sparkle back at her. He stood up, grabbed the loofah, and began to wash himself. Pansy tried to protest, but she didn't think she could stand up yet. After he'd washed and rinsed, he stepped over to her and lowered his hands to her. She took them, and he pulled her to her feet and directed her to the water. "Your hair," he explained. He grabbed the shampoo bottle and slowly began to lather it into her hair, separating the length of it into bundled strands, lathering it carefully. When he'd finished, he turned her around and lifted her hair up into the stream from the shower head, rinsing it carefully. When they were both completely clean, head to toe, he turned off the water and reached out of the shower for 2 big fluffy towels. He draped one around his waist and made as if to dry her off, but she took the towel from him and did it herself. He shrugged, grinned, and dried off. They stepped out of the shower, shoulder to shoulder, and bumped hips. Laughing, they went into the main room. Harry said, "Your garment bag is on the coat hook by the door if you want to get dressed." "What, in one of your new uniforms?" Pansy replied, as she picked his shirt up from the bed and put it on, buttoning just enough buttons to keep it closed. She picked up his boxers and slid them on as well, having to roll the top of them enough to make them stay up. Harry was slender and athletic, but still much larger in the waist than she. What she said registered with Harry after a moment. "Wait, what?" he stammered. "Your new uniforms, the excuse you used to come invite me to dinner," Pansy prompted him. "I finished the designs and made up an example for you to look at." Harry said, "I didn't actually expect." Wow. He was honestly surprised. Can I see them, please?" She brightened and nodded. "Of course, I love showing off how good at this I am." Her customary snark was back in full force, and she retrieved the bag. She opened it and explained as she laid them out on the bed. "This is the male bar staff shirt and the pants. This is the female bar and hotel staff, and they have an option between the pants and this skirt, which makes it look like a dress. Male hotel staff swap this shirt for that one and have the same pants." Harry nodded. "I am very, very impressed, Pansy. These are perfect. Remind me later and I'll draw up a contract for you to provide uniforms for everyone. You said they'd be tailored for each person, yes? I'll have Anthony draw up a schedule that will get everyone here so they can be fitted." She smiled and nodded. "Okay, you know this is going to cost you an arm and a leg, right?" she asked. He shrugged. "I can handle it." "This building is extremely profitable." She saw the opening presented and tried to take it. "How did you become the owner of this place, anyway?" Harry sighed and shook his head. Not today, Pansy. We'll talk. I'll answer the questions I know you have. But for now, would you just spend the weekend with me?" He turned to her, his face troubled. He needed her to let him take this at his own pace, and she recognized that. Nodding, she said, "Okay, but we're going to talk before I leave." "Okay." "Okay," he replied sincerely. "Now, breakfast." As her stomach growled, she blushed and nodded. "Definitely. Are you going to cook for me again? I would love an omelet with ham and peppers and so much cheese." Harry laughed and walked into the kitchen. "Yes, ma'am, at your service, ma'am." She laughed and chucked a pillow at him. "Arse." And they sat close together as they ate breakfast. Harry read the Saturday Times, and she flipped through a fashion magazine she'd had in her portfolio. Occasionally, he pointed out something in the paper, made a wry comment, and she laughed genuinely. She found a provocative dress and showed it to him, suggesting she wear that for dinner sometime, and grinned as he blushed. They spent the rest of the morning talking about nothing and touching often. Many kisses were given, stolen, and exchanged. After a late lunch of sandwiches, Harry turned to her and asked, "Would you like to go for a walk on the beach?" She nodded, but then stopped. "I don't have any clothes, Harry. I'll need to apparate home and get dressed." Harry chuckled and said, "I'm perfectly happy with how you're dressed now, but if you must." She rolled her eyes and retrieved her wand. "I'll be back in a few minutes, okay?" She put her arms around his neck and kissed him. "Okay," he replied. She stepped back and apparated to her hotel room. She didn't want to deceive him any longer about where she was staying, and she had a feeling the staff would figure something out now. She decided she'd deal with checking out later, put all her stuff together in her suitcase, and then apparated back to his apartment. "This way, you can help me pick out what to wear," she said brightly. Harry chuckled and walked over to help her unpack. They strolled down the beach, hands clasped and fingers intertwined, not saying anything. They were both lost in their newfound feelings for each other, each trying to determine what those were. Passion aside, there was definitely something else between them. As the sun sank lower in the sky, Harry turned to her and put his hands on her waist. He leaned down and kissed her with a tenderness that he had not yet shown. "I don't know what this is, Pansy, or how it happened, but I'm happy it is." He looked into her eyes, searching. She met his gaze, more open than she'd ever been. "I am too, Harry, and I want to see where this goes, but right now my feet are wet." They both looked down to see the tide washing in over her shoes. "And these are Jimmy Choo's." "Now you get to take me shoe shopping tomorrow," she said, grinning at his panicked look. She kissed him and took his hand, and they walked and talked until the sun set. Saturday night had been interesting, Pansy reflected. They had gone into the bar and she watched as Harry helped his staff configure the bar for a pub quiz night with a live band following. She drank martinis at the bar and watched him interact with the regulars. He was at ease with them, dropping a joke here, a compliment there, and he knew them all by name. She had been very impressed. They had come back up to his flat for dinner and gone to bed shortly after. The sex had been different. Much more intimate, less taking, and more giving. It was just as wonderful as the first time, but more fulfilling. It was definitely something different for her, as she had not experienced something so complete. Sunday morning dawned, and Pansy again awoke in Harry's arms with her head on his chest. She got up, and this time he did not stir. She took a shower alone, and then went into the kitchen to make some coffee. She sat at the counter, drinking her coffee and thinking about how the day might go. She heard the shower turn on, and a few minutes later it turned off. A few more minutes passed, and then Harry's arms slid around her waist and he nuzzled her neck. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered and kissed her cheek. Pansy blushed and smiled at him. "Good morning yourself, handsome." She reached up and stroked his jaw. "You need a shave, mister." Harry shrugged. "There's no shaving on Sundays, didn't you know that?" "You made coffee, good." He poured himself a cup, adding a bit of sugar and cream, and sipped it. "Ah, that's really good. I can never get that depth of flavor out of this piece of crap." He thumped the coffee maker and laughed. "Harry," she began. He raised a hand up. "I know I promised you answers, but the weekend isn't over yet, Pansy," he said carefully. She sighed. "But I have to be at work in the morning, Harry, and if we are going to talk, it needs to be today. And I have a feeling there's a lot of words to be said, so it's better that we started early." She smiled at him. "I promise you I'm not going anywhere, no matter how this goes. Unless you ask me to, of course. And if you'll have me, I'll stay the night again." The look he gave her was so intense, she felt like it hit her in almost a physical way. Those brooding green eyes were intense and passionate, the chiseled jaw firm. His gaze made her skin warm and she felt the blush rising on her neck. Harry nodded. "You raise a fair point. Okay, fine. I gather you want to know why I disappeared," he asked. Pansy nodded. "Your friends have been looking for you for a long time. And they hired you, I think, to find me," he said. She blinked, blindsided. How had he figured that out? "Yes, they did," she admitted. He nodded. "I figured as much when you came into the bar the other night." "How the hell did you figure that out, Harry?" She managed to get out. "I didn't at first, but eventually, you remember Holly, the hostess." She nodded. "She also works the front desk at the hotel. As a practice, I don't like the staff to appear the same between the two places, so she uses a disguise charm to change her hair." He sighed. "I need to fortify my coffee for this." He turned to the cabinet and pulled out a bottle. He splashed some liquor into his mug and offered her the bottle. She took it and did the same, then handed it back. He put it away and sat down next to her. His eyes appeared to be staring into the distance. "When I found that girl, something inside me broke. Every year there was loss." She touched his hand, and he smiled sadly at her. "Professor Quirrell first year, and then Ginny almost died in second year. Sirius almost killed Pettigrew third year and fourth year. Cedric. Fifth year I finally got to spend time with my godfather, and I had a real parent for the first time. And then Bellatrix killed him. Then Dumbledore. And then the battle." Tears flowed freely from his eyes, and he made no move to wipe them away. "Ever since I became a wizard, Pansy, people died. No matter what I did, I couldn't stop the deaths. Ginny, Molly, Luna, Kingsley." He sniffed hard. "I was the chosen one, Pansy, the boy who lived. Everyone's hopes rested on me, and I failed them. I failed them all. The closer I got to Riddle, the more people died, the more people in danger. If I'd gone to him when he asked for me and you said what you said. I finally killed Tom, but it didn't matter. They were all already dead. I thought that was the end. No more deaths, no more lives not lived." Pansy started to say something, but he kept going. It was like a dam breaking inside him, and he felt like he couldn't talk fast enough to get it all out. I know why you did it, I didn't then, but I know now. You were scared, and that's okay. You were 16 and with everything that had happened. You didn't know what I was out doing. Only Ron and Hermione knew about the Horcruxes. He looked over at her and said, I forgave you a long time ago, by the way. Once I understood why. I should have found you and told you. Not only that I forgave you, but that you were right. How many lives would have been saved if I had gone to him right then? But there were still 2 Horcruxes to destroy before I could kill him. He laughed and rubbed the place where his scar once was. As it turned out, there were 3. She looked at him, confused. He saw it and said quietly, when Riddle tried to kill me as a baby, he unintentionally made me a Horcrux of his. I'll tell you more about all that later, okay? She nodded. But I wondered, if I'd gone to him, would Ginny and Molly still be alive? Pansy took his hand in hers and squeezed it tight. Harry was crying freely now, racking sobs shaking his chest. She put her arm around him and lay her head on his shoulder. The battle was over, school was over, everything should have been fine. The golden age of wizardry everyone hoped would happen when Riddle was gone. But the deaths didn't stop, and I didn't know anything about myself other than I fought evil. So I became an Auror, and every other week, it seemed, I found a dead body. Then, that day, there was a missing girl. And I recognized the signs around where she was taken. I went to that monster's lair. I didn't see the pictures of her. I didn't know. He took in a great shuddering gasp. She looked just like Ginny, and I couldn't handle it. I convinced myself that if I hadn't become a wizard, all these people wouldn't have died because of me, so I left. I couldn't cause another innocent death, Pansy. I couldn't be responsible for any more. I didn't speak to anyone, not even my friends, because I had convinced myself that everything was because I was there. If I just disappeared, everyone's life could go back to normal. He sighed. I went to Gringotts, and I cashed out half my vault into Muggle money. I went back to Little Whinging because my aunt and uncle had moved, but the house was empty. I stayed there for a while until I had to have something to do. I thought I'd try my hand at bartending, and as it turns out, seeker reflexes work really well for bartending. I picked up the trade pretty quickly and started working at the bar downstairs. A few months later, the owner announced he wanted to sell the bar and retire to the south of France. I had the money, just collecting dust, so I bought the place. He took a drink of his spiked coffee and looked at her. I avoid magic as much as I can, but when I bought the bar, I put magic into the room and hired witches and wizards who also wanted to get away from the magic life. The bar will always have exactly enough seats for the people who come in. We can reconfigure the large room for different events, like the other night. There's a private room that can be rented out for parties and events. I hired the best chef I could find in America because I wanted a different take on the food. Surprisingly enough, I found him in Alabama of all places. But, well, you've had his food. Harry sighed. And I found out I'm really, really good at this business thing. I used wizard spells to make a Muggle business succeed, and it's worked out well. I bought the hotel and the building with the profits I made from the bar, and I didn't even have to dip into the family fortune. My staff are able to take care of problems that would sink any regular business, but like me, they only use magic when they have to. He turned and looked at her. And then one night, Pansy Parkinson walked into my bar while my 2 best friends stood outside in the snow and waited. She blushed straight to her temples. She tried to say something, but it came out as a squeak. How did I know? He asked. He took a deep swallow of his drink. I didn't know that night. But when I asked Holly to watch for you the other night, she told me you'd checked into the hotel, along with 2 other people. When I asked her about them, the descriptions could only match Ron and Hermione. Anthony told me he saw you standing outside with 2 people who didn't come in, and that he could tell you were being deceptive. It didn't take long to put everything together. He turned to her and looked at her earnestly. Pansy, please tell me what has happened between us has not been a ruse to bring me back to the world I chose to leave. Tell me this is honest attraction and interest. Pansy looked at him. Her emotions were all over the place. She was interested in him, certainly. But she had played the intimacy card this weekend initially to get him to talk to her. And now she found herself completely taken by this man. He had opened up to her, and she could almost feel his emotions. She felt the tears dripping from her eyes as she nearly felt what he felt. She was both confused and convinced. Everything up to this point had been partially a lie. Until now. What had been a lie had become the truth. At a loss for words for the first time in her life, she answered him with a kiss. Harry tasted their mixed tears in the kiss, and he responded gently, putting an arm around her. She broke off the kiss, pressed her forehead against his, and said, "To be honest, that's why I came here. To find you, find out why you left, and bring you back. That's what they hired me to do. You know, I run that dress shop and design clothing, but I'm also an investigative reporter. When Ron and Hermione hired me to find you and told me I could write the story if you agreed, it would have been the biggest coup of my life. The boy who disappeared and all that. And at dinner that first night, I started to see the man you've become. By the time I left, I didn't know if I still wanted to write that story." He gave her a small smile and said, "What about now?" She stroked his hand with her thumb and looked directly into his eyes. "What story?" she asked innocently. "No, the story will not get written unless you ask me to write it. You're trusting me with your secret, and I won't break that trust. And to finish answering your first question, all of this," she squeezed his hand, then touched his cheek. "All of this is you and me and what we have together, which is good." She kissed him. After a long moment, he broke the kiss and kept talking, but kept her hand in his. "I saw Hermione and Ron a couple of times after I left, you know. But it was better for me to leave clean. I know they're mad, I know they're worried, but it is better this way." He sighed. "There's another reason I can't go back." He sat upright and his voice changed slightly. It became deeper, more authoritative, more adult. "Lord Harry Potter of the House of Potter of the ancient and noble House of Black has arrived." His voice went back to normal. "That's too much pressure for one man to bear alone, head of not one but two old houses. You're a pure blood, you know how that is. I'm expected to take a wife for each house, to provide heirs, to maintain business arrangements, to vote twice. On the Wisengamot, I'm 24, Pansy. I can't handle that kind of responsibility right now." He put his head in his hand and sobbed. "So yeah, I ran away. I acted like a 9-year-old and I ran away from my life. I couldn't handle it, so I left." Pansy stood and wrapped her arms around him. "I understand, Harry." "I really do," she whispered softly into his hair. Pulling back and turning his face to hers, Pansy looked at him intently. "Harry, you need to talk to your friends. They miss you and they love you. They've gotten to the point in trying to find you that they're convinced finding that girl's body caused a mental breakdown and that you need help. They told me how you grew up, in that horrible house, and with Dumbledore doling out pieces of information and help to you like they were special treats for a job well done. How Dumbledore tried to make you a particular person, that he thought he knew best how you had to live your life. They didn't realize how wrong that attitude was, and for a while now have been showing they have the same mindset. You have to be brought back to the world of magic and be an Auror and marry some witch and you belong in that world. That's what they think, or, well, thought." She took a drink from her mug and continued. "I managed to get them to back off and go home and let me find out what's going on. I told them they were acting like Dumbledore and that even if you truly had had a breakdown, it wasn't their decision to make if you lived in their world or this one." Harry snorted. "You're right on that count. Dumbledore very well could have been ruining my life. I know he had a plan for everything, but I don't think it was a good plan. It was a plan to kill Riddle and have me as his pet wizard. Oh, I learned a lot about Dumbledore after he died, while we were searching for the Horcruxes. I am still grateful to him for what he did do for me, but I also kind of resent him for what he didn't do. He didn't make sure I knew about the world of magic I was going to live in. He didn't make sure I grew up in a loving and kind home. And he most definitely did not make sure I knew how to do anything other than kill Riddle. I also learned more about myself and Riddle in the year after Dumbledore died than I had in many years before that. I don't know if Dumbledore had lived if I would have learned as much. You're not wrong there, Harry," Pansy said softly. "I wish it had been different for you." She led him over to the sofa and lit the fire. They sat in silence for a few minutes, digesting what each other had said and drinking their coffee. Pansy pulled his arm around her and curled up against his side. "We should have Ron and Hermione over for dinner tonight. Let them see the amazing man you've become." He looked down at her and raised an eyebrow. "We?" he asked. "Huh," she blurted, having gotten lost in her thoughts again. "What? You said we should have Ron and Hermione over for dinner, not you should have Ron and Hermione over for dinner. Are we a we?" he queried her, smiling hopefully. Pansy tilted her head up at him and kissed him. "2 nights ago, not on your life, but now, if you'll have me, I can't explain why I feel this way or why it's happened so fast. And I bloody well don't care. I think I love you, Harry Potter." Harry stared into those deep, dark chocolate eyes staring back at him. those soft lips that had just told him she thought she loved him, and he smiled. This was not the smile of someone happy or amused. This was the slow-breaking, wide smile that lights up someone's entire face, changes the shape of it, and makes their eyes shine. This was the kind of smile that forced other people to smile in response. That was the smile Harry gave Pansy as he replied quietly, "I think I love you too, Pansy Parkinson." Her answering smile was just as wide and brilliant as his was, and she ducked her blushing face and snuggled into his side. "Thank you for telling me your story, Harry, for opening up to me. You have no idea how much that means to me," she spoke honestly. Harry kissed the top of her head and lifted a hand up to run his fingers through her hair. "You're very welcome, Pansy. You're actually very easy to open up to. And I think you're right. Can you ask Ron and Hermione to come over for dinner tonight?" "Now that I've started, I need to finish. I need to tell them why I left." His voice broke slightly. "And apologize for the pain I caused them." Pansy nodded against his chest. "I'll text Hermione in a bit. Right now I don't want to do anything but sit here and be held by you." And so they sat there, holding each other, saying what words could not say. Harry was preparing for dinner when the phone by the door rang. He walked over and answered it. "Okay, show them up here, please. Thanks, Aunt." "Bar is yours for the night. I trust your judgment on anything that comes up. See that nobody disturbs us, okay?" He hung up the phone and turned to where Pansy sat at the counter, watching him. "They're here." A moment later, there was a knock on the door, and Harry opened it. "Hermione, Ron, come in." The tall redhead and the shorter brunette walked in the door and looked at him. They stood there in an awkward silence for what felt like hours, but was probably more like a minute. Harry opened his mouth to say something, and Hermione slapped him hard. Then she threw her arms around him, squeezing him until he couldn't breathe. "You bastard," she said. Harry sighed and hugged her just as tightly. "I know." He looked over at Ron. "I'm sorry," he said to them both, his voice wet with emotion. He held an arm up for Ron, who rolled his eyes and hugged them both. They stood there, all of them crying now, as Harry just kept repeating, "I had to, and I'm so sorry." He looked up at one point and caught Pansy's eye, and she rolled her eyes and made an exaggerated get-on-with-it gesture, and he laughed. The laugh broke the spell, and the golden trio split apart. Harry rubbed his jaw and looked at Hermione. "I'm not sorry," she said. "You deserved that." "All right, then," Harry agreed. He took their coats and hung them up on the coat rack. "Come on in, sit with Pansy while I finish dinner. Wine." "Sure," Ron said as he took Hermione's hand and walked over to where Pansy was sitting. He gave her a very strange look, as if surprised to find her there still. Hermione looked between Pansy and Harry and muttered a soft, "Oh," then jabbed Ron in the side with her elbow. "Lovely to see you again, Pansy," she said aloud, and sat down at the table. Harry poured them both a glass of wine and brought it over to the table, then refreshed Pansy's glass. He went into the kitchen and finished preparing dinner while the three of them stared at each other uncomfortably. He had asked Pansy not to tell Hermione of their relationship just yet. He hoped they would think she was just there to bask in her success. He put a casserole dish in the oven, checked a sauce that was simmering on the stove, and set a timer on the counter. "We've got about 30 minutes until dinner is done, so I guess we can start talking," Harry said reluctantly. Hermione and Ron both start firing questions at him at once. Harry held up his hands. "Stop," he said forcefully. "I will tell you what you want to know, but you don't get to interrogate me." Hermione sat back with her arms crossed over her chest, clearly unhappy. Ron looked like he was about to explode. "Go ahead then," Hermione said tersely. Harry began to talk, telling them everything he'd told Pansy that morning. He didn't gloss over anything, and he didn't hide the tears when they came. He didn't realize when Pansy walked over to him and put her arm around his shoulders, comforting him. He didn't see the looks that crossed Ron and Hermione's faces when she did that. He just kept talking. "And I know you've been looking for me, and I'm sorry I put you through so much pain and grief. But I swear to you I am fine. I did have a minor breakdown that day, but I pulled through. I'm happy here, away from that life. If you can forgive me, I'd like you to be a part of my life again, but I'm not going back to what I had before." He looked up at them then, tears in his eyes, and reached up to touch Pansy's hand. Ron started to say something, looking back and forth between Harry and Pansy, but at that moment the timer went off in the kitchen. Pansy squeezed Harry's shoulder and whispered, "I'll get the food out of the oven." Harry looked up at her and smiled. "Thanks, love." "Stir the sauce, too, please, and turn off the burner." He looked back at his friends. "And I guess I should also tell you that Pansy and I are involved, and I'm happy with that as well." He pointed at Ron. "And if you say one single word about her being Slytherin or insult her in any way, you get to leave without eating." He knew how much Ron loved food, and that was the worst punishment he could think of. Ron sputtered, but Harry. Hermione laid a hand on his knee and looked at him. He subsided. Hermione looked at Harry. We both wish, that you had come to us, or written, or something, anything to let us know you were okay. We didn't know if you had disappeared or just jumped in the Thames and were gone forever. Nobody could find you, and that frustrated the Ministry beyond anything. I'm surprised they didn't make you a wanted man with a reward. Harry sighed. I know, Hermione, I didn't at first. But after a few months, I knew. But I also knew if I contacted you then, you'd have pulled me back into that world and put in St. Mungo's for evaluation. And I'd be cleared and go back to work. And then what would happen the next time someone died? I'd blame myself all over again, and maybe that time I actually would have a breakdown. He stood up and walked around the table to hug her. Sometimes, Hermione, you have to let people make their own decisions. I wasn't allowed to do that very often. He put an arm around Ron as well. I love you both dearly. You're the best friends anyone could ever have, but I had to do this. And if you don't want to be a part of this life I have now, I will understand. I will be sad and it will hurt, but I will understand and accept that decision. Either way, I ask that you accept the decisions that I have made. He straightened up, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and walked away to let them think and talk to each other while he plated dinner. Pansy stood by the stove, and as he neared her, she opened her arms and put them around his waist. She hugged him tightly as he shed a few more tears and his body shook. Feel better? She asked quietly. He nodded, his cheek pressed to the top of her head. I do, thank you, love, he replied just as quietly. She smiled at him and let go. Now get me some food. I'm starving, she said, smacking his arm playfully. Ma'am, yes, ma'am, he replied with a grin. He washed his face and hands and then started putting food on the plates. They each carried the plates to the table and set them down, and they all began eating. After dinner, they sat with their wine glasses in the sitting area. Harry and Pansy sat on the sofa, her legs tucked up under her and Harry's arm around her shoulder. Ron stood by the fireplace looking at the basilisk bones. Hermione sat in a chair, watching the new couple. You two look good together, she observed, breaking the silence. Pansy smiled up at Harry. I think so too. She looked over at Hermione and Ron. I think you both realize I can't complete the job you hired me for. I'll return your deposit tomorrow when the bank opens. Hermione shook her head. No, you did exactly what we asked you to. You found Harry and you got him to talk to us. Finding him, that alone was more than anybody's done in almost 3 years. We'll pay you the rest that's owed to you. Pansy frowned. She started to object when Harry said, how about you split the difference? Pansy keeps the deposit and you keep the remainder, Hermione. Both girls looked at him and nodded. Don't look so surprised, girls. I'm a businessman now, remember. He laughed at the looks on their faces, then winced with Pansy dug an elbow into his ribs. Ow, woman! They all laughed. The lingering tension that had filled the room bled away as they all laughed at Harry's discomfiture, and Harry grinned at them. He kissed Pansy's forehead and stood up. Ron, come help me with drinks. Pansy, please don't gossip about my underwear drawer. He walked into the kitchen with Ron following him, carrying their glasses. As Harry uncorked a bottle of wine, he looked over at Ron. She's not the girl we went to school with, Ron. She was right to try to do what she did with what she knew at the time. She was scared, and we've dealt with that, and she makes me happy. She's a strong, professional, talented woman who has a very deep and caring heart. Hermione looked at Pansy. Is this real, Pansy? Do you really care for him after what he told us tonight? I don't think he could handle it if you broke his heart. I can see it in his eyes. He has completely fallen for you. Pansy looked back intensely. I care for him deeply, Hermione. I might even love him. I think I do, but it's so soon. This all happened very quickly, but it's real. It's really real. Searching her face, looking into her eyes, Hermione nodded. I think you do, too, but let me warn you if you do hurt him. Remember that they called me the brightest witch of our age. I know more spells than you've forgot. Pansy nodded. I know, and I believe you, but I don't think it will come to that. I am happy with him, and I haven't been happy in a very long time. He poured the wine into the glasses as Ron replied. I can see that, Harry, but you know me. It's hard to let old grudges go, but I can see that she does make you happy. And if I haven't said this before, you're a git for leaving. He paused. But I can see why you had to. I don't like it, but I accept it. And Hermione will make her own decision, but I miss my best friend and I'm not letting you out of my life again. He clasped Harry on the shoulder. Besides, Harry, you own a pub. Like I'm going to want to avoid that kind of connection. Harry grinned, and they both laughed as they carried the glasses over to the girls. Ron sat down on the floor in front of Hermione. leaning back against her legs, and Harry let Pansy snuggle up into him again. They talked, then, of the things they'd seen and done over the years. The trio already knew the stories, of course, but Pansy had only known of the public side of things. She interrupted them often to ask questions, but for the most part listened and smiled until she thought her face would get stuck that way. Pansy then told Hermione and Ron of the second dinner she had shared with Harry, and how they had both set out to seduce the other. Ron covered his ears at one point, but Hermione laughed and giggled and complimented Harry on his plan. Late into the night, the three old friends and one new one talked and learned more about each other. When Ron and Hermione finally left, it was with hugs and kisses on the cheeks and promises to write and come visit. After shutting the pub door behind them and locking it, Harry went upstairs. He found Pansy laying in his bed, wearing one of his shirts again. "You have your own clothes, you know," he said as he started to undress. She grinned. "But I look so much cuter in this shirt than you do," she said warmly. "I can't argue with that. Look, I'm sorry we kept you up so late that." "Shush, I could have gone to bed at any time if I wanted to. Now come here, Potter, I want dessert." Pansy's internal alarm clock woke her the next morning, and she sighed. She didn't want to leave, but she had to go to the dress shop. She was looking forward to making the uniforms for Harry's employees, and she had to finish a wedding dress. She kissed Harry's chest and cheek and lifted his arm off her. She started a pot of coffee and took a shower, then got dressed. Harry hadn't budged by the time she finished her coffee, so she wrote a note and propped it up on his night table. She went down to the office before she apparated to the shop so the crack noise wouldn't wake him up. Harry woke slowly as the sun shone on his face through a crack in the curtains, and he stretched out. He reached for Pansy, but she wasn't there, and the flat was quiet. He opened his eyes and saw the note. He reached for it in his glasses and read. "Good morning, handsome. I had to go to work early this morning, didn't want to wake you. Bring me lunch later." He smiled and laid back down. He buried his face in her pillow and inhaled, the scent of her shampoo filling his nose. He sighed happily and then went to shower and get dressed. He went down to his office and took care of the Monday morning paperwork and went over Anthony's notes from Sunday night. He made a few phone calls, ordering food supplies and liquor replacements, and did the payroll. By the time he finished all that, it was almost lunch. Walking into the pub's kitchen, he found the chef and Sue's chef already preparing food. "Chris, can you make me up 2 lunches, something American from where you grew up?" He hardly ever asked the chef to cook something from his roots, so the chef grinned. "Certainly, coming right up." Harry walked into the dress shop carrying 3 boxes. "Lunchtime," he said brightly. Pansy looked up from the dress she was working on and smiled widely. "My favorite thing in the world," she said. When Harry's smile widened, she exclaimed, "Food." He felt his cheeks redden and his smile faltered. Pansy walked over and took the boxes from him, grinning. "Just teasing you, Harry." She carried the boxes into the small room they used for breaks. "I brought a dish for Audra, too. I didn't know if she had plans," he told Pansy as he followed her. She was pleased by his thoughtfulness, but she realized she shouldn't be surprised. "Audra, flip the door sign and come have lunch with us," she told the other woman. "What did you bring me for lunch?" she asked Harry. "Chris calls it shrimp and grits, I think." "I asked him to make us something different, and he got really excited. Apparently I don't let him do enough, good old Cajun grub enough." He opened the boxes and passed out covered bowls, silverware, and napkins. "Damn, I didn't think about drinks." "Pansy. Do you have anything here?" She nodded as she took the cover off and inhaled the aromas carried up by the steam. "Oh, this smells amazing. There's bottled water in that little fridge over there." She grabbed a fork and took a bite. "And it tastes even better." They talked while they ate, and Audra gradually grew more comfortable being around Harry. She didn't stammer nearly as much as she had the first time they met, and even made a joke at his expense. After lunch was over, Audra went back to the main area of the shop and Pansy drew Harry close for a kiss. "Thank you, dear, that was delicious. You should let your chef cook like that more often, that is for sure. I've never had anything like that." Harry nodded. "I think I will. I've been toying with the idea of having some sort of food around the World Series anyway. I just need to work out the details." He kissed her nose and held her close against him. "I'll get out of your way now, love." "Will I see you tonight?" he asked hopefully. "Absolutely. You're going to cook me dinner and give me a massage," she stated. He laughed at her tone of voice. "Yes, ma'am," he said sarcastically and got a slap on the arm. "Ow, you've got a mean streak in you, Pansy." She looked up at him and nodded. "Just now figuring that out, I have to get back to work." Harry kissed her again and left, waving at Audra as he opened the door. Pansy went back to work on the wedding dress with a smile on her face, occasionally whistling. After about an hour of watching her work, whistling, and she never whistled, Audra stopped what she was doing and then said, "Miss Parkinson." Pinning a fold of fabric in place and draping ribbons over it to get the fabric contrast she wanted, Pansy replied. "I've told you, when there are no customers in the shop you can call me Pansy. But what did you need?" Audra took a deep breath. "Pansy, then." "I have to ask you something. And I know you're happy, I can see you're happy, but what in the world happened this weekend? When Harry came in Friday, I could tell you were attracted to him, but you acted completely differently than you are today. Now, it's like you two have been together for weeks, if not months." Letting a ribbon slip from between her fingers, Pansy turned and looked at the other woman. "Well," she started, but then realized she didn't have an explanation. "We had the most wonderful dinner that night, and we clearly were trying to seduce each other into bed. But then, the next day, we just spent the day together. We didn't do anything super special, just got to know each other. I haven't seen him since school, but even that. Maybe it was yesterday when we had such a deep conversation." She was talking to herself as much as Audra now. "No, that couldn't have been it. It has been only a few days, but it feels like so very much longer." "I'm just concerned, Pansy." The girl was more confident in what she was saying now that Pansy was questioning the situation. "You're not acting like you usually do. I hope it's just because you found love, but—" He trailed off. Pansy saw where she was going. "I don't think Harry would have done anything like a love potion, and he'd have had to use it on us both." She frowned and shook her head. "No, what I feel is real. I've had love potions before. The Weasleys came up with some really potent ones at their shop. This doesn't feel like that." She sighed. "I'm going to have to go talk to him. When is Daphne coming for her fitting?" Audra walked over and looked at the appointment book, flipping through the pages. "Thursday. I can work on the train beadwork while you go talk to him, and you can finish the bodice tomorrow, and it should be ready for her by then." Nodding, Pansy stood. "Don't move those ribbons, though. I've almost got that where I want it. Thanks, Audra." "I may not be back today. Don't worry if I'm not. I'll see you in the morning." She walked into the back room and apparated to Harry's office. Harry jumped and almost fell out of his chair at the noise. "Pansy," he said warmly, "I didn't expect you until the end of the day." He stood and walked over to hug her, but she put a hand on his chest. Her face was troubled. "What's wrong, love?" "That is exactly what's wrong," she said. "Love." Harry blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" she sighed. "Can we sit down? We need to talk." Harry frowned. It had been a long time since he had been in a relationship, but he knew that was never good. He was more confused because they'd had such a pleasant lunch earlier. "Sure." He walked over to the sofa and sat down. Pansy sat there as well, but not up against him as she usually would. "How did we get to this point so fast, Harry?" "I know we've both mentioned it, that we were surprised to have these feelings, but Audra said something that really brought it to my mind. 4 days ago, you didn't even know I existed. Well, you knew I existed, but I wasn't someone you thought of often, I'm sure," she said softly. "Well, no, you didn't cross my mind much, but I had not seen you in 7 years, so—" He trailed off, spreading his hands. "If I had seen you sooner, I'm sure I would have thought of you often." "Exactly." "So then one night, I show up in your bar, spill a drink on you, and the next night we have a romantic dinner, sleep together, and spend the entire weekend together. You bare your soul to me, and you make me feel warm through to my bones, blush all the time, and think about how many minutes it will be until I can see you again. After only 3 days, Harry, this is way too fast." She took a deep breath. "I don't want to ask you this, and I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings, but I have to ask you. Did you use a love potion on me?" Harry's mouth dropped open, and his jaw worked for a moment before he could answer. "Gods no, Pansy. I would never do something like that to anybody. I just fell hard and fast for you. I mean, you're absolutely stunning, you have a wicked sense of humor, you're affectionate, you're talented, smart, and strong. Why wouldn't I fall for you?" Pansy smiled at the compliments, but shook her head. "I told you, I have a spectacular everything. But don't you agree that this isn't natural? It's real, I know that. I'm falling in love with you and I like it. I have to worry that it's being influenced somehow, don't you?" Thinking about the past few days, Harry frowned. "You're right, it's definitely real, but I've never fell so hard so fast for anyone before, not even Ginny. Everything took time, this should be." He stopped talking as an idea occurred to him and his eyes went wide. "Damn it." "What is it, Harry?" Pansy asked. She could tell he'd had an idea. Harry stood up and walked over to the office door. "Anthony," he yelled. "Get in here now." He started packing, chuckling under his breath but swearing. The bar manager walked through the door and looked at Harry. "Yes, sir." Harry swung around and pointed at Anthony, then at Pansy. "Did you whammy us?" he asked bluntly. The tips of Anthony's ears turned scarlet as he blushed furiously, and he looked at the floor. "Yes," he said. Harry sighed and put his hand over his face. "Anthony, I trusted you never to do that to me. It's in your contract. The only time you can whammy me is if I fall into depression again, and I haven't done that. Why did you do this?" Anthony sighed and looked back up from the floor. "I understand, Harry, and if you want to sack me for it, I won't argue. But I had to. You've been so sad and lonely, and when I saw a chance for you to fall in love, I took it. You've done so much for me, this job, my apartment in the hotel. You've let me do what I need to do and help other people. I just wanted to help you for once." He shook his head. "You deserve to have this chance, and I couldn't bear to not help you have it. You're my friend, Harry, not just my boss. You know better than anyone that sometimes I have to do something when someone's hurting." Pansy had a look of sheer confusion on her face. "Wait a minute. What are you two talking about?" Harry sat heavily on the couch next to her. "Anthony is an empath. He has the ability to not just sense people's emotions, but to read them like an open book and sometimes influence what they're feeling. Generally, he uses it when bar patrons get too rowdy to diffuse fights and discourage poor treatment of the staff. Sometimes, when someone comes in who is troubled or depressed, he can help them. There was a girl in here the other night." He looked up at Anthony for her name. Blushing all over again, Anthony said, "Sydney." Harry nodded. "Sydney then. She'd just gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship, convinced she was worthless and was starving herself because she thought she was overweight. Anthony talked to her after closing and drew her story out. She herself has a bit of the empathic ability, and her abusive boyfriend was influencing how she acted. Anthony is helping her learn how to block out other people's emotions and find who she is. And judging by the look on his face, he's completely taken with her." He sighed. "When, Anthony, and how?" "Can I sit?" Anthony asked. At Harry's nod, he sat down in a chair. "I was watching you two talk Thursday night, and I took a reading of you when you were in the bar. You were sad and lonely, as always, but when you and Miss Parkinson were talking, something started. When Miss Parkinson left, I took another reading of her, and then when you came down to talk to me. The feelings were already there. You were interested in her, and she was interested in you. You honestly, truly liked each other. I did not influence that. I just helped it along." Shaking his head, Harry asked again, "What did you do, Aunt?" Anthony said, "Friday night at dinner, when you dressed up and clearly put so much effort into what clearly was a date. And then when Miss Parkinson showed up looking like something straight out of a dream. I could see it. You two made such a beautiful couple, and you both were vibing in sync with each other. I mean, seriously in sync. Your auras were almost completely aligned, like you were made for each other. So I kinda nudged you. You didn't realize I was the waiter serving you because I used our standard staff illusion, and every time I brought you a plate, I nudged you both. Just a hair. A little more from liking to crush. And then when dessert came, your auras were completely aligned. She was truly, perfectly right for you, and you both had strong feelings for each other. I didn't nudge you into love, I promise. I would never do that, it's against the code. I just helped you both realize what was already there." Pansy spoke up then. "But if you didn't make us love each other, why did we move so fast this weekend? Everything was just a blur. What should have taken weeks or months took only 2 days. I think," Anthony said, "that when two people are that closely aligned, that's the only way it can go. My aura teacher told me that people who are truly in love, when they stand next to each other, will seem to have just one aura instead of 2 separate ones. And that's what you two have right now," he said, as he looked at them with unfocused eyes. "Your friends that were here last night, they have it too, you know. They're as perfect a match as you two are." He blinked and focused on Harry. "I was afraid if I didn't give you a little nudge, you'd let her go, and then eventually I'd have to follow that depression rule. I don't want to do that, Harry. I don't want to pull you out of a depression. I'd rather keep it from ever happening. What you two have is real, it is true, and it is not influenced. Not since that dinner." Pansy let Anthony's words sink in as she considered all that had been said. A silence filled the office as they all thought deeply. After a few minutes, Pansy stood up and walked over to Anthony. She crossed her arms and leveled a glare at him that made him shiver. "Stand up," she demanded. He did so quickly. "Yes, ma'am." She looked up at him. He was even taller than Harry. She pointed her finger at his nose and said coldly, "Do not ever influence my emotions or his ever again for any reason. I should report you for violating ethics. Understand me?" He nodded, swallowing. "Yes, ma'am, I won't, I promise." Pansy looked at him for a long moment and then wrapped her arms around him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Anthony." She let him go and ignored the stunned expression on his face as she turned and walked over to where Harry sat. She sat in his lap and kissed him. Harry's expression might have been more shocked than Anthony, but he put his arms around her and kissed her back. After a moment, Anthony coughed and the pair broke apart. Anthony was looking at the floor, the ceiling, the door, everywhere except at them. Harry laughed. "Sorry, Aunt, she's right, though. Thank you. You shouldn't have done it, but in a way, I'm glad you did. I'm not going to fire you, but you are on probation for a week. Give the keys to Stephanie and go home." Seeing Anthony's face fall, he winked at the tall man. "You need to instruct Sydney in empathic ethics and rules." Anthony blinked and then gave a small smile. "I do indeed, and I believe I have an example to use for it. Thank you, sir, if I may." He gestured to the door. "Go," Harry said. After Anthony left, he looked at Pansy. "Sure you're okay with this?" She nodded, laying her head against his shoulder. "I will be." What he said, it all made absolute sense. "And even if we had managed to seduce each other into bed Friday night, I'd have been gone Saturday morning, would have written my story, and you'd have had to deal with Ron and Hermione by yourself. My feelings for you were what made me find out what had happened to you, what made me stay with you all weekend. We wouldn't have this at all." Harry held her close, thinking carefully. "I think you're right, but maybe, now that we know what happened, maybe we should try to take things slow." "If you try that, I will make your life a living hell, Potter," Pansy replied without opening her eyes. "Shut up and hold me." Harry did as he was bid and held her tight in his arms. "Harry?" Pansy asked softly. Harry replied drowsily. "My leg's asleep," she told him. "The rest of you should be too. It's the middle of the night." "No, it's not. We fell asleep on the couch." "Esau, comfy couch and you're pretty. Could we at least shift so you're not laying on top of me? I don't mind it when you're naked, but you're kinda heavy. And your temporary manager is trying very hard to not look at where your hand is, but she looks like she has to ask you something." At this, Harry woke up full and fell off the couch on the floor. Pansy giggled and buried her face in a pillow before she started braying like a donkey. Harry looked up at Stephanie, and with as much dignity as he could muster, he asked, "Yes, Steph." Blushing, the girl said, "We've got a couple out here that insists they know you and they want to see you." Harry pondered a moment and then asked, "Short brunette and a tall redhead." She nodded. "Do you know them?" Harry nodded. "Let them in the office." He pushed up off the floor and walked over to his desk chair and sat down. Ron and Hermione walked into the office, saw Pansy laying on the couch, hiding her face, and Harry sitting in his chair with a red face. "I'm sorry, were you busy?" Hermione asked, innocently. Ron said, "You," behind her, and then "ow," as she elbowed him in the stomach. Harry shook his head. "We fell asleep on the couch earlier, and when I woke up, I fell off. Pansy is busy laughing at me." Pansy lifted her head up for a moment, said he fell square on his ass is what he did, and then started laughing so hard she snorted and buried her face in the pillow again. Hermione cracked a smile. "Grown up and still clumsy, huh, Harry? Apparently. What's up, guys?" he asked, trying to get past the embarrassing moment. Ron spoke up again, "We're worried about you." But Hermione elbowed him in the gut again. "Can we talk upstairs? We've both been talking about and we're concerned." "For both of you," she said, giving Ron a look. "Sure, if Miss Snortsalot over here can pull herself together," Harry said, teasingly, standing up out of his chair and walking over to the stairs. "Come on up." They all went upstairs, Pansy still giggling and wiping her eyes. "Drinks," Harry offered. Ron and Hermione shook their heads and sat down at the dining table. Harry and Pansy followed them and sat down next to each other, joining hands. Hermione cleared her throat. "Look, I'll just cut to the chase. I know you two have fallen hard for each other, and I can tell you really like each other, but Ron and I were talking, and we think you've been influenced somehow." Harry nodded. "We were," Hermione continued, "and I think I found a spell that will reveal if you're under the influence of a love potion or some other spell, and Fred and George said they have antidotes." "Wait, what?" Pansy chuckled. "We were influenced." Hermione stared at the two of them. "Are you still being influenced? Why aren't you upset? Especially you, Pansy. I'd expect you to be furious." Harry explained to them about Anthony and what he had done. As he talked, Ron visibly relaxed. Hermione still looked concerned until Harry said, "Remember when we studied auras in the DA?" Hermione nodded. "Look at ours, Myone." She closed her eyes, remembering the exercise, and then opened her eyes, looking through the wall behind them. She gasped. "You're right. You both have, as far as I can see, a single aura. Wait." Her eyes snapped back into focus. "I think I saw a book downstairs. I'll be back in a moment." And she jumped up and ran to the door and down the stairs. "Now that," Harry said, "is the Hermione I remember. Bloody hell every damn time." Ron said, "There's always a book she's seen." He rolled his eyes again. "Seriously, Harry, you're all right. You're both all right." Harry and Pansy both nodded. "We are," Pansy said. "I swear to you. Ron, I know that Harry is your best friend, and I know you and I don't have a good history. But your acceptance of this is important to both of us, and I realize I am remiss in something." She let go of Harry's hand and walked around the table, sitting down next to Ron and facing him. "On Weasley, I was a right git in school, and I was wrong to treat you and your friends as I did. I am sorry, and I promise to you I am not the girl I was in school, and I love your friend. I will not break his heart." Ron looked at her intently for several quiet minutes. Then he nodded and spoke. "All right then, but if you do break his heart, I'm going to shove a broomstick up your arse." Pansy broke out laughing as Harry yelled, "Ron. Quiet, love. That's the best forgiveness I could ever get." She hugged Ron around his neck and made him flush. With perfect timing, Hermione walked back in, thumbing through a book and talking already. "I think it's somewhere in here, something about auras and bondings," and she looked up. "Pansy, don't strangle Ron. Whatever he did, I'm sorry." It was Harry's turn to start laughing. He waved a hand at Hermione and said, "It's okay. She's not strangling him. She's hugging him." Hermione frowned but nodded. "Oh, okay then. Ron." Ron chuckled as Pansy let go. "We just had to get something sorted out. What did you find, love? It says here that the more similar two people's auras are, the more compatible they are. And then it goes into something called soul binding, which means the two are drawn together and once they fall in love are completely inseparable. They are bound, heart to heart and soul to soul, and develop a bond very similar to empathy." She dropped the book on the table and sat down next to Harry. "Once the auras begin to align, they will snap together like magnets, and the bond is formed. Once bonded by their auras, the two are bound closer than marriage or blood, and each enhances the other's abilities and skills," she read out loud. "Quite often, they will begin to share some personality aspects with each other, although they do remain two individual people." She looked up and looked at Ron for a moment. Harry broke the silence with a soft, "Anthony said you two have the same type of aura that Pansy and I do." Ron put his hands over his face. "So very much is now explained." He looked at the three of them. "On our honeymoon, I read a book." Harry snickered. Hermione laughed out loud. Pansy chuckled. Then they all started laughing. After a few minutes, Harry leaned next to Hermione to read some more. "It says here that when a soul-bound couple gets married, their bond will be signified by a gold nimbus." He looked up at Hermione. "I thought that was just a spell." Hermione looked confused. "What are you talking about? When you and Ron got married, when you kissed, you were both outlined by a golden flash. Everyone thought it was just some fancy show-off spell the twins had cooked up. But that's what it was. That was your soul bond," Harry exclaimed. Hermione was very quickly lost in the book, reading what it had to say. Harry looked over at the clock and said, "You two might as well stay for dinner." "Pansy, help me get something going while Hermione reads." Pansy looked up at him. She had been reading along with Hermione. "Why do you just get Chris to send something up?" Harry rolled his eyes. "Because I actually like cooking, but I guess for one night." He walked over to the phone, called down to the bar, and asked Stephanie to have Chris make them dinner. A short time later, Hermione and Pansy were still engrossed in the book. Harry and Ron were playing chess, and the door opened. Another waitress carried a large platter with steaming dishes atop it and set it on the counter. "Here you go, Mr. Potter. Stephanie wanted you to know that things are really slow downstairs, so is it okay if we close a little early tonight?" Harry nodded at her. "Sure thing, Meredith. Do me a favor, though, and ask Chris to send room 211 2 plates of food as well before he heads out. I know Aunt and Sydney haven't eaten tonight." She nodded. "Yes, Mr. Potter." "Enjoy your dinner," and she went back downstairs. Harry motioned to Ron and walked over to pick up the plates. He carried his and Pansy's over to the table as Ron brought his and Hermione's. "Dinner, ladies, put the book away for a while," Harry stated. Pansy looked up and then over at the plate and smiled. "Is this more of that Cajun cooking we had today?" "I think so," Harry said. "Smells like it anyway." He took the book away from the girls, who protested, but the smell of the food soon drew them to eat. Harry went and poured out glasses of wine and handed them out. I don't know what this is, but it's amazing, Harry. Where did you get your chef?" Hermione asked. Ron grunted as he shoveled the food in his mouth. "FLLF," he said, around a mouthful of sausage and rice. "He's from Alabama in the States. This is what he calls Cajun food, which I think is from Louisiana," Harry said. Hermione took another bite. "We may have to come eat here more often. Is the regular menu like this?" Pansy snorted into her glass of wine as Harry laughed. "No, but apparently it needs to be." They made small talk as they finished eating, and then the girls grabbed the book and continued reading. Harry looked at Ron and shook his head. "They'll tell us anything that's important. Want to finish our game?" Ron nodded. A few days have passed, and while Hermione and Pansy were once again going through books and making notes, Harry's dining room table had quickly resembled one of the tables in the Hogwarts library, with books and papers stacked everywhere, and the girls' heads bent over it. Harry took Ron down to the pub to show him around and introduce him to all the staff. "Everything's bewitched so that we can make the room do different things, you see. We can make all the tables 2 tops for romantic dinners, 6 tops for pub quiz, arrange them so everyone can see the big screen over there if there's a game on, all kinds of stuff," he said proudly. Ron looked around, taking in everything Harry was telling him. "Bloody hell, Harry, you've done a bang-up job here, and everyone that works here is a wizard or witch," Harry nodded. "Well, most everybody. The chef and most of the kitchen staff aren't. Yes, they produce that food the old-fashioned way. I could have sworn he was a wizard when I hired him, but he's totally a muggle. He's aware of the world, though. Had to be, he has a non-disclosure clause in his contract that protects us both in the muggle courts, and another clause that if he decides to take another job, he will be obliviated of the information about the magic world. Everybody else, though, all magic. Everyone has a reason to be here. Some are, like me, overwhelmed by what goes on there. Some just want a simpler life, away from the crowds. It's a big difference living as a muggle than a wizard, Ron." "I can see that, Harry. I just guess that growing up with everyone throwing spells left and right makes you used to it," Ron replied. "Just like growing up with muggles makes it easier to be away from it. I remember when you and Dad would talk about the things he found fascinating that were common to you." "Exactly," Harry said. "Remember, I spent 11 years not even knowing magic was real, and then got dumped headfirst into it for the next 7. It could get a bit overwhelming. And one day, I may fully embrace that world. But right now, I'm happy here." He clasped Ron on the shoulder and grinned. He was very glad his friends were back in his life and not trying to drag him kicking and screaming to Diagon Alley. Anthony was back behind the bar when they turned that way, and Harry gestured for Ron to sit at the bar with him. "Anthony, how's Sydney doing?" Anthony's face flushed, but he smiled wide. "She's doing great, Harry. She's able to stay shielded almost all the time now." "Wonderful," Harry exclaimed. "I know you're a good teacher and you had the best training. Have you kissed her yet?" "I did have, WH. Wait, what?" Anthony stammered as Harry laughed. "Turnabout is fair play, my friend. You two obviously like each other. You just have to admit it. It's not like you can hide it from one another very long now, is it?" Harry said, grinning. Anthony muttered something under his breath. "I guess you're right." "Of course I'm right," Harry said, grinning at Ron. "Now, if you would, kind sir, please show my friend here that bartending is not just pouring shots and beers. Make him amorphous, please," Anthony grinned. He pulled out a short glass and then reached under the bar. His arm jerked, and a bottle came flipping up over his shoulder. From behind him, landing in his other hand perfectly and emitting a glug of a dark black liquor. That bottle disappeared back behind the bar, and another one jumped straight up in the air in front of him, landing in his hand. He twirled it around and then carefully layered a clear liquor atop the black. He snapped his fingers, and the second bottle disappeared, and a green bottle took its place. A layer of bright green liquor went into the glass, and Anthony threw the bottle over his shoulder. It, too, disappeared. He pulled 2 bottles out this time and somehow poured 2 layers at the same time, one brown, one red. Those bottles went away and a strange-looking round bottle came out, and he swirled a white line in a spiral pattern on top. He carefully slid the glass to Ron and smiled. "Enjoy!" Ron's eyes got bigger and bigger as Anthony made the drink, and when the glass was in front of him, he leaned over and looked at the layers. "Bloody hell, mate, that's amazing." Anthony said, "That's called flair, my friend, and most of it is not magic. The only time I use magic in that trick is disappearing the bottles. All the layers, that's science. Now you have to drink the whole thing in one go, don't sip at it. You have to get the melding of all the flavors." Following Anthony's advice, Ron picked up the glass and drained it. After he swallowed, he licked his lips. "That's damn tasty." "Yep," Harry grinned. "That's just one of the reasons I keep him around. Somehow he can make a show out of pouring a beer, but give him something like that layered drink, or ask him to make 20 shots at once, and he's just in his element. Okay, get back to prep, Anthony. We'll be having dinner down here, all 4 of us, if we can pry the girls away from your books, so reserve my usual table, please." Ron blinked. "His books, those are your books." Anthony nodded. Harry wanted to add something you wouldn't find in a usual pub, so I brought a bunch of books from my grandparents' attic and some of mine from my apartment, and we set them up in bookcases around the side room over there, he pointed. My grandfather collected old books. He had aspirations to own a bookstore to rival Flourish and Bott's, but he spent all his money on books and forgot he needed somewhere to sell them. Anthony shrugged. I haven't even begun to make a dent on the stacks and stacks of books in my grandmother's attic. Do not let Hermione hear you say that, mate, Ron said, grinning. Or, apparently, Pansy. Anthony nodded. Oh, I've already talked to Pansy about them. I'm sure she's told Hermione. Ron groaned. Harry laughed and tugged on Ron's arm. Come on, let's see if we can get the girls to take a break and get ready for dinner. They got off the bar stools and headed towards the office. As they passed the kitchen, Harry stuck his head inside. Smells amazing, Chris. Pains me to say it, but you were right. I need to sit down with you on Monday to figure out how to do this tour of the world's cooking we've been kicking around. They headed upstairs and into Harry's flat. Harry and Ron managed to pry Pansy and Hermione away from the books for dinner, and it had been a wonderful dinner. Afterwards, Ron dragged Hermione home, and Harry and Pansy went upstairs. Pans. Harry said, confusion on his face as he looked down at his feet. When did I get a cat? Pansy laughed as she walked over, leaned down and picked up the black and gray tabby cat and snuggled it in her arms. This is Spencer, my cat. She looked at Harry and smiled. I think he likes you. Harry still looked confused, and after a minute she laughed and took pity on him. I'm spending all my time here and he was lonely back at my flat. You did tell me to make myself at home, didn't you? Well, this is part of that. He reached out to tentatively scratch the cat's head, and the cat's loud purring and closing eyes told him he was accepted. Well, I think you're right. He approves. He leaned over the cat and kissed her softly on her lips. But can the cat keep himself company for a little while? She smiled warmly and nodded, letting the cat jump to the floor and wrapping her arms around his waist, kissing him back. As the weeks went by, becoming months, Harry and Pansy grew closer together and fell deeply in love. Hermione and Pansy continued to research the soul bond, trying to find more details. And Harry started doing his own research into a few things. One Sunday morning in late spring, he awoke, the warmth of Pansy on his chest and her hair spilled across his shoulder and arm. Spencer the cat was curled up on Pansy's pillow, purring gently as he slept. Harry gently rolled her over, kissing her shoulder as she murmured, and then rubbed the small of her back until she went back to sleep. He got up, took a shower, and got dressed. He wrote a quick note and left it on the counter for her to find, and quietly exited the apartment. He walked through the empty, closed pub and locked the front door back behind him. He took his wand out and signaled the night bus something he hadn't done in a long time. It banged and shuddered to a stop in front of him, and he got on. Diagon Alley, please. A stomach-twisting ride later, Harry stepped off the bus and walked to Gringotts. He arrived at the door just as they unlocked. He'd chosen the sleepy weekend morning to arrange his special appointment to minimize the number of people that saw him. He was shown into the bank by a goblin and into a special interview room. Pansy awoke, stretched out alone in the bed except for the cat. She smiled sleepily at Spencer and rubbed her fingers on his neck and head, then got out of bed. She could tell by the silence in the flat that Harry was out. He's probably downstairs cooking a surprise breakfast or something, she said, grinning. She went and took a long, luxurious bath, listening for him to return. When the water had grown cold, she got out and dried off, wrapping a towel around her. She padded into the kitchen for coffee and saw the note. Pansy, my love, I have to go take care of a few things this morning. I should be back sometime this afternoon. I love you. She smiled, but wondered what on earth he could be doing on a Sunday. Several hours later, Harry left the room, rubbing his right hand. Another goblin approached him and handed him a briefcase. Harry checked the contents and nodded, thanking the goblin. He left the bank and signaled the night bus again. He gave Stan his destination and held on tightly. He arrived in front of a large house, not quite a mansion, but not small enough to be rightly called a cottage. He fixed his tie and strode up to the door. He lifted and dropped the heavy brass knocker, and a moment later the door was opened by a house elf. Harry greeted him and was escorted inside. The door opened again, 2 hours later, and Harry left without the briefcase. He walked to the end of the pathway by the road and apparated back to his office. He sat down on his office chair for a few minutes and went over everything that had happened that day, making sure he hadn't forgotten anything. Confident he had not, he got up and went into the kitchen where the chef was preparing for the dinner service. Chris, would you do me a favor and pack a dinner for Pansy and I? I've left her alone most of the day and I want to take her for a picnic on the beach. The chef nodded and said 15 or 20 minutes okay. Harry nodded. That'll be fine. He went back upstairs and walked in to find Pansy curled up on the couch with a book. Hello, love, he said, smiling at the now familiar sight of her with a book. She looked up as he came in and beamed at him, then faked a frown. You left me alone all day, Harry. She tried to pout, but couldn't hold it and laughed. Harry walked over and leaned down to kiss her and touched her cheek. I know, but I thought I'd make it up to you with a picnic on the beach. Grinned and nodded. That sounds wonderful. Let me get something warmer to wear, it's still chilly out there. Arm in arm, Harry and Pansy walked down the street to the beach and found a spot on the sand well back from the high tide marker. Harry spread a thick blanket out on the sand and opened the basket. He set out the plates and glasses and served them both dinner from the various dishes the chef had prepared. He poured the wine, offered a toast, to the most beautiful woman I know, and she blushed. They ate, chatting a bit about the story she was now working on, which she hoped would help even out matters between the purebloods and the Muggle-born. Her research with Hermione had dug up contracts and agreements that should have prevented the current animosity between the groups, but had gone missing decades earlier. After they had finished, Pansy moved so she was sitting in front of him and leaned back into his chest. She pulled the blanket up around them and they watched the sun start to set. We should probably head back. It will get really cold after the sun goes down, Pansy said. Harry nodded. You have to get up first, love, he said, and kissed the top of her head. She laughed, swatted at his knee, and then stood up. She picked up the basket as he stood up, took a step off the blanket, and shook the sand off it. Here, hold the blanket a moment, my shoe is untied. He handed her the blanket, and when she got it arranged over her arm and turned back to him, she found him down on one knee, but he wasn't tying his shoe. He had a small black box open in his hand, and the sunset glinted on a large diamond ring. Her breath caught in her throat. Pansy Marie Parkinson, with the permission and encouragement of your father and mother, and with all the love I have in my heart, I ask for your hand. Will you marry me? For a brief, fleeting moment, Pansy thought about saying no, but she couldn't do that to Harry. Instead, she dropped the blanket and basket and fell to her knees in the sand, reaching out for him. Yes, I will marry you, you great git. She took his face in her hands and kissed him. Harry sighed with relief. He had been relatively certain she would say yes, but there was still that little bit of doubt that it was the right time. He pulled the ring out of the box and slid it on her waiting finger and then kissed her again. I love you, Pansy. I know, she said, winking at him. He stood up and helped her to her feet. She put her arms around his waist and laid her head on his chest. The ring is beautiful, Harry. He stood with his arms around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. It took a really long time to find the right one. They stood together for several minutes, and then he picked up the basket. She picked up the blanket, and they walked back up the road to his building. Halfway there, she stopped and caught at his wrist. Wait, my PARNTS. Harry and Pansy sat at the bar in the mostly empty pub, glasses of wine in front of them. Pansy was staring at him expectantly, and Harry was too busy laughing at her reaction to actually speak. He finally calmed down and said, yes, that was where I was this afternoon. I had lunch with your mother and father to ask them for their permission. I was also asked to, after you said yes, inform you that if you don't come visit soon, they're going to tell your grandmother you're engaged to a Gryffindor. He laughed again at the look on her face. She sighed and took a sip of wine. She's right, I guess. It's been several weeks since I've talked to them. At least they already knew we were seeing each other. I probably should have taken you to meet them already, but Daddy can be such a pain when it comes to my boyfriends. Harry raised an eyebrow. Boyfriends? Just how many do you have? She smacked him in the arm. You know what I mean, jerk. Okay, spill. How did you arrange lunch and how did you get in contact with them? He rubbed the back of his head with his hand, a little embarrassed. Well, he started, I'd like to say I had this long, thought-out plan that took months of detail work, but honestly, I ran into him after I left your boutique one day. Not sure how, but he recognized me and asked me what my intentions were with his daughter. I guess by then you had told them we were involved. So I told him I eventually hoped to marry you. He then said there were some things I needed to know, and I should come by his office. We made an appointment and I went there a couple of days later. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure what he was going to say and I didn't want to make you upset. Pansy smacked him in the arm again. I know, he said. Can I finish, love? She stared at him intently for a minute longer and then relented. Go ahead, so you went to his office and... I walked in and he had this scroll. It had to be 20 feet long if an inch. Hanging on the wall, and he was going over it with a magnifying glass, copying down sections on a parchment. When he was done, he handed it to me and let me read. In the Parkinson family charter, there are provisions laid down if the sole heir is a woman. It's outdated and ridiculous, as I'm sure you agree, and I think it's barbaric. But if the provisions weren't followed, our marriage wouldn't be recognized and you would never receive your inheritance, he said. What right does someone who lived hundreds of years ago have to tell me what I can or can't do with my life? That's ridiculous, she exploded loudly. The 2 or 3 people near enough to hear her turned and looked. She saw this and quieted down. Sorry, that gets my blood boiling. Dad always told me that if I married someone it would have to be carefully arranged, but never why. This was all before the dark. She trailed off as Harry looked at her. Fine, Riddle died, and I thought he was just trying to curry favor with the dark houses just in case. At least I know it wasn't his choice, but this is going to have to change somehow. Harry nodded. You're right, and I agree with you, and that's one of the things he and I talked about. I think we came to an agreement that will fulfill the letter of your family's charter and allow you and I the chance to make the changes to that charter that need to be. But you need to know what the requirements were, Pansy. She sighed and rolled her eyes. What then? She asked. This mess frustrated her. She just wanted to be his wife and spend the rest of her years with him. Firstly, you must marry the lord or heir of a family line that has been established for at least 500 years. I am my father's heir, and the Potter family line can be traced back to the 1100s, so that takes care of that. There is a later correction to this, that if a lord or heir of an ancient and noble house, that's one that goes back over 1,000 years, is available, that marriage should take precedent over the first. I am Sirius heir as stated in his will, and the Black family is an ancient and noble house. He waited for her response. So that's why he wanted me to marry Draco after school, she said, understanding. Harry nodded. Because of Narcissa, Draco was the heir to the bloodline, but Sirius will negated that. Of course, nobody but the Order would know that until after Riddle's death. Pansy pursed her lips, nodded, and then sighed. Okay, what's the next really bad decision my ancestors made? You would only be allowed to marry someone who had distinguished themselves as either a champion in battle, a prominent career, or a powerful wizard, Harry said, a glint in his eyes. She couldn't help but grin. Well, there's no question you're all 3 of those. He rolled his eyes but nodded. And so, I actually fulfill all these requirements for your future husband, including some minor ones regarding wealth, property, and the like. But to fully qualify, I had to register for all those titles. Harry reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 rings, 3 pins, and an amulet on a chain. That's where I was this morning. At Gringotts, either signing my life away or accepting my legacy, depending on which way you look at it, he said, grinning. He slid off the stool, slipped the rings on, hung the amulet around his neck, and bowed to Pansy. Lady Parkinson, may I present to you Baron Potter, Lord of the ancient and noble House of Black, Slayer of Voldemort, the man who loves Pansy Parkinson. She clapped her hands as she laughed, then presented her hand to be kissed. Then she frowned. Wait, Harry, does this mean you're going back? She shook her head. You can't make yourself do that for me. Harry took her hands and looked at her lovingly. Pansy, the agreements I signed today will allow me to claim my heritage, be who I need to be to marry you, but also to stay here, run this business and build my empire, as they put it. Your father will hold my proxies on the Wisengamot until he retires, at which time I will return fully to the wizarding world with you at my side, and any children we bear along with us. He leaned forward and kissed her, ignoring the oh-woo-woo-wah that came from behind him. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and if we have children, I want them to have both the life that you had growing up and the life that I had. Well, without the horrible hatred of relatives, but I mean the Muggle experience. Pansy chuckled and nodded. I understand. So what agreements exactly did you enter into with my father? She asked. Harry sat back down, still holding her hands. Your father is now a 15% partner in the pub in the hotel. He holds my proxies for voting in the Wisengamot, although he is required to have a signed physical copy of my vote in order to cast them. He has insisted on paying for the wedding, although I insisted we have the reception here. The houses of Parkinson and Black will, after our marriage. enter into a number of future familial and business arrangements which I assure you will benefit both families and our children immensely. He grinned at the look on her face. Remember, love, I'm a businessman now. I know what I'm doing. He kissed her. And I love you, and I will do whatever I need to for us to be together. She smiled up at him, her eyes closed. And I love you. Wait, she said as something occurred to her, looking down at the ring on her finger. You said this took a long time to find. Just, where did you find it? Harry smiled at her. In an envelope on a shelf in my vault at Gringotts. It was addressed to my son's future wife. Pansy's eyes teared up. This was your mother's ring, Harry nodded. There's a spell on it. Tap it with your wand, he said. Pansy drew in a shuddering breath. Should I do this here or upstairs? Harry smiled at her and squeezed her hands. That's up to you, love, she nodded. I don't think I can do this in the pub, and you're right, I should visit my parents. Do they know about the ring? He shook his head. I wanted you to be the first to know. She nodded then, smiling at him. Harry, would you like to visit my parents with me? Harry smiled at her. Absolutely, my love, shall we? Harry and Pansy apparated to her parents' house and walked up the drive. Harry reached for the knocker while Pansy reached for the knob. At his look, she said, What? I live here. Well, lived here. She opened the door and yelled, Mom, Dad, I'm home. Mistress Parkinson, a very offended house elf, interrupted. You are supposed to use the knocker so you can be greeted properly. Pansy laughed and patted the elf on her head. Sorry, Nala, I got excited. Next time, I promise. The house elf muttered but walked off. Always next time it is. Pansy, a voice said happily, and they looked up to see Pansy's mother descending the staircase. And your handsome young suitor as well. Are you finally paying us a proper visit? Mum, Pansy grinned and hugged her mother. I'm sorry it's been so long. I know you know Harry, but I'll properly introduce you. Where's Daddy? In the library, still double-checking these agreements your wise young man there has presented me with. Her father's voice came from a doorway. Harry offered his elbows to the two Parkinson women and escorted them over to the library. I did have the goblins at Gringotts help me with those, so I think you'll find they're equally beneficial, Mr. Parkinson, Harry said. Nonsense, call me Dad. That is, assuming my lovely daughter said yes. Prentice Parkinson looked up as they entered and saw the glint on Pansy's finger. And of course she did. Congratulations, daughter mine, he said happily as he stood and embraced her. You have yourself a very, very bright young man here with a good head on his shoulders. With these agreements, we will enter into a very prosperous union with the houses of Potter and Black, even without the marriage to consider. Harry, did you know how many businesses you have a stake in? Harry shook his head. That's why I brought those documents to you, sir. Dad, I have a good business acumen, but to be honest, I'm shite at investing. He turned to Pansy. I also offered your father 10% of any stake I have in any business if he would help me sort out everything I own or invest in. Pansy beamed at her fiancé. You couldn't do better. Dad is an investment wizard, and I don't mean that literally. Her mother cleared her throat. Are you here for dinner, dear? We didn't plan on 4, but I'm sure we can make do. Pansy shook her head. No, we already ate, but I did want you to share in something I'm about to do. She looked between her mother and father. This ring, it was Harry's mother's. She apparently left a spell on it that I'm to see. Her mother smiled. Lily always was a sneaky sort. Leave it to her to think so far ahead. Harry blinked. You knew my mother. Kirsten put her hand on Harry's shoulder. Your mother and I were friends in school, dear, and your father and Prentice were as well. Harry stared at them both. You didn't tell me that. Prentice chuckled. It wasn't as important earlier. But now that we're going to be family, I promise you, we will tell you everything you want to know about your parents. It's actually fitting that their son and our daughter are now engaged. And Pansy, you said something about a spell. He turned to her. Pansy nodded. Well, Harry said. Harry put his arm around her and squeezed. Why don't we all sit down, love? Harry and Pansy sat on the small sofa while her parents sat in adjoining chairs. She looked at Harry. Just tap it with my wand. He nodded. That's what I did. I expect you'll get a more useful message than I did. If you are in love, Harry, propose to her with this ring. And when you're ready, tell her there's a message for her. He shrugged. Nothing else happened when I tapped it. Pansy took a deep breath. Here goes, then. She tapped the diamond with her wand, and a white wisp flared up from it. The smoke assumed the ghostly form of Lily Potter Nee Evans. The image spoke. To my son's future bride, welcome to the family. I am sure that Harry loves you with all of his being, or you would not be receiving this message. If I am not there to give this to you directly, that means James and I have perished for some reason. Harry, I am sorry if that has happened. You were born into a difficult time, and I can only hope that you have lived past the threat that took us from you. And if your fiancé has invoked this message, then my hopes for you have proven true and you've found a soul bond. I warn you both, the road ahead of you will be difficult if you are so bonded. But the rewards, they far outstrip the trials. The two of you are joined in a way that very few wizards and witches have, or will, experience. You will share emotions at times and you can never hurt each other. This is the bond that your father and I shared, and I hope yours has not come to you too late in life. Harry's eyes were full of tears, and he looked over to see Pansy's were as well. But the image wasn't done. It continued, "Know that your father and I love you both very much, even though we will never meet. We wish you all the best that the world has to offer, and a long life of love and family. Once the two of you are married, you will be the full heir to the Potter fortune. I'm sure by now you've found the legacy of the Peveril brothers. My last message to you, my son, is that you are indeed the descendant of Ignatus Peveril, who changed his name to Potter. In your father's vault at Gringotts is a box, which you may only open once you have been married. In this box you will find the Peveril heritage. I love you, my son, and I love you, my future daughter." The image disappeared back into the ring, and silence filled the room. Harry and Pansy embraced closely, both of them crying silently. Prentice and Kirsten clutched each other's hands and watched the young couple. Harry and Pansy didn't notice when Kirsten got up and walked into another room, speaking quietly with the house elf. This was one of those moments they had started to suspect were caused by their bond, but was now confirmed by Lily's message for them. Pansy could feel Harry's mixed emotions at seeing his mother's face and hearing her voice. She stroked his back gently as he sobbed on her shoulder. Her own tears were more gentle falling. Something inside her that still was concerned about people accepting her as Harry Potter's wife snapped at his mother's unabashed, unblemished love, without regard for who she was or who she might have once been. "Your mother was an amazing woman, wasn't she?" she asked quietly. Harry nodded against her shoulder. "Her love was the reason Riddle couldn't kill me. She cast a spell with it that not only kept him from killing me, but protected me from him for 15 more years. And I can still feel the lingering effects of it sometimes," he said, just as quietly. Pansy rubbed her cheek against his and leaned back. She reached up and brushed his wet cheeks with her hand. Her father reached over and handed her a handkerchief, and she used it on Harry's face and then her own. She turned to thank her father and saw him also weeping freely. Prentice cleared his throat. "Your parents, young man, were two of the most extraordinary people I ever had the honor of knowing." "I knew your mother was a brilliant witch, but I didn't know she had kept the Dark Lord." Pansy coughed. "Riddle, Daddy, please, or Tom Riddle. Saying things like that gives his memory power, as Harry has taught me." The older man smiled. "Riddle, then, although it seems a shame to associate a term for a funny question with such a person, but as you will. I did not know that she had managed such a protection spell, and that is why he couldn't kill you." He shook his head in wonder. "Well, it was mostly that." "But Riddle himself started it." Harry looked over at Pansy. "Remember I told you that I had no choice?" She nodded. "Well, I didn't, and I think this is the right time to explain that. Wait, where's Mrs. Parkinson?" "Mother, please, Harry dear, or Mum if you're so inclined," Kirsten said as she reappeared in the room. "I know you said you ate already, but perhaps we could have a light tea. Nala's prepared a light repast for us." The house elf followed her into the room and set up a table with the makings for tea. "Thank you, Mrs. Mum," Harry said, smiling up at the woman. He stood and held his hands to Pansy, who took them and moved over to sit at the table with the other two. "Now, Harry, you were talking about why you had to fight Riddle," Kirsten said, not stumbling over the name at all. Harry nodded as she poured him a cup of tea. He held the cup in his hands, warming them. "There was a prophecy before I was born." Riddle heard the first half only. He coughed to clear his throat and recited. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. Had he known the full truth of things, he'd have realized that there were two people that could have defeated him. He immediately thought of my parents, and therefore their 1-year-old child. Me. But there was another wizard born at the end of July, to parents who had defied him 3 times. He just didn't know of the last time, Alice and Frank Longbottom." He looked over at Pansy. "Neville could have been the chosen one as easily as I, that's why I tell you it didn't have to be me, but I had to do it." He sighed and took a sip of tea. "The reason I had to oppose him was in the second part of the prophecy. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." He rubbed the place where his scar had been. Riddle chose me as his enemy and marked me as his equal. You know about the Horcruxes? He asked and looked around the table. They all nodded. Well, he made me a seventh one, completely unintentional. When he killed me in the Forbidden Forest that night, or at least thought he did, he was actually destroying the Horcrux that was inside me. And then I think that the prophecy was right for both myself and Neville. When Neville killed Nagini, he destroyed the final Horcrux, allowing me to defeat Riddle. So you see, Riddle himself named me as the person who could defeat him, and I had no choice, Harry finished. Pansy gripped his hand so tight she was a little concerned she was hurting him, but she was processing what he said. Wait, what about the part where either must die at the hand of the other? Does that mean that he was the only one who could kill you? Harry shook his head. I don't think so, although there's been a lot of discussion about it. Personally, I think it means that I couldn't kill him until he killed the part of me that was his Horcrux, and that I could not ever have a life of my own until he was dead. Smiling at her, he rubbed her hand with his thumb. And I finally have a life worth living. She blushed and ducked her head. Fascinating, Prentice said. Riddle literally created his own end by attacking you. If that information ever got out, the logicians would have a field day analyzing that. Kirsten poked her husband in the arm. Sorry, but it's true. Still, I understand you are sharing a great secret with us and we will keep it quiet. Kirsten nodded. We will indeed. And thank you both for sharing this with us. It means a lot to both of us. Pansy smiled at her mother and looked over to see Harry smiling brightly. Mum, Dad, thank you, she said. Whatever for Angel, her father asked. For accepting us, this, she said as she looked at the beautiful heirloom on her left hand. Harry told me a little of how he ended up here for lunch with you and getting your blessing. And encouragement, Prentice reminded her. She chuckled. Speaking of that, what exactly did that mean? The elder Parkinson said. Your mother and I never wanted to marry you off to the Malfoy boy. And when he ran off with the Greengrass girl and got her pregnant, we were not sad he was off the market. But then we despaired of you finding a suitable husband, and I don't just mean one that would fit the family contract, but one that you could love. Young Harry here is a fine, fine young man. He's got a good head on his shoulders and a mighty fine heart in his chest. He has the legacy of, apparently, 3 fine upstanding wizard lines in his heritage, either by blood or by right. He glanced over at his wife and nodded at her. But the most important thing, darling, her mother said, is that this young man loves you with every fiber of his being, soul bond or not. Harry's face was flushed at the praise, but Pansy smiled at her parents and at him. He does at that, and I return it equally. Harry touched her cheek. Who would have thought a Gryffindor and a Slytherin could find such love? Prentice coughed. Well, if someone as smart as a Ravenclaw can love a Slytherin, someone as loyal as a Gryffindor could do the same, don't you think? Blinking, Harry looked over at the man. You were a Ravenclaw, Kirsten laughed. Of course he was. How else do you think he's so good at what he does? He's brilliant, my wonderful husband. Pansy mocked a gagging sound, and everyone laughed. But yes, she said, Dad was one of the top of his class in Ravenclaw. He's right brilliant, although I don't tell him that often so he won't get a big head. She grinned at her father. Prentice reached over and patted her hand. And I pretend I don't know that you think that all the time anyway, Angel. Harry was touched at this display of family. He had wished so much for this closeness growing up, but he had been denied it. But you've found it now, my love, Pansy whispered to him, once again picking up on his emotion. Harry rolled his eyes. I think we may need to talk to Anne about how to handle this aspect of the bond, love. Pansy nodded. It's fun right now, but it could become a problem. Kirsten frowned at them. Who is this aunt? Can he be trusted? Laughing, Pansy nodded. Of course, Mum. Anthony is Harry's bar manager. He's an empath. He's the one who helped us get together. No, he didn't change anything. He just kinda, nudged us together, and it worked. And I'm glad he did. She leaned over and kissed Harry on the cheek. The 4 of them chatted amiably about the young couple's engagement and discussed a few wedding ideas as they sipped their tea. Brandy followed the tea, as they all sat around the library talking. It was quite late when Harry and Pansy left after many hugs and kisses on the cheek. They apparated back to Harry's flat, and upon arrival, Pansy put her hands on either side of Harry's face and kissed him deeply. Not many men would have gone to my parents for permission, Harry. That means a lot to me. There are traditions I do not like and some that I do. Speaking of traditions, she looked at him seriously. A few months ago, Harry, you told me you could not handle that kind of responsibility, being the head of 2 houses, but to marry me, you took that on. Why? You have to know that's not important to me. I would have said yes no matter what. I love you. Why would you make yourself unhappy? Harry reached up and stroked her cheek with the back of her hand and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because it wasn't important to you, love," he said. "And being with you these months has felt like years. Good years," he said hurriedly, "but years nonetheless. I've realized a lot of things over those month years, not the least of which is that if I want to marry you, I have to accept a lot of things. My heritage is one of them. I've mitigated the impact on us as much I possibly could, but it had to be done. I had to do it for you, even though it's not what you wanted. More because it's not what you wanted, if that makes any sense." She looked up at him, deep into those malachite eyes, and stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. "It makes sense, Harry, and now I think I want dessert." "And then I looked down and he was kneeling there, the box open, the sunset glinting off the ring," Pansy said. Hermione smacked Ron in the arm. "You should have asked Harry how to propose to me." "Ow," Ron replied. "You said yes, didn't you?" Hermione rolled her eyes but smiled. "Come on then, Ron, let's let the girls gush over the moment," he said, winking at Pansy. She reached over and touched her fingertips to his before turning back to Hermione. "I, of course, thought about saying no, just to see his reaction, but then I realized I couldn't put him through that." Hermione laughed with her. Ron and Harry walked over to the front door of the pub. And outside in the early summer sunshine. "Look, Ron, I know you don't like Pansy because she was in Slytherin House, but—" Ron interrupted. "I like her just fine, Harry." Harry looked at him askance. "I'm serious, Ron." Ron stopped walking and said, "I'm serious too. Look, I know that I've been prejudiced in the past, but since you two have gotten together, I have come to know her better. And I honestly think that, if she had not had such ambition, she would have been placed in Gryffindor. And then I realized it does not matter at all. She's a wonderful person and she clearly loves you. I'm happy for you, Harry, I truly am." Harry turned and looked at him and saw the honesty in his face. He quickly embraced his best friend. "Thank you, Ron, that makes what I'm about to ask easier." Ron smacked Harry on the back and said, "Of course I'll be your best man, Git." Harry laughed. "That easy to read, am I?" Ron let him go and smacked him on top of the head. "No, I just know you too well. And I imagine that my wife is getting much the same question now. Those two have become such good friends that I'll be shocked if she doesn't ask her." Harry nodded. "Pansy hasn't said anything to me, but I think so too." Pansy finished telling Hermione the story of the engagement and what had happened at her parents' house. She wiped fresh tears from her eyes, reliving the emotional moment. "Hermione," she began. Hermione grinned at her. "Yes," she said. Pansy looked at her. "We've only been friends a few months, but I feel that I'm closer to you than anyone other than Harry. Would you please be my maid? Matron of honor." Hermione took Pansy's hands in hers and smiled. "I already said yes, my dear friend." She hugged Pansy then. "I hoped you'd ask. I'd have it no other way. Are you starting planning then? Harry said you were a phenomenal dress designer. Are you going to design your own dress?" Pansy chuckled. "Of course I am. Which is why Harry has been banned from the boutique for the next months while I work on it. We decided to have the wedding on August 11th, she said, tentatively, wondering if Hermione understood the reference. Hermione's breath caught in her throat. "Ginny's birthday?" she asked, softly. Pansy nodded. "I suggested it. I know it's weird, but I intended it as a way to honor her memory. Harry liked it." Pansy found herself being hugged tightly. "I think it's brilliant, Pansy. Some people might think it's rude, but I think it's a wonderful idea." Pansy sighed and hugged her friend back. "I hope so. I'm going to put it on the invitations that we chose this day to honor her sacrifice in the battle." Hermione nodded and wiped tears from her eyes. "I think that's perfect." Pansy and Hermione met almost every day, working with a wedding planner to plan the perfect wedding day for the couple. The wedding planner very quickly learned that he was there simply to take down the ideas and concepts and implement them, because Pansy had been picturing this in her head for quite some time. "We'll have the actual ceremony down at the beach, so there will need to be a large covered area to fit around 100 people. We are not inviting anyone who isn't family or a close friend, and the press will be specifically banned from the wedding if I have to lock Rita Skeeter in a cage my own self," Pansy told him. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, taking notes. "What about the weather?" "I doubt it will be bad weather, but if it is, put up a weather shield, of course. I do want columns defining the ceremony area, though, with lights strung between them like this." She flipped over the Muggle Bride magazine to show the planner what she wanted. "I want simple columns," she said, pointing her wand at the planner. "Tuscan, no fluted sides and not top-heavy. Simple, elegant." The planner nodded and sketched something on his pad. He turned to show it to her, and she nodded. Mostly like that, but just the one bulge and ring at the bottom and one ring at the top. She corrected his drawing. There, like that. He nodded. Do you want Muggle lights or wizard lights, Miss Parkinson? Muggle, she said. Remember, this is supposed to be a mix of Muggle and wizard ceremonies. Yes, ma'am, the planner said again. The summer had flown by in a blur. And now, Harry stood next to Ron in front of a crowd of people on the beach near his building. An elderly wizard stood near them, and in the chairs sat all of Harry's and Pansy's friends and family. They'd all managed to keep the event quiet, and not a single reporter or ministry employee who was not already a friend was present. It would truly be a quiet, beloved people only wedding. The area had been covered with a thin but solid surface, and Harry wasn't sure what exactly it was made of. It didn't move beneath the feet like sand did, but it was hard to tell that it wasn't sand either. The simple columns Pansy had requested framed the area, with twinkling lights strung between them, forming a ceiling of stars against the twilight skies. Behind him, gauzy fabrics framed the altar, which was surrounded by lilies. The tribute to his mother made him smile even bigger. Next to Ron stood Remus Lupin, and beside him, Fred Weasley. Across the altar, Hermione stood beaming, with Daphne Greengrass next to her and Tracy Davis on the end. Down the aisle now came Remus' son, Teddy, carrying a pillow with the 2 wedding rings on it. Behind him, carefully spreading flower petals as she had been instructed, came Victoire Weasley. As she reached the altar and ran over to stand in front of Hermione, the soft music from the string quartet stopped, and they began to play the wedding march slightly louder. Harry looked up to watch his bride enter. Pansy stepped from behind a curtain to stand on the carpet lining the center aisle, her father standing beside her. Harry could not stop himself. His jaw dropped open and his eyes went wide. She stopped her walk for a moment as their eyes met. She was resplendent in a flowing white dress with a halter collar, barring her back and shoulders. Extremely intricate threading, ribbons, and beadwork flowed down from the bodice through the full skirt. She carried a simple bouquet of lilies, interspersed with purple and yellow pansies. When she began to walk down the aisle, the light reflected off the dress, showing first a snake, then a lion as the fabric shifted. When she stopped a step away from him, he could no longer see the details of her dress, only her beautiful face. Her warm brown eyes filled his vision, and he barely heard her father hand her over to him, but he took her hand and turned to face the minister. They had agreed to write their own vows. When the minister finished the required comments, he turned to Harry. Harry cleared his throat and looked into Pansy's beautiful eyes. My dearest love, the other half of my heart, to you I pledge my life, my love, my support, everything I have or ever will have. I promise to share everything with you, good and bad, easy and hard, until the end of time. The minister turned to Pansy, and she spoke her vow. Heart of my heart, soul of my soul, I pledge to you all that I am, all that I was, and all that I will be. I will love you until my dying breath and beyond, as I plan to become a ghost and haunt you until the end of existence. Do you have the rings? The minister asked. Harry took the ring from Ron, the gold band a match to her engagement ring. With this ring, I pledge to you my life. Pansy held up a ring she had made, a black titanium ring with a band of green and a band of red encircling it. With this ring, I pledge to you my life, she echoed. By the power vested in me, if there are no objections. And he paused. There were none. I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride. As Harry and Pansy kissed, a golden halo of light enveloped them and expanded until the watching crowd was nearly blinded. It dissipated when the kiss broke, and Hermione caught Ron's eye across the newlywed couple. The minister rubbed his eyes. I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, Baron and Baroness Potter, Lord and Lady Black, and the Duke and Duchess Peverell. Harry and Pansy walked, arm in arm, back down the aisle through the showers of birdseed. Everyone, the reception is at the Lost Boy pub up the road, Ron yelled, and led the crowd in the wake of the bride and groom to the pub. As they arrived, Harry turned and held up his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, as you all have found out by now, I have owned the Lost Boy for 4 years now. As of tonight, though, it is no longer the Lost Boy. He pointed his wand at the cloth covering the sign, whipping it away. I give you the fox and the stag, Harry said, smiling at his new wife. How did you know my patroness is a fox? She asked him quietly as the crowd cheered. Harry grinned at her. I have my ways. He kissed her. Harry's staff was very busy, keeping the buffet full of food and the drinks flowing. Midway through the meal, Ron stood up and tapped a glass. When the room had fell silent and everyone looked over at him, he blushed and spoke. "I've been told that the best man is supposed to give a toast, and then I realized I'm Harry Potter's best man. I've known this bloke for 13 years now, since we met on that first day at Platform 9¾ and while I know how much he's accomplished, I know that for many people, this man is a legend. So I thought about all the moments that weren't legendary." He looked over at Harry, who was hiding his face behind a napkin, and Pansy, who was laughing at Harry. "And I decided not to talk about those. Instead, I wanted to talk about the man he truly is." Harry never wanted the fame he has received, and he has never tried to be a hero. What he has done, though, is what he felt needed to be done, no matter what the obstacles, and for that, I will forever be his friend. He saved my dad's life, and he mourned my mother and sister when they lost theirs. I saw how he tried to blame himself for their losses, and I'm here to say, Harry, it was not your fault. No matter what you had done that night, I don't think you could have saved them. Because they died for a purpose, the lives of everyone here and around the world. And if none of you has realized, Harry and Pansy chose to get married today to honor my sister Ginevra's life. This would have been her birthday. Ginny, you are missed and loved, and I hope you're smiling down on us right now. Ron turned to Harry and clasped his shoulder. The family and I talked, and we all thank you for your tribute to Ginny. We think she would have approved of you two getting married, and I want you to know I approve as well. You are my best friend and my brother. Pansy, welcome to the family. He raised his glass as the entire room cheered. Harry stood and embraced Ron, and then turned to face the crowd and cleared his throat. Everyone quieted down again. I know it is not traditional for the groom to give a speech, but I feel the need to. He raised his glass. I thank you all for coming out to my wedding, even though most of you think I abandoned you. For that, you have my apologies. I had my reasons to leave your world, but I am slowly coming back. I thank you for your patience and attendance here today. He turned to Pansy and reached out a hand for her. Taking it, she rose next to him. He turned back to the crowd. Pansy and I both thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your attendance here today. You all mean the world to us, and we are happy to share this wonderful day with you. We love you all. He raised his glass, and everyone clinked glasses and cheered as he kissed Pansy. I love you, Mrs. Potter Black Peveril, he said teasingly. And I love you, Mr. Potter Peveril Black. How are we doing to sort out all these names? She asked him. Well, first we go on a honeymoon to Greece, and then we visit Gringotts and sort it all out. I'm hoping we can combine the 3 families into one family name, but we'll have to see what the barristers can work out. She smiled at him. I'll happily be known by whatever name or names are required so the world knows that we're together, Harry. He kissed her then, in full view of the guests, who applauded them. But for now, Mrs. Potter, I believe we owe these people a dance. Harry swept Pansy out to the dance floor, and the band started to play a soft, slow, romantic song. They gracefully moved around the dance floor, and they could only see each other. Everything else faded to gray as they danced. The band finished playing, and they slowly stopped moving. The guests watching cheered, and then couples started entering the dance floor. For what seemed like hours they danced, with each other and with guests. Harry made sure to save a dance for Hermione, Daphne, Tracy, and even little Victoire, who he held up with one arm while he twirled her around, her beaming grin visible to everyone. They took breaks to rest, and for more food and drink, but then resumed celebrating. As midnight approached, most of the guests had left. The wedding party and a few family members remained, and Harry looked around at them. Thank you, all of you, for making this day happen. I have it on good authority that the wedding planner has made it home with all his appendages attached and intact, and is probably right now finishing off that bottle of tequila I gave him as a thank you. Pansy smacked his shoulder and the others laughed. Should have made you right. I will not hit my husband into your vows, Harry said teasingly. I'm kidding, he exclaimed as she raised her hand again. He looked around at his smiling friends and family. Anyway, I wanted to share something special with all of you. He pulled a box from behind the bar and set it on the table. These 2 bottles of wine were from my parents' house. Somehow, they escaped being damaged when the house was destroyed, and I found them a couple months ago. They're not fancy, but they are now well-aged. I have no idea how they taste, but I can't think of a better time or a better group of family to share them with. He popped the cork from one bottle and sniffed. Smells good. He poured a little out into a glass and took a deeper sniff. Smells excellent, in fact. He poured a glass for everyone, and then started to hand them out. Hermione and Tonks both declined, and he quirked an eyebrow at them both. Hermione looked up at Ron, took his hand and nodded. Tonks did the same with Remus. Harry beamed at them both and raised his glass. To friends, to family, to new beginnings, and most importantly, to 2 new lives we will be blessed with. Congratulations, Ron, Hermione, and Tonks, Remus, he said happily. When all their guests had gone and the staff was cleaning up the pub, Harry and Pansy went upstairs. When they got to the top of the stairs and Harry opened the door to their apartment, he surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms and carrying her in. He set her down on her feet inside and kissed her deeply as she laughed. He kicked the door closed and looked at her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Potter," he said, his eyes full of love. She reached up and touched his cheek. "That is something I will never tire of hearing. Now come, help me take my dress off." She walked over to the bedroom, walking slowly and casting glances back over her bare shoulder as she did so. Harry chuckled and followed her to the bed. He slid his arms around her waist and kissed her shoulder as he stood behind her. "But you are simply stunning in that dress, love. What if I don't want you to take it off?" Pansy laid her head back on his shoulder and sighed at his kisses. "Then you're going to have to be very creative, because I intend to keep you up all night long, husband mine." "Well, in that case." Harry carefully undid the fastenings on the back of the collar and waist of the dress, and very, very carefully helped her step out of it. He turned to the dress form in the corner of the room that she had placed there the previous day, following her instructions for how to hang the dress properly. It took almost 15 minutes for him to do so, and he wondered why she had given him such detailed instructions on how it had to hang. "Pansy, is this right?" he said, turning around. Well, that was what he intended to say. What came out was "Pansy is TH," as his voice died in his throat. She was standing next to the bed, smiling wickedly at him. She was wearing a white corset made of satin and lace, with matching garter, stockings, and panties. She had a short, sheer robe pulled over her arms. Harry couldn't help but stare. They'd been together almost a year now, but she'd never worn anything like this. She looked just as stunning as she had in her dress, but in a different, sensual way. Pansy watched him staring at her and was pleased. This was exactly the effect she'd hoped to have on him. She walked over to him, one foot in front of the other, slowly, sensually. It was hard to keep from giggling at his expression, his eyes wide and his mouth open like that, but she managed. She reached up to stroke her fingers down his jaw and gently closed his mouth. Without a word, she unbuttoned his vest and slid it back off his shoulders. When he started to raise a hand to her, she gently pushed it back down to his side. She unbuttoned his shirt, pulling the tails from his trousers, and slid it off. She knelt down and pulled his shoes off, then stood again to unbuckle his belt and unbutton his trousers. She pushed them down to the floor, leaving him only in his boxers. She slid her arms around him and leaned up to kiss him. His hands reached up to her shoulders as he kissed her back, and she gently drew him back to the bed. He reached for his wand on the night table and waved it around the flat, all lights extinguishing but for a few candles around the bed, and then he lay down on the bed with his wife and made love to her until neither of them could stay awake any longer. They left the building in Anthony's capable hands and took their honeymoon in Greece, as they had planned. By Harry's preference, they took in the sights and tour as Muggle tourists, and Pansy thought to herself that it was definitely a different way to see things. She had gotten used to Harry's mix of wizard and Muggle life, and she had been surprised to find she liked it. They walked the streets of Athens, toured the Parthenon, took photographs of the Acropolis, visited the temples of the old gods and goddesses. They went to Rhodes and toured the Colossus, and swam in the Aegean Sea. In the evenings, they ate at small local restaurants, avoiding the crowded tourist spots. They went dancing one night, spent another walking along the warm beach under the stars. At night, they made love as if they had never done it before every time. They spoke of their dreams and wishes as they snuggled together in bed and their hopes for the future. When it was time to leave, Harry took her hands in his and gazed into her eyes. "I never want this feeling to end, Pansy," he said to her. "I love you." Pansy pulled his hands up and kissed them. "Neither do I, Harry, and I love you." They arrived home, finding that all was well with Harry's businesses and that all their wedding gifts had been placed in the apartment for them. Pansy sighed. "I hate thank you notes," she said quietly. Harry chuckled. "I would offer to help, but did you see the stack of paperwork Anthony left for me downstairs? It's going to take me 2 days to go through that. Cheeky bugger was clearly hiding most of it from me before the wedding." Harry shook his head, chuckling. "But it can wait until tomorrow." Pansy was going through a stack of letters on the kitchen counter. "Here's a letter from Mum and Dad. They're asking if we will come over for dinner after we get back." She looked up at him, smiling. "Want to surprise them?" He grinned back at her. "I like that idea." They held hands and apparated to her parents' house. Nala greeted them at the door and let them in. "Mum, Dad," Pansy called. "Pansy, we're in the sitting room," her mother replied. Harry and Pansy walked into the room smiling. "You're supposed to be on your honeymoon, dears. Whatever are you doing here?" Pansy grinned and stepped over to hug her mother while Harry shook her father's hand, only to be pulled into a back-slapping hug. "You said you wanted us to come over for dinner after we got back, so we're back and we're here for dinner," she said. Prentice chuckled. "She has your sense of humor, dear. Harry, you're looking well. Grease agreed with you, I think." Harry smiled as he turned to hug Kirsten. "Welcome back, Harry," she said to him. "Thank you, Mum," he said, making her smile brightly. "And Dad," he said, looking at Prentice. The young couple sat on the couch, Harry's arm around her shoulders and her hand in his. "We just wanted to surprise you, Mum," Pansy said. "We had a lovely time in Greece, but it's good to be home and around family." Prentice and Kirsten asked them questions about their honeymoon, and the newlyweds answered them and told stories about what they'd seen. The conversation continued over dinner, and afterwards, Prentice asked Harry to come into the library to go over their agreements. Kirsten and Pansy went upstairs to Pansy's old bedroom. "Do you have enough room at Harry's to take all your books, Pansy?" Kirsten asked, as they both worked with their wands to empty the bookcases that filled an entire wall of Pansy's bedroom, and then moved on to everything else that was left. "I assume you already moved things from your apartment." Pansy nodded. "I convinced him to expand the apartment with the same spells he used on the pub. Although we are talking about finding a house now and renting the flat to Anthony and Sydney, I suspect that's another wedding we'll be attending in the near future." Kirsten smiled. "That's my Pansy, always thinking ahead and seeing what others don't or can't." She hugged her daughter. "I'm so happy for you, love," she whispered into Pansy's hair. Pansy hugged her back tightly. "Thank you, Mum. I'm so very happy now, happier than I ever thought I could be." She pulled back and kissed her mother's cheek. "And now, while Harry and Dad are busy talking business, let's get these boxes over to our flat. And so you see, I think you'd do well if you moved your investments in these companies over to these companies. You'll get a much better return over the next 10 years, although these first will provide for a better short-term payout," Prentice said. Harry nodded as he looked over the documents. "I see what you're saying, and the long term is what I am interested in. I know that right now I have a large amount of money thanks to my inheritances, but I want to ensure that all my descendants have the same or better," Harry replied. "So I'll do that when I go to Gringotts on Monday. I have to go find that box my mother mentioned in her message, and then meet with the barristers to decide how to combine these houses into one useful entity." He sighed. "I'm going to be very busy for the next few weeks." He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, then reached for a sheet of paper and quill. He began making a list. "Dad, can you handle making the investment changes? You have the power to do that from our original agreement." Prentice smiled with pride at this young man who was now a part of his family. "Certainly, son." Harry looked up at the tone of his father-in-law's voice. "What?" he asked. Prentice gripped Harry's shoulder and said warmly, "I'm just so proud of you, son. I wish I had known you sooner." "I'd have liked that." "Sir," Harry said, "especially if it had been when I was having to live with my aunt and uncle." He trailed off as a thought occurred to him. "Wait, where were those real estate listings?" He looked through the papers and scrolls until he found the one he wanted. "I need to purchase this property," he said, tapping on the paper with his finger. "I have plans for this." He grinned at Prentice. "Can it be done?" Prentice nodded. "I'll take care of it tomorrow. The profits you'll make from selling off these investments will pay for it by themselves, so I'll do that right after. You'll be at Gringotts. Will Pansy be with you?" Harry nodded. "Yes, sir." The older man squeezed the younger's shoulder and nodded. "Well then, I know your new wife is probably about ready to go home, so the rest of this can wait. I'll start the changes for this on Monday morning and meet you at Gringotts before lunch." "Ah, perfect timing," he said, as Pansy lightly knocked on the door. "Ready to go home, husband?" she asked. Harry nodded and stood. He clasped Prentice's hand again and then walked over to hug Kirsten. He took Pansy's hand then and smiled at them all. "Good night," the two of them chorused and apparated back home. The next morning, Harry sat in the office going through paperwork when he heard Anthony come in. "Anthony, can you come in here, please?" he called out. The tall young man walked in the office a few minutes later. "Yes, boss?" he asked. "Sit down, Aunt," Harry said, and the man did. As you know, now that Pansy and I are married, I will start to return to the world of magic, and that means I'm not going to be able to spend as much time here and give this business the attention it needs from an owner. Anthony frowned. You're not selling, are you, Harry? He asked, concerned. Harry shook his head. Not exactly. Aunt, you've been with me since the beginning, and you've been through everything with me. You helped us find each other and the love we have. You're a part of my family, Anthony, and I have been remiss far too long in acknowledging that. He handed Anthony a stack of papers and a quill. The places for you to sign are marked. I'm giving you a 49% partnership in the pub and hotel. Anthony looked at Harry in shock. You're not serious, he said. Harry smiled. I'm absolutely serious. You'll take over the daily responsibilities as a full partner, and you'll have my full authority to run things. I expect you'll want to promote Brittany to bar manager and Holly to front of house manager. And of course, you get part of the profits. Somehow shaking off the surprise, Anthony read through the papers and signed them. I can't begin thank you, Harry. You have no idea how much this means to me. Harry shook his head. I have a relatively good idea of how much because it's how I felt when I found this place. You can make any changes you feel will enhance the place within reason. Make it your own, but I think you and I have found the right identity for this place long ago. And you can't change the name, he said, grinning. Wouldn't dream of it, boss. Partner, Anthony said. The two men stood up and shook hands. Harry stepped out from behind the desk. And now I leave you to all the paperwork you thought you were going to dump on me. Anthony looked at him and saw the mischievous grin, shook his head and sat down. I knew you'd get me back for that, but wasn't it nice getting married and not wondering if the rum was gone? Harry laughed. Well played, my friend. And now I'm going to surprise my wife with my early return from work. He went up the stairs, grinning. Pansy, love, I'm home, he said as he entered the flat. She turned from where she was placing books into bookcases he didn't know they had and smiled. Made Anthony your partner already, love? He stared at her for a minute and then laughed, shaking his head. Do I not have any secrets from you? She walked over and kissed him softly on the cheek. You should know better than that by now, my love, she said. But good, now you can help me put away the books. She turned back to her task and Harry started helping. I sent an owl to Ron and Hermione to come over for dinner tonight and to bring Remus, Tonks, and the kids. Think you're up to a big family meal. What, you don't want me to get Chris to cater it? He said, teasing. She whapped him in the arm with a book. I know better, you'll love the chance to cook for everyone. He laughed and winced. You're right, of course. The apartment was loud and noisy and full, and Harry was absolutely loving every minute of it. So was Pansy, as she, Hermione, and Tonks stood by the newly created library area and discussed the books. Ron and Remus sat at the kitchen bar, talking to Harry while he cooked. Harry set them to chopping and peeling various vegetables, and laughed as they took their orders from him. Teddy bounced young Rose on his knee as she giggled over a photo album. Harry stopped cooking for a moment and looked around. The smile on his face said it all. Ron started to speak, but Remus put a hand on his arm to quiet him. Ron looked at him questioningly, and Remus simply said, family. Harry blushed, even though he hadn't been meant to hear that, and nodded. Exactly. The entire family sat down to the dinner, which consisted of many different dishes that everyone took a portion of. Dinner was a rowdy affair, with the kids yelling and splattering food and the adults getting into joking arguments, and Harry had never, ever been happier. After everyone had finished off their plates and some had had seconds, Harry stood up. Pardon me, everyone, he said, and they all turned to him and quieted down. I just wanted to say a few things. I'm very glad you all came to dinner tonight. Pansy and I missed you, and we really enjoyed having everyone over tonight. And no, you don't have to leave anytime soon. But I wanted to get this out where everyone could hear it. Tomorrow, Pansy and I will go to the Potter family vault and search there for the Peveril box that my mother mentioned in her message. We will also be meeting with the barristers to discuss the options for combining the 3 family names. I have been reading up on family lines. Everyone gaped at him at this, and he grinned. Never let it be said my wife and my best friend haven't rubbed off on me some. He reached over and put his hand on Pansy's shoulder and looked at Hermione. But I've been reading, and I have a suspicion about what they're going to say. And since I'm not entirely positive, I can't say for certain. But I can say that I would like Hermione and Tonks to please be available tomorrow afternoon. I may need your help with some things, if you don't mind. Tonks looked at Remus, who nodded, and at Hermione, who was looking at Ron, who also nodded. They both looked up and said, okay, almost in stereo. Harry smiled at them. I promise it will not be anything bad, and like I said, I'm not sure it will be necessary. He cleared his throat. I also want you all to know that you are truly my family, and tonight has proven that. None of you by actual blood, but by chosen blood. And he smiled at Tonks, who was of the House of Black, and others simply by being chosen. He squeezed Pansy's shoulder and looked at Ron and Hermione. No matter what happens with my family line, you are all to be considered heirs-elect of the Potter, Black, and Peverell families. I have had a will made out to that effect. He held up his glass of wine. To family of the truest kind. Everyone raised their glasses, eyes glinting with half-shed tears. To family, they all chorused. Harry and Pansy walked into Gringotts the next morning, hand in hand. They strode up to the main goblin, and Harry said, I'd like to visit our vault, please. He presented his key, and they were led back down into a cart that flew over rails and down into the depths of the bank. They stopped in front of a different door than he remembered, and he asked the goblin about that. The Black and Potter vaults were combined into one, Mr. Potter, in order to provide enough space, the goblin said in answer. I understand, Harry said, and gestured for the goblin to open the door. Entering the vault, Harry was quite simply gobsmacked. Gold and silver glinted every direction he turned. Piles of coins, treasures on shelves on the walls, jewels and jewelry in cases hung on the walls. He looked around and finally saw a large black trunk sitting in one corner of the vault. He had not seen this before. Is that a Black family trunk? He asked the goblin. The goblin looked at him, confused. What trunk? He asked. Pansy looked where Harry was pointing and smiled. That's some powerful magic, love. I can see it, but that has be because of our bond. She turned to the goblin. She had learned something from Harry's treatment of the creatures and knelt before him as a gesture of respect. If I may touch your shoulder. The goblin paused, then nodded, and she laid 2 fingers on his shoulder. His eyes grew wide as he looked into the corner and saw the trunk. No goblin has ever recorded that as content of these vaults, Mr. Potter. Mrs. Potter is correct. That is some power magic that it is hidden from us. Harry strode over to it and lifted the lock. At his touch, an audible click sounded and the lock fell open. Harry opened the lid carefully and looked down into a space much larger than the trunk would imply. It's bigger on the inside, he murmured, and felt Pansy kneel at his side to look into it. After a long, long moment passed, he turned to the goblin. I'm going to need a bigger vault. Harry and Pansy met with the barristers next, having gone through the contents of the chest and working with the goblins to have the vault expanded. Harry grinned at his wife as they walked into the room. I can't wait to talk to your father. Everything I dared plan I can do. Everything, love, he exclaimed. She was infected by his excitement and squeezed his arm against her. I believe you, dear heart, but first we have to take care of the name issue, she said softly. They sat at the table with 3 barristers and papers were shuffled around. One of the lawyers spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Potter, we understand you are here to discuss the combination of the Potter and Black families. And Peverell, Pansy spoke up confidently. The 3 others blinked at her. Harry lifted up a scroll and tossed it across the table at them. As the sole living blood survivor of the Peverell family, through my father's mother's line, I am also now the head of that family, Harry stated. The 3 huddled together and looked over the document and conferred. After several minutes, they sat back in their individual seats. Well then, the lead barrister said, this document appears to be in order. Do you have any idea what is required to join together 2, much less 3 families, Mr. Potter? Harry nodded. I think I have a general understanding of what is necessary, but please explain so my wife will understand. The head barrister nodded. You will essentially become a duke. I know you were named as much in your wedding, but this would become in deed, act, and title, not just name. As a duke, you are the head of up to 4 houses. However, and the man paused. Harry looked at him expectantly. It seemed to him his studies had been correct. Pansy looked a little confused, but took comfort in Harry's confidence. Go on, Harry said. Each family will require a lady to serve under the Duchess, the man said with a nod to Pansy. Mrs. Potter, you will be the Duchess, and you can choose one of the family names to take as that family's lady. But Mr. Potter must take 2 other wives, 1 for each line. Harry coughed. I'm sorry. Shouldn't that have been designate a female of the family to be a lady? He asked, very pointedly. The lawyer frowned. But you are an only child, Mr. Potter. That means... Harry interrupted, family doesn't have to be blood. I am the heir of the ancient and noble House of Black by the last will and testament of my godfather, Sirius Black. Is that not correct? He didn't realize he had stood, hands on the table, leaning over the edge of it. The man on the other side nodded, glancing back and forth between his colleagues. Technically, that is correct, but still, and Harry interrupted again. Nymphadora Lupin ni Tonks is a daughter of the House of Black, is she not, and therefore my cousin by designation, he demanded. Pansy tried so very hard not to smile at the sheer confidence her husband was exuding. He had studied, beyond what she realized originally. He knew exactly what needed to be done, and she began to see his plan. If you'll excuse me a moment, she said, and Harry nodded. She didn't even look to the lawyers but left the room. Out in the bank proper, she sent a patroness message to Hermione and Tonks. They arrived at almost the same time. Hermione had brought Ron with her, and Pansy nodded. Good, we'll need you too, Brother Weasley. She turned to Tonks. Firstly, Harry is in there right now combining the three families. He is to be named a duke, and I his Duchess and Lady of the Potter family. You will be named Lady Black, as you are a descendant of that line and his cousin by designation thanks to Sirius. She turned to Hermione. I gather he means for you to be named Lady Peveril, but I am not sure how. He's probably stalling that point, but we need to go in there now so he can finish up. Ron, you're going to be required. She reached over and took his hand, rubbing her thumb along a scar. Understand. Ron's eyes widened and he nodded. Of course. Let's go then, ladies. He walked over to the door and opened it for them, only to hear Harry yell out, I am not taking another wife, and that is final. The three of them entered and arranged themselves behind and beside Harry. Pansy took his left arm and stood firmly by his side. Tonks stood to Pansy's left and slightly behind. Ron took up position immediately to Harry's right, with Hermione on his right arm. Harry turned and gave them all a tight smile. You have accepted my claim for Nymphadora Lupin to be named Lady Black Lupin, based on her status as a descendant of the House of Black. My godfathers will designating her as my cousin, and my request correct, Harry said. The barristers nodded. But for the House of Peveril, the second one began, and Harry cut him off. The Lady Hermione Peveril Weasley will lead that family, Harry said firmly. Without a word, Ron lifted his right hand up. The barristers looked confused. Finally, Ron spoke. Do you all see this scar? They nodded. Harry has a matching one on his right hand. Harry held his right hand up to display it. Ron continued. We are blood brothers, our oath taken on the eve of the Battle of Hogwarts, binding us together as family. My legally wedded wife here, and he put his arm around Hermione, is therefore Harry's sister-in-law. Harry nodded. And as such, she is a member of my family and a valid choice for the family Peveril. Now, draw up the paperwork. We will be available to sign it after we all have lunch. He turned to the goblins attending the meeting. Please equalize the contents of my vault, with the exception of the books, between 3 separate vaults. The books should be delivered to the Potter Mansion in Godric's Hollow. I also want inspectors to look at number 12, Grimmauld Place, to see what can be salvaged and everything brought to the Potter Mansion. He turned to his family. Now, shall we all go to the Leaky for lunch? Harry and his family ate at the Leaky Cauldron, and there was much discussion about what had just happened. Harry smiled and laughed and shook his head. Okay, I'll answer, guys, but let's get some food in us, too. Everyone slowly quieted down, and in seeming agreement, all looked at Hermione to let her go first. Harry, what just happened? She asked, simply. He laughed again and took a bite of his lunch, and then reached for Pansy's hand. When he swallowed, he said, I had to either assign members to each family, combine the 3 families into one line, or give up the other 2 names completely. The latter option was not going to work. If I gave up the Black name, it would revert to the oldest, closest living relative, and that's Narcissa Malfoy. That actually reminded me that Tonks was a Black, and the rest of it kind of fell from there. I thought about combining the families together, but that would require one last name, and that just didn't feel right. He took a drink of his butterbeer and chewed through a few more bites of food as they all thought about that, and then continued. By accepting all 3 families as separate, I could choose a primary family name for myself and Pansy, and then only needed to name a lady for each other house. The barristers thought that, since I have no blood family and Pansy is an only child, that I would have to marry 2 other women. Pansy growled, and everyone laughed. That clearly wasn't going to happen, Harry said with a smile. And they didn't realize that Sirius making me the heir of the Black House technically made Tonks my cousin. He smiled at the older woman. Although I've realized that for a long time now. And nobody knew about Ron and I becoming blood brothers that night, which made Hermione the perfect candidate for the Peveril family. The woman in question blushed at that. Ignatus Peveril could very well have been your ancestor, Maione. When you get a chance to peruse the library of books she left, you'll see why you were the only choice. He worked on finishing his meal and then sat back. Ron spoke up then. Harry, what did you mean by the Potter mansion? He asked. Did you buy a house already? Harry shook his head. The Potter family goes back to the 12th century. It's one of the older houses, but not quite as old as the Black Line. There's a family home in Godric's Hollow. It's not the house we found on Christmas, Hermione. Mom and Dad were staying there during the war because the manor was too well known. He took a sip of his drink. Pansy and I have been there a couple of times, but until I finalize the paperwork, the wards won't let us enter the grounds. Creature, Winky, and a few other house elves have been there getting it ready for occupation. More of the mysteries of house elves, the wards don't affect them at all, as long as they're there to take care of the place. Holding up a hand to quell Hermione's outburst, he said, they are there of their own choice, and they all have employment with me and get paid before you start yelling. Hermione shut her mouth and settled down. After we sign all the necessary paperwork, I'll receive the symbols of the families, one of which will signify to the manor's wards that I am the head of house. And the manor will be open to anyone in our family who wants to stay there, he said, and Pansy nodded. Also, the doors are always open to anyone who wants to visit, she said, and we will expect lots of visits. She glanced at Harry, a sly smile on her face. Especially anyone who wants to help with the baby. She could not have gotten a more surprised reaction out of him at that news if she had hit him in the back of the head with a board and announced she was the love child of Tom Riddle and Minerva McGonagall. She giggled at the look on his face as everyone cheered and shouted congratulations. She turned fully to him and used her index finger to push his jaw back up from the floor. Surprise, love, she said, her face beaming at him. Harry stared at her, and then snapped out of his shock to say, really? We're going to have a baby, she nodded at him, smiling. Yes, love. He leapt out of his seat and picked her up around the waist, laughing, and twirled her around in the air. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply and then hugged her close against him. A cough from Hermione made him blush as he remembered the others in the room with them. Sorry, guys, got a little excited, he said, but they all nodded knowingly. It's okay, Harry, you're going to be a father, Hermione said happily. Everyone got up and gathered around the couple to congratulate them. Back at Gringotts, Harry and his family gathered in the same room as before with the subdued and disappointed lawyers. They carefully read everything that was given to them to sign, and finding everything as it should be, gave their signatures where necessary. When it was done, Harry was handed a case by one of the goblins. Your items of house, Duke Potter, he said with a bow. Harry opened the case and frowned. Pansy, love. You're better at transfiguration than I am. Help me here for a moment, please. She walked over and looked in the case. I see what you mean, Harry. Let me see what I can do. She took out her wand and tapped it on something in the case, murmuring a spell. She looked satisfied with that and did the same on another. She nodded, smiling. Better, dear. Harry beamed at her and touched her hand and nodded. Tonks, he said, picking up a necklace from the case and holding it out to her. I present to you, Lady Black of the ancient and noble House of Black, this house necklace, bestowing upon you all the rights and privileges of that position. No one not recognized as a member of the Black family line will not be able to remove it from your person. The chain was platinum, and the pendant hanging from it bearing the Black family crest was an opal. He undid the clasp and put it around her neck, and then hugged her tightly. Hermione. He said then, reaching in the case for another necklace, and told her the same words, put the necklace on her, and hugged her as well. Hermione kissed him on the cheek as she thanked him. Her necklace was a simple gold chain with a quill and parchment charm hanging from it, and on the parchment was the Peveril crest. He turned to Ron and Remus, who had finally been able to join them, and held up 2 signet rings. As Lord Peveril Weasley, this ring grants you the same rights and privileges as the lady, and the same protections apply. Remus, the same for you, Lord Blacklupin. He put the rings in their hands and embraced them both. Harry then lifted a slim silver coronet out of the case and placed it on Pansy's head. Duchess Potter, he said simply, and kissed her. She took a matching band and placed it on his. Duke Potter, my heart, she said, and kissed him back. They stared into each other's eyes for a long moment and then faced the rest of the family. These are largely ceremonial, Pansy explained. My engagement ring, which was Harry's mother's, serves as my regular house jewelry. Harry's signet ring does the same for him. So don't expect to see us wearing these all the time, she said, grinning. And now, I would like to invite everyone back to the mansion for the grand unveiling and dinner if you are all free." He turned to Pansy. "You told your parents correct," she nodded back at him. "They're meeting us there at 3. "Well then," Harry said, and turned to the now empty case. He tapped it with his wand and muttered Portus. "Everyone gather round. Next stop, Potter Mansion," he said happily, and everyone circled the table and touched the case. He tapped the case and triggered the portkey, and they all disappeared. Harry picked himself up off the gravel drive leading up to the ornate gates of his family estate, muttering that he'd never managed to master arriving properly by portkey. Pansy gave him a hand up. "Of course you don't land on your face," he said, chuckling. She brushed him off and gave him a quick kiss as the others came together around them. "Right then," he said, and turned to the gates. They stretched wide enough to admit 3 Muggle cars at once, and were taller than they had any right to be. Black ironwork made the gates up, bars and scrollwork surrounding the large P in the center. "Duke Potter and family entering," he said loudly, and held forth his right hand with the signet ring on his middle finger. After a moment, a loud clack sounded, and with a creak the gates slowly swung open, splitting down the middle of the P. Harry took Pansy's hand in his and led the group, which now included Pansy's parents, up the gentle slope of the drive. Waist-high hedges bordered the drive, and beyond them swept up a perfectly trimmed, beautifully green lawn. To the right was a small hill, atop which sat a small shade structure over a patio and fountain, and to the left a small duck pond nestled amongst weeping willow trees. Further to the right, as the drive curved to the left, everyone could see a large fenced-in area where a horse grazed. They topped a small hillock, and the manor appeared before them. The main building appeared to have 2 stories, and the exterior was a medium brown stucco finish with a dark gray roof and shutters. The drive led to a roundabout with a large fountain in the center. Off to the right side of the main building was a smaller 1-story building in the same finish and trim. Flower beds lined the foundation of the house, and very old shade trees sat to either side of the buildings. "It's gorgeous, Harry," Pansy murmured as she wrapped her arms around his waist and laid her head on his shoulder. "We'll be very happy here, dear heart." He smiled as he took in the view. If he'd been asked to design his perfect house, this would have been it, although smaller. "Shall we?" he asked the others and started down the slight hill. As they approached the front door of the main building, it opened, and Creature and Winky stood in the doorway. "Welcome, Master Potter," Creature said kindly. He had lightened up considerably since Harry had first met the surly old elf, and as he looked at Creature, he wondered if somehow the elf hadn't gotten younger. He definitely looked more spry than usual. "Thank you, Creature. Good to see you again, Winky," he said to the female elf. "Thank you both so very much for taking the task of cleaning the mansion up. If the inside looks as good as the grounds do, I'm going to have to give you both a bonus." Winky stared at the floor and said, "Thank you, Master Potter," while Creature stood up a little straighter. "Master, the entire house has been cleaned and is ready for you and your family." Creature stepped back from the door, letting the group walk in. Harry and Pansy stopped in the middle of the foyer, trying to look everywhere at once. The room was square, but large, with a very high ceiling and an antique bronze chandelier hanging above the dark wood floors. A mud area was set into the wall to the right, with hooks and a bench, and a place to dry wet shoes. To the left, a large mirror adorned the wall next to a fireplace which also had hooks on the mantel. A large painting of Hogwarts hung on the wall above the fireplace. "If Master and Mistress and their friends would remove their shoes and place them over here, so as not to get dirt and dust on the floors," Winky said quietly. Harry did as asked, and the others followed his example. In sock feet, he and Pansy led everyone into the hallway beyond the foyer and then into a great room. The dark wood floors continued through the hall and into the great room, which had matching wood paneling although not the same shade as the floors. Bookcases lined 2 walls, packed with books. Another fireplace centered upon a 3rd wall, and the 4th wall was floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the backyard. In front of the windows sat a baby grand piano, shining and waiting for a player. A sofa and chairs, framed by a red square rug, sat in the middle of the room. Armchairs were placed in various places around the room, near the bookshelves. As they explored the house, they found the massive dining room that could easily seat 15 people, the well-appointed kitchen where house elves were busy preparing for dinner, a study with a giant oak desk and every wall covered in books, and a greenhouse room waiting for plants. Harry figured that the bedrooms would be upstairs, and so he let the group wander as they wished. Hermione, of course, headed straight for the nearest bookcase, and after a quick kiss on Harry's lips, Pansy followed. Harry, Ron, Remus, and Prentice went into the study and found a well-appointed bar in one corner. Pouring them all a drink, Harry handed the glasses out and sat in an armchair by the fireplace. "I think every room has a fireplace. I wonder if any or all of them are connected to the Flu network," he said absent-mindedly. "The fireplace in the great room is, Master, as is this one in the study. None of the ones in the bedrooms are permanently connected, although they will connect to send if necessary." Harry started, not realizing Creature had followed them. "Thank you, Creature," he said. "Can you check with the kitchen to make sure dinner will be ready?" Creature nodded and walked down the hallway. "Well, cousin, brother, father, what do you think?" Harry asked the three men with him. "I think it's brilliant," Ron said. Remus smiled and sank into a leather chair as well. "Very, very nice, Harry, although I have been here before," he said with a smile. "Your parents would be so very proud of you today, I know I am." Pansy Parkinson walked over and dropped a hand on Harry's shoulder. "James and Lily would definitely approve of how you handled things. Kirsten and I certainly do as well." He went and sat next to Remus, shaking the man's hand. "It's been a long time, Remus. Too long, and I am sorry for that." Lupin shook his head. "It's understandable, Prentice. I'm just glad that everything has worked out, your daughter and he sighed. "Harry, I know I'm not serious, but—" Harry cut him off. "Remus." He stood and walked over to the man. "You are my family. You have every right to offer me advice. I don't have to take it," he said with a chuckle, "but you need to understand. You're like an uncle to me, except you're my cousin-in-law, so don't make it weird." All of them laughed, and Lupin grasped Harry's forearm with his hand. "I am so very, very proud of you, cousin. Although one of these days you will have to explain why you thought disappearing for 3 years was a good idea." Harry smiled at the older man. "Agreed, but not today. Today is a time of celebration. But I'm glad you both brought up my parents." He looked over at his father-in-law. "Dad, did that real estate venture work out?" Prentice smiled again at this young man who now called him father and nodded. "It did indeed. Would you like me to share the news now or wait until dinner?" Harry grinned. "Dinner, please, because first I have some news for you. Pansy, could you come into the study and bring Mum?" he called down the hall, raising his voice. A moment later, his wife came in with Kirsten. "Did you have something you wanted to tell your parents, love?" Harry said, grinning widely at her. Pansy smiled back and said, "Maybe you want to sit down for this, Mum." Kirsten walked over to where Prentice was sitting and perched on the arm of his chair. Prentice put an arm around his wife's waist, and they both looked at Pansy, waiting. "You've both got about 8.5 months to figure out how to spoil a child enough for 2 sets of grandparents," she said, a smile playing on her lips. It took a moment, but Kirsten understood first and slid off the arm of the chair into her husband's lap. Prentice got it a moment later and let out a yell of joy. "You're pregnant, you're going to have a baby," her mother said happily. Harry and Pansy walked over to them to help them disentangle themselves and received hugs from them both. "How long have you known?" her father demanded, and Pansy chuckled. "About a week," she said, "but I didn't tell Harry until lunch today. I wish you could have seen his face. He looked like someone hit him with a board." She giggled. Harry reached over and tickled her, earning himself a yelp and a smack on the arm, which he took with a laugh. He put his arm around Pansy and held her close, as her parents heaped them with congratulations. Harry sat at the head of the dinner table later that evening. Pansy sat to his right, and her parents next to her. Remus and Tonks sat next to them with their son. To his left, Hermione and Ron sat with their daughter. Harry looked over his family and sighed happily. He took a knife and clinked it against his glass and stood up. "I'd like to propose a toast," he started simply. He looked around. He'd planned on making an elaborate speech, but suddenly he felt like that didn't apply here. Instead, he lifted his glass and spoke. "To family and to love." Everyone chorused it back and all drank. He sat back down and reached for Pansy's hand. The elves brought dinner out and everyone started eating. They all conversed easily as they ate, and when everyone had finished, Prentice cleared his throat and stood. "I, too, would like to propose a toast. Many months ago, my daughter told me that she had started seriously dating a young man, and she was quickly falling in love with him. I later learned that man was Harry Potter, and I admit I was torn when I found this out. On the one hand, he was the hero that defeated Riddle. On the other hand, he was the man who had disappeared without a trace, leaving the wizarding world to mourn his absence. So I set out to meet this man, and discover what his intentions were for my daughter. I found him to be quite charming, quite intelligent, and a business owner to boot. Then one day, he arrived on my doorstep bearing trade agreements and a desire to ask my daughter to marry him. I was concerned at first, but he convinced me that not only did he love her dearly, he wanted to join our families in multiple ways. The day he proposed to her, and she said yes, they came to tell us that she had said yes, and shared a very, very special moment with us. He wiped at his eyes and cleared his throat again. We discussed many business things, Harry Potter and I, and one of those things it is my great privilege and honor to reveal to you all. He turned and nodded at the house elf in the corner, who walked over with an easel covered in a dark cloth. Prentice walked over and lifted the cloth as he said, "The garden's home for children, in honor of Pansy Potter and in memory of Lily Evans Potter." He pulled the cloth off, revealing an architectural drawing of an orphanage. He turned back to Harry and raised his glass. "So that no child ever will have to go through what Harry did growing up. My toast is thus, to those children." Everyone around the table shouted their approval, as Pansy turned to him, tears in her eyes. He nodded back at her unspoken question, and she left her chair to hug him around the neck and rain kisses on his lips and cheeks. She sat on his lap and held him close, and he put his arms around her waist. With a choking voice, he spoke up. "The orphanage will hire only the best caregivers, with extensive background checks and interviews. The building itself will be warded in a way no building has been since the castle at Hogwarts before the battle. If she is interested," and he grinned at Kirsten, "my mother-in-law will be in charge of the entire orphanage. Any child who loses their parents for any reason will be welcomed there, loved and protected." At the mention of her name, Pansy's mother turned and beamed at him. "I could not possibly be more honored to accept that son," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I will cherish the responsibility you have offered me." Harry smiled back at her. "I can't think of anyone better suited to the task, Mum." After dinner, everyone found seats in the great room. Pansy sat at the piano, softly playing. Harry was almost, but not quite surprised that she could play the piano. As he thought about it, it actually made sense. He touched her shoulder and then walked over to where Hermione had her nose in a book. "Find anything interesting, Hermione?" he said, and sat down next to her on the sofa. Hermione looked up at him, and he was surprised to see her eyes wet with tears. Harry," she stuttered. Harry blinked. Hermione never stuttered. "What's wrong, Myone?" he said, and Ron moved from the other side of the room to kneel next to her on her other side, his face full of concern. Hermione shook her head vigorously. "Nothing wrong at all, Harry." "Ron," she lowered the book and pointed at a passage. "This book has a counterspell for Obliviate. It fully restores memories." "Fully," she said the last firmly. She looked at Ron and kissed him, then looked at Harry. "I can bring my parents back to me." Hermione's revelation confused some of the people in the room. "But Obliviate can be reversed, at least to an extent," Prentice said, and Kirsten and Pansy nodded. Harry shook his head. "Not always. It depends on the strength of the wizard or witch casting it. In Hermione's case, she cast it on her parents to prevent them from being hurt by Riddle during the last year of the war. She didn't want them to have any link to her, so that he couldn't torture them and find her." He put his hand on Hermione's shoulder. "One thing I learned in school, teaching the other students in the DA, was that the intent behind a spell can affect how strongly it's cast. The torture curse, for example. As the late Bellatrix said, you have to mean it, or it doesn't work. Hermione's fear for her parents was so great that she didn't just erase their memories of her. She erased her existence from their lives completely. We tried after the battle to bring them back, but nothing could be done. They were in St. Mungo's for a while, but nobody could bring back any memories." He leaned over and looked at what Hermione had her finger on. That very well might work, Myone, but you have to be the one to cast it. You and Ron should go try that tomorrow." The rest of the group took a greater interest in the books and knickknacks around the room and spent a very pleasant evening. After everyone but the newlyweds had left for their own homes, Harry took Pansy in his arms and kissed her. "I can't believe we're going to have a child." He looked down to her, his eyes shining. He'd been smiling almost the entire day since she had told him the news. She looked back up at him, eyes bright, and returned his broad smile. "I know, but we are, and I don't think I could be any happier than I am here in this moment." Her smile turned wicked. "At least until after I have the baby, and I've gotten over the temporary hatred of you that the birth will cause." "Oh yes," she said as his eyes widened. I was there when Astoria had Scorpius, and if she'd had a wand, Draco would be missing appendages. She reached up and touched Harry's cheek. But don't get me wrong. You will be in that delivery room with me, holding my hand and my shoulders, and I will hate you so very much for a short time, and you'll love every moment of it. He just shook his head. Maybe I need to find a spell for childbirth. He trailed off as he made to pull away from her. Oh, no, you don't, mister, Pansy said, pulling at his wrist. First, you need to make proper love with your wife in your new home. He followed her willingly. Yes, Mrs. Potter, that I can do. As the months went by, the couple settled into a routine. Every Saturday afternoon, the entire family, all 3 branches, came together for a visit and dinner. The adults played games with the kids, and games with the adults, and the many books were perused. Hermione found a series of books in the library about the other wizarding schools in the world. There are 11 major ones, you see, she explained to Pansy as she was looking through them. I wonder if there's anything on the smaller schools, and if anyone is working on bringing the schools back into communication now that the war is over. Pansy lay on the sofa in the sitting area of the library, her belly swollen now as she neared her due date. Probably not. Over the last 25 years, isolation became the rule, not the exception. I think Quidditch is the only place you can find people from any of the other schools, save the disastrous Tri-Wizard tournament, which I heard will not be happening again. She shuddered. That was insane. I didn't even like Harry then, and I was scared he'd be killed. Hermione looked over at her. That was probably your soul bond showing its awakening. She paused, lost in thought for a moment. Speaking of that, when you give birth, it should be interesting. I need to find that book. You and Harry may need to be better prepared if you share that moment. She dashed off suddenly, headed for the great room. Pansy looked at the door as Hermione ran out it and grunted. Great. Leave me here like a great old cow, she muttered to herself as she started the laborious process of levering herself up off the couch. As she twisted and turned to find leverage, she found strong arms around her shoulders, and then she was lifted from the couch and set gently on the floor. Harry's loving gaze found hers, and he smiled. Felt some surprise from you and was headed this way already, he said to her unspoken question. They'd gotten more used to anticipating each other over the time since they'd been married, but sometimes she was still taken aback at how intuitive he was with her. Is something wrong, love? She shrugged. I'm not sure. Myoni said something about the soul bond and the baby's birth and then took off out of here in search of a book. Said we need to be prepared. She smirked. I wonder if she thinks you're going to feel the birth too. That's exactly what I think, Hermione said, re-entering the room. She looked up from her book to see Harry standing next to Pansy, one arm protective and caring around her shoulders, the other hand carefully resting on her swollen belly. Pansy mirrored his stance. Harry, how often do you stand next to Pansy like that? He frowned. What do you mean? Hermione gestured at his hand, with one arm around her and one hand over the baby. Harry and Pansy both looked down at where their hands were on her belly. He shrugged. I'm not sure. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Pansy looked thoughtful. You do it all the time, actually, now that I think about it. Anytime you're next to me, your hand is next to mine on my belly. She looked over at Hermione, who was grinning, her eyes unfocused. What, Hermione? Hermione just shook her head and laughed. Oh, you two are going to be great parents. Your bond is expanding to include your child, if you could see your auras right now. Wait. She blinked, her eyes coming back into focus. Pansy, do twins run in your family? Pansy's eyes widened as she realized what Hermione was saying and opened her mouth. Dad, Mum, she yelled, pulling from Harry's grasp as she went to find her parents. Harry and Hermione followed her out to where Kirsten was playing the piano in the great room and Prentice was playing gobstones with Victoire and Teddy. Her parents looked up as she entered. What's wrong, dear? Kirsten asked. Mum, do twins run in the family? Pansy asked bluntly, now aware of Harry's motions as he walked up next to her and put his arm and hand around her. Kirsten blinked and looked over at Prentice. Not in my family, but I believe your father's grandfather had a twin, didn't he, love? Prentice nodded at them. They're not all that common, but it has happened a few times. Why do you ask? Oh, he said as he suddenly realized. He stood up and walked over to her. You're having twins, Hermione chuckled behind them. Look at their auras, Mr. Parkinson. The older man did so, and his eyes widened. You are carrying two, indeed. He embraced Harry and Pansy and turned to Kirsten. Looks like we'll be needing to buy baby things all over again, love. Pansy started to object, but her mother raised a hand. We told you before. We know you don't need the help, but we have to spoil those children like two sets of grandparents, so you'll just need to get over it. She smiled at them. Pansy muttered, shaking her head, and Harry just laughed. He held his wife closely and kissed the top of her head. "I think we can handle that, Mum," he said. He turned his head to Hermione. "Now about that sharing the birth thing." The private room at St. Mungo's echoed with Pansy's cries and Harry's simultaneous gasps. Hermione had been right. They were indeed sharing the birth. Harry found it a very strange sensation, but not entirely unpleasant. For Pansy's part, she hoped that he was feeling the pain as much as she was, although it did not seem to be as bad as Astoria's had been. "I think sharing the pain," she gasped in between spasms, "lessened it some." Harry's hand clutched hers and his breathing matched hers. "I hope that's true another one," he said as she had another contraction and the Mediwitch between her raised knees looked up. "I need you to give me a big push now, Pansy. I can see the head and your baby is ready to join the rest of us. 1, 2, 3, push," Pansy cried out as she bore down and pushed with all she had. The wailing cries of the baby filled the room a moment later and she sagged back on the bed. "It's a girl," the Mediwitch said brightly as she wrapped a blanket around the small child and handed her to another to be cleaned and swaddled. "And her sibling is not to be denied. Here comes the other one. Deep breaths, Pansy. Ready, and 1, 2, 3. Push." Pansy sucked air in and bore down again, Harry's encouragements in her ear. With another deep breath, she pushed again. "And this one is a boy," the woman said, wrapping and handing him to a second healer. Harry sat in the chair next to the bed where Pansy lay. He was holding their daughter carefully up against him while Pansy held their son. Slowly the door opened and Prentice and Kirsten entered. Pansy looked up at her parents and smiled tiredly. "Hey, Mum, Dad." Harry looked up and smiled at them as well. "I think she means Nan and Granddad properly. Come meet your grandchildren." He looked over at his wife. "Meet James Sirius Potter." He looked down at the beautiful, perfect girl in his arms and continued. "And Lilith Luna Potter." Prentice and Kirsten oohed and awed over the bobbies. "They're perfect in every way," he said, leaning over to kiss his daughter's forehead. Kirsten gave Harry a warm hug and kiss on the cheek and then took Prentice's hand. "We know you both need some rest. We just have to give the rest of the family a report on the bobbies. Everyone wants to meet them, but we convinced them to wait until tomorrow at the earliest." Pansy smiled up at her mother. "I'm sure that will be fine. Can you send the healer in when you go out? I want to get these two settled in their cribs before Harry and I pass out holding them." Kirsten nodded, and they said their goodbyes and walked through the door. A moment later, 2 young healers came in, one with blankets and one with 2 glasses. She set the glasses on the table by the bed, while the young man handed a blanket to Harry and one to Pansy. "Drink up, Mr. and Mrs. Potter. You need to replenish your strength. We'll get the babes settled down for the night. Mr. Potter, I need to inform you that bed is not built for 2 and it will resist transfiguration, but your chair will unfold into a passable bed if you insist on staying, and I'm sure you will," the male healer said as he took the baby girl from Harry's arms. "I understand," Harry said and reached for the potion nearest him. At the healer's nod, he took it and Pansy followed suit. "Good night, my bobbies," Harry whispered and smiled at Pansy. "All of my loves." A few days later, a much-restored Pansy and Harry carried their children into their home and took them into the nursery. Ron and Hermione followed with the tower of gifts that had collected since the twins' births, setting the gifts and luggage down in a corner of the room. Hermione took James from Harry's arms as he helped Pansy settle Lily down for a nap, and then handed him over to Pansy. Pansy put him into his crib and watched over the tiny body carefully. Harry said softly, "Winky." The house elf entered the room. "Yes, master." Harry sighed. He'd never be able to get her to call him anything else. "Winky, meet our son and daughter, James and Lily. You've taken care of bobbies before, haven't you?" Winky nodded up at Harry. "Yes, master. Winky has watched over many bobbies of wizards." "Good then. These 2 are your charges then, especially if Pansy or I am not in the room. If they cry or need us, please come get us immediately." "They should sleep for a while now. Just keep watch over them," Harry instructed her. Winky nodded. "Winky will watch master's children extra carefully." Harry took Pansy's hand and walked from the nursery with her, Hermione and Ron following them. They walked downstairs to the library. Pansy and Hermione sat down on the couch, and Harry walked over to the bar and poured 2 drinks. He handed one to Ron and poured glasses of water for the girls. He sat down on Pansy's other side, and she immediately snuggled tiredly into his side. Ron sat down in a chair where he could reach Hermione's hand, and the foursome sat there quietly, drinking their beverages for several moments. Hermione broke the silence. So what was it like? Ron was out of the country when Rose made her surprise entrance, and he wasn't able to make it back in time. Pansy pulled Harry's arm around her as she replied. It was quite interesting. I was there when Astoria had Scorpius, and she seemed to be in a great deal more pain than I was feeling. I think Harry sharing it actually lessened it overall, rather than him just feeling the pain I felt. Harry nodded. That's what I think too. I could feel her pain and I felt her pushing, but it felt supportive and helpful, like the bond between us was trying to equalize it between us, letting me buffer what she could handle. His wife nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking, love. Hermione squeezed Ron's hand and closed her eyes. Good. Ronald Bilious Weasley, you are not allowed to be away from me when I give birth this time, because your family's predisposition towards twins is well known, and I have a feeling it's going to continue. Harry and Pansy laughed at the look on Ron's face, and Hermione joined in. Ron gradually went from shocked to embarrassed and laughed along with them. Bloody hell, he said, shaking his head. Hermione had indeed given birth to twins this time. For at least a temporary time, Ron and Hermione had moved into one wing of the Potter Manor so that Winky could watch all 4 Bobbies. Pansy had recovered from giving birth and went back to work part-time at her boutique. Harry met with Prentice on a weekly basis to go over the family investments and properties, nodding with great amusement that his family now owned every building on Nocturne Alley. He looked up at his father-in-law and smiled. These properties, he indicated with his finger, are long overdue for inspections, I would think. Prentice laughed. I'd say they are indeed, and rent for these buildings is not at the standard of other buildings in the same area. Harry nodded, eyes bright. Follow the inspection reports up with that information. Make sure there's at least one Auror on the inspection teams as well, I think. If the shops protest, show them the new rental agreements we drew up. He heard a coo and turned to see Pansy walking in with their children on her hips. He walked quickly over and took Lily from her, kissing his daughter's tiny forehead and whispering loving words to her. He leaned over to kiss Pansy on the top of her head and then turned back to Prentice, who was already reaching out for James. Harry took a moment to consider his life. Almost 5 years ago, he had left the world of magic, convinced that he had no chance at a happy life. He now had a beautiful, loving wife, 2 beautiful children, and an extended family that he didn't think he could be closer to if they had been blood-related. Turns out, he thought to himself, there truly is a chance for everyone to be happy. Front page of the Daily Prophet. The return of Harry Potter Parker Harrison, contributor The Boy Who Lived, after a 5-year absence from the wizarding world, has returned. Sightings have been reported over the last 2 years, but aside from a trip to Gringotts, nothing could be confirmed, until now. Mr. Potter stated that his fame and popularity was a major contributing factor in his absence. Everywhere I turned, someone was asking me for an autograph or trying to introduce me to someone. I didn't have any freedom to live my life. I couldn't even do my job as an Auror because people wouldn't answer questions or let me investigate things. Finally, he told me, he decided to resign his job with the ministry and disappear into the Muggle world. As with other things he attempted in his life, he was quite successful at this. After 3 years went by, Mr. Potter ran into an old school acquaintance, and to the detriment of the most eligible bachelor list in Witch Weekly, has since married her in a private ceremony, and they are now the very proud parents of twins. Mr. Potter and his father-in-law, Pansy Parkinson, have entered into a business arrangement that has resulted with the Potter Duchy opening the Gardens home for children. An orphanage with the aim of providing a safe, warm, and loving home for all children without homes of their own. The Gardens is the most well-protected building in all of the United Kingdom, equal to Gringotts Bank and Hogwarts School. A strenuous application process is required for all employees, and Pansy Parkinson manages the home with extremely high standards for the care of the children. In other business moves, the Potter Duchy now owns all buildings in Nocturne Alley and has begun a strenuous inspection process of the businesses operating there. Mr. Potter stated the goal is to clean up that dark street and make it as welcoming and friendly as Diagon Alley for all witches and wizards, regardless of age or bloodline. This reporter has also learned that, thanks to the last will and testament of Sirius Black, the last head of the ancient and most noble House of Black, Mr. Potter, was named heir to that house. Information has also been revealed that the Peveril family line, once thought lost, is alive and well in Mr. Potter's family. Mr. Potter has reconciled these 3 family lines into one duchy, of which he has claimed the Potter line. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Lupin, née Tonks, head the House of Black, and Ronald Weasley and Hermione Weasley, née Granger, head the House of Peveril. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley have also announced the birth of their twin girls. Mr. and Mrs. Potter respectfully ask that their family be given their privacy when at home. Business affairs can be directed via Mr. Parkinson's offices in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Potter is opening a secondary location of her dress boutique in the building next to her father's offices, and Mr. Potter will be opening a tavern and inn nearby as well.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to my channel.